This kid entered the Magic Academy and everyone thought he was a genius. But when the tests started, Lewin Ardell had no true talent for magic. It didn't take long for other students to humiliate him for being a failure and coming from a poor family. When just words weren't enough to humiliate him, they tried force. But what they didn't know was that Lewin didn't accept insults about his family. When the bully crossed the line, Lewin punched him right in the face, sending him flying. Then he said, "I'm not good at magic, but I still have my fists." Speechless, the blonde kid asked his friend for help. The stronger kid tried to throw a punch and got surprised too. The MC dodged and hit him in the stomach with a super punch. The one who was being humiliated before is now the only one standing, farming aura infinitely. But that's when things stopped being just a fight. The blonde kid used real magic, something that would be fatal if it hit a person. The professor showed up exactly at that time, the moment to see a student turn into a piece of charcoal right in front of him. But the result was different. The kid had a dream. A giant creature in front of him said the boy was his reincarnation on Earth, of the powerful Darko, the World Eater. When he opened his eyes, Lewin saw a beautiful woman in front of him, so he thought maybe he actually died and was in paradise. But the girl calmed him down. She is Helen, a high-class healer, and this is the advanced recovery room. Confused, the kid says he remembers nothing but a weird dream. The blonde girl warns him that he slept for a whole day, so he must be dizzy. Something even more surprising is that Lewin's body has no injuries. That is a miracle. Being hit by electric attack magic is highly dangerous. Not even the protagonist knows what happened in that moment. Then the professor from before came to the room to question the kid. He revealed that the two students were expelled from the academy for using combat magic outside the field, and because of bullying. Hearing this, Lewin admits he also beat up the boys and is partly to blame. So the professor gives him 1 month of volunteer service as punishment. Combat Professor Heidel wasn't there to give info, but to ask something. If Lewin has the artifact, obviously the protagonist didn't know what that artifact was and didn't have one. But the professor didn't give up, because he saw a red energy protect Lewin's whole body during the attack. That is something only a legendary artifact could do. But since the kid really seemed to have no idea what an artifact was, the professor gave up on the idea. The protagonist remembered the weird dream from before. The creature said something about a status window. When he repeated those words, magically the blue window shined in front of him. At the same moment, the beautiful healer returned to the room. The MC got totally scared and asked if she was seeing it too. The girl just said that if he is having hallucinations, that's a problem. In that case, Lewin admitted it was just a joke, and he wasn't seeing any shiny blue window. So the blonde mage authorized him to go back to the dorm since he is fine. Later that day, Lewin went to the training field during the night. Standing on the training grounds, the status window appeared, now with an addition. A simple quest, categorized as repeatable, popped up with its details explained. Rolling up his sleeves, Lewin questioned what physical training would do for a mage. Taking a deep breath, he chose to ignore his doubts and decided to try. He threw a punch into the air to test his strength, then another as the quest counter climbed. Smiling with satisfaction, he watched the numbers rise. Lewin threw another punch into the air, but this time, he seemed to miss the execution. He realized that even the slightest error wouldn't count towards the objective. Under the moonlight and the night breeze, panting, breathing heavily, and drenched in sweat, he persisted. After a considerable amount of time, the young man finally succeeded, lifting his head with a small, satisfied, and victorious smile. As he cleaned himself after training, the status window popped up to inform him about the reward. Before he could truly grasp what it was, something inside him seemed to shift. He stared at his arm, feeling something new begin to course through his veins. Even without understanding what it was, he now had an undeniable certainty. Lewin was stronger. Letting curiosity get the better of him, the young man decided to test this reward. He threw a punch into the air with even more power than before. Strength, speed, even air resistance. A smile spread across his face as he saw everything had improved. Satisfied, Lewin grew even more eager to discover what these unlocked abilities were. He summoned the status window to learn more. His first unlocked ability was called Circle of Strength. The protagonist's expression was ambiguous at first, but he soon seemed to grasp its implications. Practitioners of magic arts create mana circles around their heart, based on depth and control. Lewin had been born with 4 more circles than others his age, but his condition made them effectively useless. But now, with the ability he'd gained, his mana circles had vanished, replaced by something different, something else spinning in their place. The sensation, so utterly different, was enough to leave him stunned. However, his mind quickly turned to what this change made him. He grew disheartened by the possibility that this might mean the end of his future as a mage. Yet he quickly convinced himself it was too soon to think such things, evoking the very magic that had always been his greatest failure, a fireball. He was impressed by the speed of its conjuration, and of course the much more powerful sensation it conveyed. In that empty training yard, Lewin had finally understood the potential and power of an artifact. By the very nature of magic, evocation usually took at least 10 seconds, but in that moment, he had bypassed that requirement to create the fireball. Dismissing the magic and clenching his fist, Lewin was still awestruck by the artifact's power. While he was distracted, the system window popped up, explaining another one of his abilities, Madness Mage. It explained that by imbuing his own body parts with magic, he could overcome the same problem he'd suffered from. With an impressed look, the young man wondered how anyone could even conceive of such a thing. But Lewin had no time for admiration. The system quickly presented another quest. It was simple, just test his new abilities against a physical target. Narrowing his eyes in thought, the young man steeled his resolve. He braced himself and swiftly punched one of the straw targets nearby. As he attacked, he conjured a fireball, imbuing his strike with it. A satisfied smile spread across his face as he saw the technique work firsthand. And once again, for a completed quest, he was rewarded. Afterward, he collapsed, tired and utterly drained, lying on the ground after all those events. His face showed not satisfaction, but deep contemplation. Finally able to unleash magic, he grew curious about what kind of person Draca truly was, but exhaustion won out, and before he knew it, he'd fallen asleep. He was woken by the worried voices of his classmates. Lewin slowly opened his eyes and stood up, unfazed by the scare he'd given the others. He brushed off having fallen asleep in the middle of the training yard. One student even questioned if he'd been drinking or something, but all the protagonist replied was that he'd slept purely out of exhaustion, then left without another word, leaving behind the distinct feeling that this wasn't the Lewin they knew. Looking back, one of them noticed something. One of the straw dummies was utterly destroyed, surrounded by ashes. Still early in the day, our hero returned to his dorm room, only to run into Jason brushing his teeth. Jason asked if he'd spent the night out or something, his tone slightly concerned yet curious. After all, it was rare for the guy to leave the academy. Assuming the protagonist might have been with a girl, Lewin, ignoring his friend's teasing, tossed his jacket at him and headed for a shower. Finally, he washed away all the fatigue from his training session. Taking advantage of his moment of rest, Lewin checked the new quest that had arrived. It was the repeatable quest, with a doubled goal, but the same reward. Seeing that things wouldn't be easy, the boy sank deeper into the tub, shrugging off the challenges because this was what it meant to become a mage. With that in mind, a month passed, with him completing quests daily. He discovered things like his progress resetting if he missed even a single day, which forced him to train daily without fail, even if it meant skipping leg day. Even though it was a tough daily routine to maintain, luckily the system didn't exceed 3,000 repetitions per training session. Adjusting his posture and preparing to finish, his dedication had kept him at this relentless pace for the past month, and of course with some new rewards along the way. He was now armed with the new body arts ability. Time continued to tick by, seemingly without much change. Perhaps for Lewin, but his classmates whispered about how strange he'd been acting, while he simply slept peacefully through class. He moved from the classroom to the academy's massive library. Alongside his training, our hero searched for clues about Draca. However, it was a fruitless quest, yielding no information about the World Destroyer, his status window, or his player title. The young man found himself at a dead end. Not even the system panel offered any hint about the entity that granted him such power. But Lewin's thoughts were soon interrupted by someone calling his name. Jason asked if he'd heard the news, and was visibly disappointed when it became clear our protagonist was still in the dark. In response, the young man simply asked what big event had transpired. He was stunned to learn the event was a visit from the head of House Ardell. His own father was there to see him, leaving the boy utterly shocked. Without wasting a moment, the young man bolted. Panting, he called out for his father, who was calmly chatting with Professor Heidel. Smiling warmly at the sight of Lewin, and happy he was there, they moved to a more private spot to catch up. The young man immediately started by asking how his father's life was going and if he was well. Next, he inquired about his sister, Luina, who was still diligently training in swordsmanship for his sake. Embarrassed by the update on her situation, the boy chuckled. Shifting the mood of the conversation, our hero spoke in a more serious tone. Looking deep into his father's eyes, he declared he was fine, which left his father slightly confused by the sudden change of topic. Taking a sip of his tea, his father seemed to ponder his words. Setting down the cup, his father revealed that his visit visit today was to confirm if Lewin was considering giving up, if things were too difficult, if he faced problems he couldn't speak about, he would always have a place back home. In response to his father's gravity, the reason for the visit became painfully clear. Our protagonist then made a solemn promise to his father. In the upcoming test, he would achieve excellent results. Otherwise, his father could decide his fate as he saw fit. The long-awaited day arrived. A professor rapped his baton, demanding everyone's attention. He stressed that on the day of the magic introduction exam, anyone caught cheating would face instant failure. Nervous, our protagonist, Lewin, began his exam, split into written and practical sections. The practical exam was segmented into target practice, magic power measurement, live combat, and one-on-one duels. Due to his summoning disorder, Mikkel Garyhill always achieved the best results in the practical exam, but Lewin was convinced things would be different this time, confident he would claim first place. Days after the theoretical exams, the practicals finally began. Lewin, lost in thought, was called by Jason. His friend remarked that he was acting strange and asked if he had a plan for today's exam. Lewin replied that he would try a different method, prompting Jason to question him further. But their conversation is cut short by someone else, who demands to know what Lewin is doing there. It's Mikkel, and with a sneer, he asks if the kid is actually taking the exam. Lewin fires back, stating it's obvious he is, which makes Mikkel laugh. Placing a hand on Lewin's shoulder, he offers some advice for someone who's failed the exam 6 times, just like him. Instead of humiliating himself further, he should just give up now. With a sarcastic grin, Lewin replies that the advice doesn't sound very helpful, but Mikkel insists, saying someone with that disorder shouldn't even bother trying. Then, gritting his teeth, he vows to crush Lewin in a one-on-one fight. Soon after, the first exam begins, multi-target shooting. This test measures how many targets a person can hit with a single spell. However, this year, the exam is tougher, with targets constantly moving. One by one, participants are called up and struggle to hit their marks. Because of this, the average scores are abysmal. Some students barely manage to hit 3 targets. The organizers lament the students' poor performance, realizing this year's graduating class quality is terrible. But one of the professors says it's too early to be disappointed. Professor Elric announces that it's Mikkel's turn now, and everyone should pay close attention. Slowly, Mikkel approaches the testing area. With both hands channeling blue flame magic, he's ready. The flames in his hands begin to surge. Clearly, he's planning something big. The command to begin is given. The blonde unleashes his magic towards the targets, striking multiple wooden dummies in a single blast, astonishing all the spectators. In the organizer's room, Mikkel's proud uncle asks what the others thought. With a smile, the man declares that Mikkel will surely become the grand representative of this year's festival. But an old man with a white beard and hair tells Elric to stop talking. The man is Tyrion Ignat, who says they've seen enough of this year's graduates. However, Professor Heidel asks them to watch a little longer, as Lewin is next. In that case, considering the young man's passion, the elder decides to watch a bit more. With a confident smile, Lewin thinks this is a perfect opportunity to test his strength. As soon as the judge gives the command to start, the young man begins to charge a fireball in the palm of his hand. Everything around him begins to blaze with fire. The professors are stunned by the kid's casting speed, and the students are equally dumbfounded. Mikkel smirks and tells his classmates that Lewin, with his evocation disorder, won't be able to hit the targets. And while he's busy calling the protagonist useless trash, incapable of doing anything, Lewin is already using his abilities to manipulate time and boost his speed to absurd levels. This is his temporal refraction ability, which allows him to move at incredible speeds for 30 seconds, reaching any location. In other words, Lewin is now truly an overwhelming typhoon of fire. The entire area is engulfed in flames and sparks. From above, the professors and organizers watch everything intently, and the students look utterly shocked too, because, with sheer confidence and explosive effort, Lewin pulled it off. The wooden targets are shattered to pieces. A surprised judge announces that Lewin hit 27 targets. Whispers spread among the students, who can barely believe their eyes. Applause echoes from the organizer's room. Even Mr. Ignat stands to praise the protagonist, and some students begin to celebrate his impressive performance. Mikkel, seething with rage, wonders how Lewin pulled off such a feat. Lewin now receives cheers and recognition from everyone, something he never had in the past 6 years. On the other hand, Lewin feels a warm satisfaction, something he'd always yearned for. Professor Elric is incredulous, claiming he's never seen anyone conjure magic and hit targets simultaneously. Professor Heidel counters, stating that the realm of magic is limitless and full of infinite possibilities. He adds that if everything went as expected, it wouldn't be magic, but mathematics. Elric continues to argue, but Mr. Ignat raises his hand. He declares that today he witnessed a flawless miracle of magic, created by a student. However, it seems some professors hold a different opinion. Mikkel's uncle is furious, thinking Lewin caused caused a huge commotion. Meanwhile, Jason grabs the protagonist's neck, shouting, "The Archmage is coming in!" Now, Lewin is incredibly popular, and all the students gather, curious to learn more about him. But the young man finds the situation strange. Just yesterday, he was just a lonely nobody. Everything changed suddenly, and he knows there are still many people who dislike him. But upon reaching his room, Mikkel is waiting for him. With a serious expression, Lewin asks, "What are you doing in someone else's room?" The blonde boy says he came to warn him not to brag about gaining a few points with something that isn't even magic. Lewin in turn counters, asking, "Aren't you just being a sore loser?" This infuriates Mikkel, who grabs Lewin's collar with hatred. Calmly, Lewin simply holds his provocateur's hand. Mikkel immediately feels a strange sensation and looks at his hand, startled. Not quite understanding where such strength came from, the blonde boy wonders how this could be happening. Stepping closer to Mikkel, Lewin says, "We can fight one-on-one." With a tug, Mikkel manages to free his hand from Lewin's. He asks, "Do you really think you're qualified to fight me, considering you've only gotten low scores these past few years?" With a serious gaze, Lewin replies, "You'll just have to wait and see if I am or not." As he leaves the room, Mikkel orders, "Don't fail the next exam, Lewin." He exits, his heart heavy with resentment, convinced Lewin will definitely fail today's practical exam. Then, Mikkel feels the pain of the squeeze on the hand in his pocket. Looking at it again, he wonders if Lewin truly is a mage. The day is sunny with few clouds in the sky. The boys comment on the stone statue, and it's time for the second practical exam, Magic Power Measurement. Kingram's statue is the test object. Students must conjure magic on it to receive a score. Lewin confirms with his friend if all they need to do is hit the statue with the magic they trust most. But the ogre statue is famous for yielding low scores. A participant unleashes a lightning storm spell on the statue. A sinister voice echoes from it, declaring the mage only earned 1 point. To make matters worse, the voice humiliates him further, telling the kid to just give up on magic. Next up is a girl with a ponytail and a confident smile. She slowly raises her hand, asking everyone to watch closely. Immediately after, she unleashes an ice spell towards the statue. The ogre's voice says it will definitely remember her, because that was truly impressive, and then completes its thought by calling her a truly irredeemable piece of trash. The girl only gets 2 points and bursts into tears. Other participants continue, earning deplorable scores and a barrage of gratuitous humiliations. Jason starts to pick a fight with the statue, and the judge orders him back to his spot. Then it's Mikkel Garyhill's turn. With a focused gaze, Mikkel unleashes his magic with both hands towards the statue. The attack strikes multiple parts of the ogre statue's body. The statue declares it's quite disappointed and asks, "Are you, by any chance, Josh Garyhill's son?" Smiling, Mikkel proudly states, "I am Josh's proud third son." Kingram retorts, "Your father was an idiot who cried and begged for more points. And you, Blondie, are even less talented than him. You'll get 27 points. The judge tells Mikkel to calm down and announces, "Next up is Lewin Ardell." With a scowl, Lewin thinks to himself, "Why am I so nervous?" Clenching his fist and charging his fire magic, he tries to focus. Before unleashing his attack, he introduces himself to the statue. Kingram replies, "It's the first time I've seen that face, but it doesn't matter. Just continue the exam, kid." The spectators notice Lewin is charging a flame mana burst. "That's a 4th class spell!" Even Kingram is surprised, analyzing Lewin's stance. Then, Lewin leaps to gain momentum. He lands right next to the statue, preparing his firepower. Focused, he strikes the ogre first with his foot. The judge gapes, seeing Lewin transfer the magic from his fist to his foot and unleash it in an instant. And the spectators realize they were wrong. That's at least a 5th class spell. Finally, Lewin lands on the ground, perfectly balanced. Everyone starts to wonder if Lewin might be a much stronger mage than they ever imagined. But Kingram's reaction is a bit strange, and Lewin wonders what's going on. The ogre simply asks, "Who is that kid?" Lewin tries to say he already introduced himself, but the statue cuts him off, asking, "Are you Draka?" Because Kingram has been waiting for Draka. The student spectators start to whisper, "Who is Draka?" The person Kingram mentioned? The protagonist has researched countless books in recent months and found nothing about him, yet Kingram seems to know him well. So, the boy asks, "Are you familiar with this individual?" And the statue replies, "Yes." Sweating, the young man asks, "Can you tell me more about Draka?" The ogre finds the situation quite intriguing, as it never expected to find Draka's incarnation in this academy. It asks the boy's name again, then confirms, "I will remember that name, Lewin Ardell." The statue was already retreating when Lewin asked if it could tell him his previous score. But Kingram replied that the evaluation was over, as that magic was beyond his judgment. The judge tried to argue, stating it was a school contract that had to be upheld, but it wasn't enough. This only angered the ogre, who claimed he'd evaluated kids who didn't even look like mages for years. He declared that Ignite could go to hell, but since it was a contract, he would assign a score. To the protagonist's surprise, Kingram asked what score the boy preferred, 0 or 100 points. With a smile, Lewin said it was obvious he wanted the 100 points. After this incident, the boy's 100 points became the talk of the academy, and once again our protagonist had caused another incident. Professor Heidel approached and said the dean had heard about his score and wanted to give him a reward. He handed him a small rolled-up paper. The young man read the words, "Artifact Room," and asked, "What's this about?" But the professor didn't answer and just asked him to follow. They made their way to a dark room and began descending a flight of stairs. Heidel said that this part of the academy was the only forbidden area. Knowing this, Lewin became even more confused, not understanding why he was being taken there. The professor stopped before a door and stated that this was the artifact room, and he could only go this far. A little nervous, the protagonist asked if he should continue alone, but since it was a reward, the boy decided to enter. The room was colossal, filled with countless objects that radiated immense value. Observing everything around, the young man imagined that this must be Archmage Freud Ignite's magical warehouse, but a voice suddenly startled him, cutting through the silence. "You seem lost." It was Kingram, also present in the room, who remarked that the boy didn't seem to know his own worth. However, this time, the ogre was no longer a stone statue. The ogre explained that this place was the only one where he was allowed to use his original body. Lewin asked what the monster meant by not knowing his own worth. Kingram replied that it was precisely that. The young man had no clue. He was using the same artifact as Draca, the player, a rare artifact unlike anything else in the world. Then the ogre asked how he got it and what his relationship with Draca was. Lewin replied that he was also very curious about it and asked, "Who the hell is Draca?" The ogre's red eyes gleamed, fixing on the protagonist's face. He explained that Draca was a being who wanted to become a god. One day, Draca came to visit the Sky Peak tribe, of which Kingram was a part. His power was immense, growing stronger with each passing day, making him impossible for the tribe to defeat. The ogres respected him, so Draca lived among the monsters as a member of the tribe. And he also taught Kingram, who was the tribe's chief, his language and magic for almost 100 years. This left Lewin utterly stunned. A human living for 100 years? That was unheard of. Smiling, the ogre replied that the being was not human. His true identity was the black dragon Dracagonia. Utterly incredulous, the protagonist stammered, struggling to grasp that dragons were real. The young man had heard of dragons as the origin of magic, but believed it was all just legend. Kingram then revealed that Draca couldn't use magic, so he developed a fighting style similar to Lewin's, channeling magic through his hands and feet. Lewin finally understood, realizing Draca was likely treated just like him in the past. But Draca forged a unique ability, a singular way to wield magic that only he could master. With this power, he became stronger than anyone else in the world. Yet still unsatisfied, he kept pushing his power, ultimately destroying everything, and himself. Fear gripped Lewin as he connected the dots, finally grasping why Draca was known as the World Destroyer. His status screen flashed, granting him new abilities, the power to communicate with ogres and an enhancement skill. Now, clutching a glowing orb named Strang, the very embodiment of power, he wondered what it was. Kingram explained it was a quest reward and asked to examine the orb. After a careful look, the ogre confirmed, "It's Strang. It's not an item. It's an incarnation." Lewin held the object tightly, still not quite understanding its purpose. The ogre added that, given its current state, Draca must have sealed it within this spirit stone when he died. This being, a spirit with a disgusting personality, promised infinite power if Lewin satisfied its desires. In short, an incarnation would be born from that orb. Suddenly, the stone began to crack and glow, then shattered. It transformed into a tiny creature, small enough to fit in his palm, a tiny brown bear cub. Rubbing its eyes, the little creature began to complain. "That brat called me a bear." Lewin couldn't fathom how a bear could speak his language. Pointing its cute little paw at him, the furious creature ordered, "Stop treating me like a bear!" Lewin was stunned, unable to respond to the little bear's complaints. With its paws on its hips, the creature declared, "I am not a bear." So Lewin asked, "What are you then?" The little bear replied, "I'm an incarnation. I can be whatever I want." With a defiant look, it announced, "I'll show you my power." Lewin's eyes widened in anticipation. Despite its intense efforts, nothing happened to the incarnation's body. Dumbfounded, the creature wondered, "Where did my power go?" It mused that it must be because it reincarnated on an empty stomach, then demanded food. The boy replied he had no food, and the little bear grumbled, "Why does my master have to be so weak this time?" Giving up on food, it lay down to sleep, asking to be woken for dinner. Kingram interrupted the moment, remarking, "Even after all these years, His personality hasn't changed a bit. Gazing at the boy beside Strang, Kingram recalled ancient times. It brought back memories of Strang and Draca, whom he'd faced in his old hometown. Now, the ogre asked Lewin, what do you intend to do? The power you possess will make you stronger, but what will you do after that? Lewin remembered he had always yearned for this power to protect people from demons, and to reclaim the name Ardell, to proclaim his name to those who had scorned him. Reflecting, the boy understood he had too much to protect to give up this chance. He replied, I will live by my own determination for my people, my family, and for myself. Kingram responded, that's not bad at all. I look forward to the future you'll bring. After that revealing encounter, something significant changed in the boy's routine. He now had Strang's company. The moment Strang heard the word food, he'd start salivating, his eyes gleaming. Feeding the little bear was a daily task. The boy would charge his fire magic as the little bear opened its maw wide, and it always devoured massive amounts. After eating, it would rub its paw across its neck, utterly satisfied. The food Lewin devoured was the raw power he earned from his missions. Strang's unique ability supercharged the hero's growth, proving incredibly useful. As the little bear evolved, the bonus power Lewin received skyrocketed. Once it hit 31 stars, Lewin would wield a staggering 3,100 strength. Even with less than 1,000, he already felt an immense surge of power. Driven to evolve faster, Lewin pressed Strang, asking how Draca had achieved such immense strength. Strang, ever the provocateur, smirked. If you want to know the secret, hero, fetch me a glass of water. Lewin's gaze turned chilling. You don't have to tell me, bear, he growled, if you're keen on starving. There were countless paths to power, tackling tougher missions, forging strength-boosting items, or unearthing ancient artifacts. Even boiling an ogre's tendon could create a potent elixir, but these methods were far beyond his current reach, demanding at least 1,000 strength. So despite his newfound power, Lewin realized he was still just scratching the surface. Lewin trained relentlessly, day after day, until his strength hit 930. That's when the third Royal Combat exam kicked off. He had been eagerly anticipating this day. This exam primarily tested a mage's risk management skills. Jason began his turn, unleashing a blazing fireball, but a moment of carelessness nearly incinerated his knight allies, and just like that, he was disqualified. Foldrin knights participated, ensuring student safety and testing synergy. The exam spanned 10 grueling days, pitting participants against various monsters based on their scores. Days bled into weeks, and on the final day, anticipation crackled. Everyone wondered what monstrous challenge awaited them. A thunderous roar ripped through the air. A hulking orc burst forth, bellowing, its powerful muscles rippling. These aggressive beasts, larger than humans and with comparable intelligence, roamed every corner of the continent. The students were gripped by terror, a chilling thought echoing, could someone actually die from an orc attack? But Professor Heidel stepped forward, his presence a calming force amidst the panic. Mid-test, the orc lunged, pure hatred blazing in its eyes. Frontline shield bearers braced, deflecting its savage blows. Mikkel, currently under examination, began channeling his magic. With outstretched arms, he unleashed an ice arrow. But with shocking agility, the orc dodged. It instantly closed the distance, charging straight for the blonde student ready to strike. Heidel screamed, a desperate warning for his student to dodge. The boy knew he had to retaliate, but fear had him frozen, his body refusing to move. Professor Heidel had no choice but to intervene, unleashing his arboreal prison magic. Thick vines erupted from the ground, ensnaring the orc mere seconds before it could crush the student. The vines held the monster in an iron grip, even coiling around its thick neck. Even bound, the beast thrashed, trying to reach Mikkel, who collapsed onto the ground, trembling, and just like Jason, Mikkel was disqualified. Mikkel's uncle slammed his fist onto the table, rage simmering. Disappointed by his nephew's repeated failure, he knew he had to intervene in Lewin's upcoming test. Professor Elric then questioned the dean. Are you certain we should continue with this exam? Ignat raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Lewin's turn is next. With a sly, fake smile, Elric replied, Indeed, the boy is the only student who achieved a perfect score on the Kingram test. Therefore, testing the other students in the same manner as Lewin seems rather unfair. The dean acknowledged Elric's point, but stated he had no other monsters prepared. However, Elric simply smiled. I do. When the Foldrin Knights brought the orcs, they also captured a powerful ogre. Using an ogre in an exam would be incredibly dangerous, but with Professor Heidel and the knights present, it would be quite a spectacle. And then, they would truly see what Lewin was capable of. The academy corridors were eerily silent. Heidel leaned against the wall, waiting as Lewin approached. The young man seemed surprised to find his professor there. Heidel explained that today, Lewin would face a test far tougher than anyone else's. The academy had sky-high expectations for him, and some felt it was unfair to test him like the others. Lewin Lewin pressed for more details about this difficulty. Yahello then dropped the bomb. The monster wouldn't be an orc, but an ogre. The revelation visibly shocked the boy. The monster's massive hand was bound by thick looping chains. It roared, struggling violently to break free. The knights, too, were preparing, gripping their weapons tightly. Even the captain didn't agree that an ogre should be used in a student test. An ogre could crush a human skull or rip out a spine with a single blow. Lewin turned to his professor, asking, "Are you sure about this?" Yahello replied, "These are the dean's orders." Disagreeing, the captain muttered that people were risking their lives for tests like this. Lewin was acutely aware that he was, indeed, putting his life on the line. As Lewin approached the captain, the knight demanded, "Who are you?" Lewin introduced himself, stating he was the student taking the exam. Observing the participant more closely, the knight grew even more agitated, unable to believe this young man would face an ogre. While it was certain the professor and knights would protect him, Lewin began moving in a different direction. The captain warned him, "That's the wrong way! What are you doing?" His position should be at the rear, behind the knights. But Lewin declared he would fight at the front, explaining, "My spells are far from ordinary." The knight retorted that protecting him at the front would be impossible, asking, "Why are you throwing your life away like this?" Lewin dramatically cast off his cloak, tossing it behind him with a confident gaze. "I'm desperate," he replied, continuing his advance. Yet the captain couldn't sense a single shred of fear emanating from the young man. Professor Yahello approached, telling Lewin to prepare, as the exam would begin any moment. The man snapped his fingers. In that instant, the chains binding the ogre's arms sprang open. A deafening, shrill scream ripped through the air, and the monster lunged at the knights. In a kamikaze move, Lewin leaves the soldiers behind and charges forward. The captain shouts, demanding to know what the boy was doing, yelling for him to stop, but Lewin ignores him. Pulling his arm back, the ogre gathers momentum for a devastating blow. Meanwhile, Lewin unleashes his fireball directly at the monster's body. Their fists collide, creating an impact that lights up the entire area. As flames erupt and fly everywhere, the soldiers can only watch, helpless. The captain realizes the boy used a short-range spell in that critical situation. Yahello observes everything with a serious gaze, and all the watching students feel the raw impact of the battle. Elric and Ignat watch too, looking utterly surprised. For a student to charge into a close-quarters battle against an ogre was completely unthinkable, but as the dust begins to settle, Lewin is still standing. The captain can barely believe the boy is still alive. Yahello lets out a satisfied smirk. The captain places a hand on Lewin's shoulder, calling his name, and scolds him, saying he should have explained his plan beforehand. With a calm voice, Lewin apologizes and asks, "Would you have let me go if I'd told you?" But Lewin doesn't let him answer, adding, "There's no time now, we need to finish the exam." The ogre was still standing, snorting with extreme rage. So the captain tells Lewin to stay back now, acknowledging the boy's strength but emphasizing the extreme danger. The best thing to do was stay put and let him handle it. However, Lewin slowly begins to approach. Even against the captain's orders, he holds his ground on the front line. With a serious look, Lewin declares, "This is my exam. Let me finish it." The ogre, 5 times Lewin's size, glared and snorted at him. Fearless, the boy advanced towards it. There were 2 reasons for his incredible courage. One was his unique ability to communicate with ogres. This allowed Lewin to understand the monster, which was screaming in fear, surrounded by mages and knights. The other was the mission he'd received: attack the enemy first and defeat it. The mission granted 30 additional strength points, and Lewin knew that repeating it daily would be a massive benefit. Knowing this, the boy had no reason to hesitate. After the previous clash of their fists, which had illuminated the entire area, the ogre felt the full force of its opponent. The room was now engulfed in flames and intense heat. Lewin's first objective, to strike first, was accomplished, but it wasn't over yet. Lewin heard the ogre roar a promise to kill him. With a leap, the monster gained momentum and charged straight for the boy. Lewin was ahead of the soldier, who could do little to defend him. The ogre roared, threatening to crush the boy's head. As it struck, its blow slammed into the ground, Lewin having been quick enough to dodge. Dodging, the hero knew he had to find his opponent's weak points. So, he decided to use his temporal refraction ability. The captain was stunned to see the boy move with such speed. Lewin knew he had to get close, fast. Charging from a perfect angle, he spotted an opening, a chance to land a blow directly on the ogre's weak spot. Meanwhile, the knights watched the battle, all of them astonished by the boy's courage. The students watched too, sensing something different about him. Despite Lewin's efforts, the ogre fought back. The colossal monster wound up, unleashing a punch with its massive hand, striking with all its might. But Lewin managed to defend himself, deflecting the enemy's punch with a knee strike. Even so, the ogre grabbed Lewin's other leg, effortlessly flinging him away. As he flew through the air, the boy tried to regain his balance, using a nearby wall to brace himself mid-throw, but something caught him off guard the moment he landed. The ogre didn't wait, immediately launching another punch that shattered the wall behind Lewin. Agile as ever, Lewin dodged, reappearing behind his foe. With hatred in its voice, the ogre snarled, "You cursed little rat!" Without hesitation, Lewin launched a new assault, shifting his stance and landing a precise blow directly to the monster's face. It crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact. Lewin then leaped onto his enemy, standing triumphantly on its chest. Boosting his strength with an ability, the boy declared, "It's time to end this." Startled, the ogre questioned if the protagonist was truly human. Lewin surprised it in return, asking if the monster expected an answer. They could communicate perfectly, but instead of chatting with his opponent, the boy unleashed his flame mana explosion attack, and due to the accumulated effect of ogre fury, his condition shifted to enraged. This triggered a colossal explosion of flames from the ogre's body, generating immense heat throughout the area. The opponent's eyes seemed lifeless. Staring intently at his foe, Lewin wondered if it was truly over. Strang, who had been watching the fight, concluded that the boy was far better than he'd anticipated. Whispers rippled through the crowd, voices questioning if Lewin had truly defeated the ogre. Then, all the students erupted in euphoria, cheering wildly for Lewin. Elric, on the other hand, was utterly stunned and frustrated. Ignite cracked a small smile, watching the scene unfold. Our hero had single-handedly defeated a fearsome ogre. The captain approached, demanding to know who taught him that spell and physical skill. He couldn't believe the young man learned it all on his own, but with a firm gaze, the young man insisted he had indeed learned it himself. Professor Heidel stepped closer, and Lewin seized the chance to ask about his exam results. The master remained silent, deep in thought. He confessed that, honestly, he hadn't believed the young man capable of such a feat. But as always, he had shattered all expectations. And just like that, our hero learned he had passed the test. A confident smile spread across Lewin's face after hearing the news. With his test and mission complete, the protagonist unlocked a new skill, Player's Eye. Strang explained that the young man was truly becoming a real player. He recognized the skill, something only a true player could possess. Now he could see people even if they were using stealth or invisibility. What's more, the minimap also unlocked. Lewin could now see within a 500-meter radius around him. He could also view a target's status, and the surprises just kept coming. Strang told Lewin to look at the ogre and activate the skill. Lewin did as he was told, and a status window popped up. Now he could see all the target's crucial information. Lewin then tried to read Professor Heidel's information, but he couldn't. This was because the information was limited. He couldn't see data for targets significantly higher level than himself. As he grew stronger, the available information would also increase. Lewin cracked a smile, sensing this could be incredibly useful. After the exam, rumors about Lewin defeating an ogre began to spread like wildfire. Jason asked Lewin how he felt knowing everyone was talking about him, but a young woman approached, interrupting the friend's conversation. With a sweet voice, the girl asked, "Are you Senior Lewin?" Other girls then came forward, holding gifts and snacks for Lewin. After handing them over, they scurried away, blushing. Disregarding the gifts, Lewin asked Jason if he wanted them. The blonde's eyes flared and he scolded his friend, declaring it utterly disrespectful. While Jason whined, Lewin checked his status and saw his friend had high potential. And for the past few days, this had been Lewin's main activity, observing everyone's attributes. Completely changing the subject, Lewin urged Jason to work harder, assuring him he'd ace the next exam. He explained to his friend that his skills were excellent and he just needed more confidence. Pumped up, the blonde declared his goal for the next exam, to break into the top 10. But then he admitted that sometimes even he couldn't believe certain things. For instance, it seemed Lewin wasn't the same person he'd been for the past 6 years. Lewin looked up, understanding that feeling perfectly, because he didn't feel the same either. Plus, strange rumors had been swirling around him lately. Rumors that he would surpass Mikkel and become the Academy's speaker and representative. Interrupting the conversation, Lewin stood up, declaring, "I don't care about any of that." But for Jason, it wasn't that simple. This was the year of the Grand Festival. Every 5th month, Academy representatives gathered for a festival to decide who was the best. Once every 8 years, an Olympiad brought together all mages to determine the ultimate champion. When both events coincided, it was called the Grand Festival. That meant the festival showcased the top students from the most renowned academies. The winner received not only money but also immense privileges, making it fiercely competitive. All the students were buzzing with anticipation, wondering who would be this year's representative. During dinner, Jason confidently stated it would surely be Lewin, as he was the only one to score a perfect 100 against Kingram. Everyone remembered Mikkel's performance performance at the last festival. Mikkel had performed terribly, finishing 4th out of 5 participants in the individual competition. That's how their academy earned the nickname Lastademia for coming in dead last. The only way to shake off that humiliating nickname was to rely on Lewin. Seriously, Lewin replied, "The exams aren't over yet, so it's too early to get confident." Ultimately, the chosen participant for the festival was based on test results and teacher recommendations, and his one-on-one test against Mikkel was fast approaching, so Lewin knew he had to be completely focused. 4 days passed since the combat test. Lewin trained relentlessly in the arena, making a significant leap. He finally reached the 1,000-point mark in strength. Strang the little bear was ecstatic and asked if it was time to level up. As Lewin prepared, a notification window popped up. The repetition quest had evolved to level 2. The little bear leaped onto his shoulder, radiating its fiery energy. The difficulty of the repetition quests had doubled, but their rewards had tripled. Then Strang absorbed the magical energy. Lewin could feel the energy surging through his body. Such immense power began to illuminate the entire area, surprising even Lewin himself. He noticed the flames erupting from the little bear's body were growing stronger and stronger. His eyes widened, wondering what this incredible development could mean. Meanwhile, Professor Elric was deep in thought. The image of Lewin obliterating the ogre replayed in his mind. He wondered if the protagonist could face Mikkel and emerge victorious, but still believed a win was highly unlikely. If that happened, Lewin would claim the Academy's top student spot. For Elric, that was unthinkable. The Garyhill family had to remain at the pinnacle. After Lewin absorbed Strang's magic energy, the little bear reached rank 2. As a reward, an additional 200 strength points were sent to Lewin. The young man approached the bear, remarking that he seemed to have evolved quite a bit, and thanks to him, the protagonist's strength had rapidly soared to 1,200. With an arrogant smirk, Strang retorted that the quest difficulty and its rewards had also increased. Lewin began checking his notification screen and realized it was true. Since he was already training at advanced difficulty, this wouldn't be too challenging. But a question arose, and the young man asked what real combat training entailed. Strang reminded him that when they first met, he'd said he could become anything. From now on, the little bear could transform into whatever he wished, though he still had some limits. He'd even be able to take a human form once he reached rank 5. With a sly grin, the creature asked if the boy wanted a demonstration of his transformations. Then Strang's body began to shift. A swirling vortex enveloped his previously tiny and fragile form. The vortex grew, and now the little bear took the shape of a terrifying scarecrow. This didn't seem to impress Lewin much, who simply stated it was different from what I was expecting. But as he attacked the young man, the scarecrow warned that it wasn't smart to underestimate him, adding that he'd been very useful when Draco was training. This meant Strang would now be the training dummy for quests. So, the two would have to train combat every single day. Since he wasn't very evolved yet, Strang was equivalent to a third-class mage. But once he recovered his full power, anything would be possible. If Lewin wished it, he could even transform into a dragon or a demon. Lewin requested they start training immediately, with Strang in his mage form. The little bear's eyes gleamed, and he let out a chuckle, accepting. In his paw, a ball of energy appeared and swiftly morphed into a magic staff. Even if his magic struck the protagonist, it would only cause a push, not damage, and Strang himself wouldn't be affected either. Truly, Strang had become the perfect training partner. Focus energy began to flow from the staff, and the little bear warned, "I'm starting now!" The training began with a spell unleashed by Strang. Lewin dodged swiftly. He mused that just as he was training now, Mikkel was probably doing the same, so he could barely wait for the test day. Mikkel told his uncle he was growing furious with Lewin and asked what he could do now. But this complaint only agitated Elric further, and he snapped that Mikkel was the one who should be putting in more effort. Turning to his uncle, the blonde youth revealed he'd heard rumors that Elric was the one who boosted Lewin's grades, and that it was his idea to make the young man face an ogre in the test. So, thanks to Elric, Lewin achieved the best possible score, something that would be incredibly damaging if the Garyhill family ever found out. Gritting his teeth, the professor asked if the blonde was trying to blackmail him. Mikkel told the man to stop spouting nonsense and help him figure out a solution. If Lewin became the Academy's representative for the festival, everything would be lost. But the professor had an idea and handed the blonde a small vial. Mikkel seemed to recognize it, the awakening herb, also known as the blazing flower. This medicinal herb grew in the northern lands, and some used it to create powerful powerful elixirs. If consumed, it drastically reduced mana consumption, but also caused insensitivity to pain and made it difficult to distinguish friend from foe. Elric was surprised to see Mikkel had actually paid attention in his classes. Concerned, the blonde asked if his uncle was implying he should take the elixir. The professor confirmed, stating it was the only way to reclaim the family's honor after his defeat in the test. But Mikkel reminded him that Heidel knew his limits and might notice any drastic changes. Smiling, Elric revealed that all anti-doping exams were under his responsibility. Then, he also handed him a potion that could mask any evidence the blonde had taken anything. Mikkel was to take that vial after using the blazing flower, and he shouldn't fear, for they were both Gary Hills. This was their way to progress. With a persuasive voice, his uncle asked his nephew again if he would accept the plan. The day of the one-on-one combat test finally arrived, and everyone headed to the mana barrier room. As every year, the venue was packed with spectators. The highly anticipated final battle between Mikkel and Lewin was about to begin. The two adversaries approached. A little anxious, Lewin thought the decisive moment had arrived. Strang commented that the opponent probably knew Lewin would focus on close-quarters combat and might have prepared for it, but if Lewin succeeded in getting close, just one punch would be enough. To simulate a real fight as much as possible, some geographical features had been arranged in the arena. A professor stood in the arena with both of them and asked if they were ready. Lewin stared firmly at his opponent and, analyzing coldly, noticed something. Mikkel wasn't in his normal state. Besides not being arrogant as usual, something felt very strange. Lewin decided to check his status. So, the young man activated his player's gaze ability and saw that Mikkel had a double magic casting ability and was in berserk mode. Lewin had never seen such a condition and realized there was something more hidden, something that might have been camouflaged with a drug. Before the test, some checks were made, but Professor Elric was responsible for them, which immediately raised suspicions. The professor steps forward, explaining that only dark magic is forbidden. The power level of spells that hit an opponent will determine their score. There's no need to worry about hurting anyone, as magic effectiveness in this arena is reduced by 99%. Lewin raises his hand, asking what happens if a participant is caught using an illegal potion. The professor states that the student would be disqualified, followed by an examination to determine if they should be expelled from the academy. The professor asks why he's asking, but Lewin turns his face away, muttering, "It's nothing." Spreading his arms, the judge instructs both participants to take their positions. Since Lewin is the only one who can see statuses, no one would believe him. He'll need to find some solid evidence. The two opponents glare at each other as the professor waits to start the fight. Now Elric gives the command to begin the combat. With the signal given, both boys charge at each other. Hatred burning in his eyes, Mikkel immediately conjures an emerald spell in his hand. As he leaps towards Lewin, magical roots erupt from the ground, ensnaring the young man's feet. But it's not enough to stop Lewin, who easily breaks free, leaving the audience utterly stunned. The mana barrier might reduce the power of spells, but it can't diminish the boy's raw strength. Shouting, the blonde asks, "Did you really think it would end there?" and conjures a magical skull. The skull spews fire from its mouth straight at Lewin. With some difficulty, Lewin manages to dodge and regain his footing, but he spots a rock in his escape path. He quickly hides behind it, unaffected by the flames. Peeking out to find the right moment to move, Lewin observes that Mikkel must have taken a potion that reduces casting time and boosts mana. With a maniacal expression, the blonde screams for Lewin to come out of his hiding spot. Seeing how agitated the boy is, Lewin gets an idea of which potion he took. Without a doubt, it was the awakening herb, flaming flower. All the symptoms his opponent is showing match it perfectly. The only thing left to confirm is pain suppression. Now, Lewin steps out from behind the rock and declares that he understands why the boy is so confident. He states loudly and clearly, "It's because of the flaming flower, but it doesn't matter because I don't need that kind of thing to defeat you." Then, striking a battle pose, he adds, "I'm going all out." Charging towards Mikkel, the young man unleashes his time refraction ability. Despite trying to charge his ice magic, Lewin's movements are far too fast to follow. The blonde attempts to erect an ice barrier between himself and Lewin, but it's useless and not enough to stop him. Delivering an incandescent kick, Lewin smashes the blow straight into the barrier. The watching professors are left utterly impressed by what they witness. In a desperate move, Mikkel summons a gigantic fire-breathing lizard and unleashes it on the boy. But Lewin counters with his earthquake ability, charging it into his fist. He slams the ground so hard it causes a seismic shock, instantly obliterating the fire lizard. The students watching are left stunned. witnessing Lewin use an earth spell to completely counter a fire element attack. Terrified, Mikkel screams, utterly lost on what to do, then realizes his opponent is now dangerously close. He starts yelling, begging Lewin to stay back. With a sarcastic smirk, Lewin tells the blonde, "Don't be a coward, take this." His fingers hover inches from the boy's terrified face. A mere flick causes a colossal boom that echoes even outside the Colosseum. With just that flick, Lewin sends his opponent hurtling away, leaving every spectator jaw-dropped. A massive cloud of dust erupts from the impact as the protagonist coldly observes the aftermath of his strike. Mikkel, who had been slammed against a rock, slowly rises with a grin, claiming he was underestimated. Lewin, however, gives him no time to finish. He closes in, delivering another precise punch to the blonde's face, sending him flying once more, crashing onto his back against a stone. Even after those brutal blows, Mikkel starts laughing, taunting, "Your punches are weak. They don't hurt me. I might just die from all these impacts." Lewin then places a hand on the boy's shoulder, warning him, "It's dangerous to continue the test like this." Using his Tree of Imprisonment ability, he makes roots erupt from the ground, binding Mikkel's body. The hero raises his arm, accusing his opponent of using a forbidden drug. The judge steps forward, questioning Lewin's certainty. A false accusation could disqualify him. Lewin replies, "I'm absolutely certain. There are people capable of manufacturing substances undetectable by standard tests." A worried Professor Elric tries to grasp what Lewin is implying. The protagonist explains that such a drug would require someone who handles rare materials and conducted the test before the combat. In the academy, only one person fits that description. The other professors begin to eye Elric suspiciously. Meanwhile, Elric himself steps closer, demanding, "What are you insinuating, Lewin?" He questions, "Are you suggesting Michael used drugs and I turned a blind eye?" Lewin confirms, "I have proof." Elric suggests redoing the anti-doping test, but Lewin reveals an elixir was used to mask the results. The professor then asks what he proposes they do. Placing his hand on the tree trunk imprisoning Mikkel, Lewin declares he'll show the proof directly. With just the fingers of one hand, he strikes the tree, shattering it. Lewin explains that this was the same flick that hit Mikkel's forehead earlier. Even with Mikkel's magic higher than normal, he kept laughing and standing after being hit when he should have been knocked out cold. And now, even trapped, he won't stop laughing, as if he feels no pain at all. Lewin then asks if, with all this evidence, Elric will still deny it. "Ignite!" The dean lets out a scream that echoes through the entire arena, calling for Professor Elric. The man is possessed by rage, his fury visible from afar. He roars, questioning how Elric could commit such an act, and demands the man accompany him to his office. Clearly in deep trouble, the professor knows he won't get away with it. Meanwhile, Mikkel continues to laugh, still trapped by the roots. After all these events, the fourth test quickly concludes. Elric and his nephew are expelled, and all the corruption of the Gary Hill family is exposed. The protagonist, Lewin, receives a new nickname, the General Expeller. Next, Lewin walks towards a gigantic door, summoned by the dean. As he waits, a peculiar energy flows through his body. As soon as he enters the room, the boy encounters something that truly astounds him. The room is, in fact, an open field very familiar to him, the Ardell territory. However, observing more closely, Lewin notices the place is a little different. Before him, he sees a chair, Terran's throne, where the King of Mages usually sits. The boy wonders what that object is doing there. Ignite appears behind him and asks what he's seeing. He explains that this space was independently created by the Eye of Malarok, the leader of demons, and the first to invade the continent of Frelia. The Eye had the power to force its target to experience visions of their deepest desires. Malarok's eye reveals one's deepest desires, and the world Lewin saw was the closest reflection of his own. He knew his greatest aspirations were the resurrection of the Ardell territory and becoming the greatest mage of all time. Ignite asked if Lewin wasn't curious about what he saw. The dean revealed he saw a world where students acted like students, and mages acted like mages. But, he mused, that would certainly be no easy feat. The door slowly creaked open, signaling their exit from the space. Lewin decided to take one last peek before leaving. He saw himself celebrating victory with a trophy, surrounded by his excited friends. Next, he appeared in a graduation robe, completing his academy studies. All these visions brought a smile to his face. Back in Ignat's office, the dean offered Lewin a cup of tea. As the boy drank, Ignat stared at him. Then he explained he'd called Lewin there to ask one question. how he'd been able to detect that Mikkel was using the blazing flower and other stimulants. Lewin swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He explained that Mikkel's aura was distinctly different, combined with his aggression and abnormal mana circulation. From what Dean Ignat could tell, Lewin seemed more convinced than suspicious. The protagonist decided there was no need to expose his true ability, so he explained that he used physical strength instead of magic, and the arena could only suppress magical abilities. Even after enduring numerous physical attacks, Mikkel kept laughing, showing no sign of pain. The only explanation for this had to be the blazing flower. Ignite mused that even though he was very young, the boy was sharp and possessed many talents. As the dean of the academy, he deeply regretted what had happened and assured Lewin that the Gary Hill family would no longer bother him. Furthermore, Ignat had an offer for the young man. He asked if Lewin would like to join the Grand Festival in the 7th month of this year as the academy's representative. That question left Lewin reeling. It was a position coveted by every student there. The protagonist closed his eyes, trying to swallow down all his emotions. First, he thanked Ignite for honoring him with such an offer. However, Lewin had no experience whatsoever. He hadn't had a single real battle experience in the last 5 years. His recent years had been unproductive due to his mana disorder, so he believed he lacked the competitive power for a festival of this magnitude. However, in the dean's opinion, none of these issues were a problem. On the contrary, Lewin had the potential to be a true contender for victory. It might even be a little scary, but Ignat was certain the protagonist had what it took. He could be considered a secret weapon that appeared out of nowhere. To his competitors, Lewin was a complete mystery. There was no information on him, and they weren't familiar with his strategies or how to counter them. Lewin mused that they truly knew nothing about him, unlike Mikkel, who had always been in the spotlight. Ignat asked again if the young man would accept the challenge. With determination, Lewin replied that he would do his best to honor the trust placed in him. As the two spoke, a knock came at the door, and the dean invited them in. Ignite explained that body art classes would be more useful than magic lessons, which was why he'd invited a new professor. Lewin seemed to recognize the man. It was Gulter Pirante, who remarked that the student didn't look too happy to see him. This knight was the leader of the Foldron troops, and one of the only rank 6 knights in the Radian Kingdom. It was Gulter who had fought alongside Lewin during the 3rd exam against the ogre. Before they began their lessons, the knight needed to confirm a few things. Gulter had heard from Professor Heidel that Lewin was a mage who had no choice but to fight at close range. The protagonist confirmed with a nod. From what Gulter had seen in the last battle, Lewin's movements were concise and free of unnecessary actions. But, regardless, it was quite obvious the young man had never properly learned martial arts. Those movements might have worked against an ogre, but a skilled knight would have read them with ease. Lewin knew Gulter was right. The movements he'd learned were very repetitive. But the knight said that if the boy learned from him, he could move beyond the basics. He asked if they could start training right away. The most crucial thing for a knight was his feet, so Lewin needed to learn how to walk properly. Only by first learning to walk would he master proper body arts. Celestial martial arts were the techniques knights typically learned at the training center. Lewin made a swift movement with his arm, unleashing a powerful gust of wind. Excluding sword techniques, celestial martial arts consisted of a total of 36 movements. Lewin gathered momentum and lunged forward to test a new strike. He unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks as he advanced. His master, Gulter, merely watched with crossed arms, a smile playing on his lips, which made Lewin wonder why. The protagonist questioned Gulter's motive for teaching him, as he wouldn't gain any personal benefit. But Gulter replied that it was an investment. Meeting someone with the potential to be a great mage and helping him on that journey seemed like an excellent investment, in his opinion. Grateful, Lewin bowed, assuring his teacher he'd rely on his guidance. But the soldier found such formality tiresome. "Just call me Hyung," he insisted. Lewin pushed through his training, his body a blur of motion as he threw countless punches into the air, honing his strikes. Hyung watched, impressed by the young man's progress and sheer courage. He recalled examining the ogre's corpse, its jaw shattered. Lewin was truly fascinating. A close-range mage, stronger than an ogre. 3 weeks flew by. Lewin's stats skyrocketed, and alongside him, Strang evolved, reaching rank 3. Lewin's strength now stood at an incredible 2,130 points. Even Strang, the little bear, marveled at his rapid growth. "Draka took a year and a half just to hit 2,000 strength points," he commented. Suddenly, a voice shattered their conversation, calling Lewin's name. Jason sprinted towards them, breathless. "What happened?" Lewin asked. "Have you seen it yet?" Jason gasped, barely able to speak. The grand festival participant list. It just went up at the academy entrance. Lewin remembered the entrance ceremony, where he'd represented the new students. It had made him a target of envious, doubtful stares. For the past 5 years, his performances had been nothing short of pathetic. He'd only watched from the sidelines as Mikkel snatched every good result. But now, everything was different. Lewin sprinted to the academy entrance, where a throng of students had gathered. The moment his eyes landed on the announcement, his heart pounded. Lewin Ardell had truly become the academy's representative. Every student there turned, rushing to embrace and congratulate him. It had taken time, immense effort, but the protagonist had reclaimed his place as the academy's representative once more. Professor Heidel admitted his shock when Galter revealed the boy had already mastered the celestial martial arts. A mere 16-year-old reaching 5th class was frankly terrifying, yet he trusted the young man possessed the power to achieve anything he set his mind to. Time marched on. The chosen participants journeyed to Altain, the grand stage for the festival. Inside the Mana train, students buzzed with chatter about the trip. While many reveled in the excitement, Lewin sat with eyes closed, attempting to focus. Some were thrilled by the journey, others scoffed at it. Finally, an irritated student snapped, "Enough with the childish antics! Quiet down!" The protagonist glanced aside, sensing trouble brewing. It was Henkes, Mikkel's lackey and a participant in last year's festival. He sneered that if the students thought Lewin would pull off some miracle at the festival, they should just give up. Another spiky-haired guy chimed in, claiming Mikkel had far better odds. Finally, the arrogant youth declared he didn't even consider Lewin their representative. The hero recognized them as the bastards who exploited their Gary Hill family connections for personal gain. Then the protagonist shot back that Mikkel must be thrilled. Seeing his little lapdogs were so loyal, they stuck around even after their master was expelled. The tension in the air immediately ratcheted up. Henkes felt provoked, but Lewin didn't back down from his words. Fuming, the lackey retorted that this was all because the young man was their representative. But the protagonist cut him off, stating this festival would be unlike any other. Good results here meant opportunities they'd never get through the Gary Hill family. Henkes looked far from confident that their academy would perform well. The protagonist stepped closer to the pessimistic student and affirmed, yes, it's possible. He reminded them that the festival was all about collaboration, so he couldn't allow any elements that would interfere with teamwork. Angrily, the other guy demanded, "Are you planning to compete without us, Lewin?" The protagonist urged the boys to think long and hard on their way there, because no Gary Hill would be left to recognize their loyalty. Henkes roared that he wouldn't take orders from the young man. The students' train finally pulled away, hurtling towards its destination. All the students were stunned by the train's incredible speed. Strang began to laugh, remarking on how much the world had changed since he'd last been in it. Suddenly, the cabin door where Jason and the protagonist sat burst open. A voice sneered, "I can practically smell the losers in here." A trio of guys started taunting, calling them a bunch of country bumpkins. Their uniform shields marked them as students from the Oyota National Institute of Magic, the only school in Oyota, a desolate place renowned for its swordsmanship and extreme physical training. Lewin was baffled, wondering what these guys were even doing here. The baldest of the group demanded, "Where's Mikkel?" He even jabbed, "Don't tell me the blonde's gonna be your servant." The insults kept coming as the guys swaggered through the carriage. Strange commented that Lewin was incredibly patient to listen to all that nonsense and stay calm. The protagonist realized his academy was usually treated with such hostility. He fixed his gaze on the back of the carriage, seeing that Professor Heidel had no plans to interfere. From this moment on, authority over the team rested solely with the academy's representative. The bald guy leaned on Henkes' seat and again asked for Mikkel, but a firm voice from the back seats shot back, "He's probably in bed with broken ribs." It was Lewin, who had decided to shut down the invaders' show, now standing tall. With a deflated look, the bald guy muttered, "So, he's the academy's new representative?" The bald guy replied, saying it was his first time seeing him. He then started to swagger closer, full of himself. He introduced himself as Seda Malkiri, the representative of Oyota Academy. Our protagonist then introduced himself as well. That was enough for a first introduction, and Lewin ordered the guy to get out of the carriage. But before leaving, he had to apologize for everything he'd said. Hearing those words, Seda exploded in rage. Scoffing, he asked if he was really being asked to apologize. The bald hothead turned to Henkes, demanding if the guy hadn't told the new representative about him, and if he hadn't, then he deserved another beating to remember his place. Sizing up the situation, Lewin quickly pieced it together. This had to be why all the students trembled at the sight of the Oyota guys. They'd probably all been beaten down by Seda Malkiri. This was clearly a plan to crush the team's spirit before the competition. It seemed the grand festival had already begun. With a sarcastic smirk, the protagonist challenged, "Wanna throw down, hothead?" The irritable Seida's fury intensified, and he began winding up a punch to strike Lewin. But before he could do anything, a cloaked figure appeared, ordering the guy to stop. Seida instantly calmed down, calling the man Professor. The professor reprimanded the boy. Looking at Heidel, he apologized for the incident, and shoving Seida, ordered the boy back to his seat. The bald guy stormed off, vowing to face Lewin again. Our protagonist stood his ground, realizing that being a representative wouldn't be an easy task. Back in the Oyota carriage, Seida demanded why the professor had interrupted them, especially since he was the one who suggested this method. Shaking his head, the professor asked if the boy couldn't see that he was actually smiling. Professor Heidel had been smiling as he watched the bald guy, as if he'd been expecting that exact situation. It was hard to tell if it was confidence or something else entirely, but that Lewin definitely held secrets, and he was nothing like the Meikle they'd faced last time. Seida fell silent, pondering his professor's words. After the Oyota group passed through the carriage, the atmosphere completely shifted. Students gathered around Lewin, chattering about their first group competition without a representative. Even Henkes was pumped, vowing to give his all. And these students, who were once consumed by envy and ego, now began to unite as one. Many students were nervous, knowing the Oyota students had grown up fighting their entire lives. Lewin cut in, asking if they weren't angry. Those bastards had disrespected all of them. If he hadn't done anything, those idiots would have been even more emboldened to mock them. They'd all be confirmed Acadamongols, just like those guys called them. Lewin challenged, "Do you want to be disrespected forever? You let those bastards beat you down, and because of it, you've been disrespected for the past 5 years. This isn't the time for you to fight amongst yourselves over ego." The spiky-haired kid approached with Henkes and said he'd thought about making him the goalie for the arrow ball match. It seemed Meikle's cronies had finally decided to side with Lewin. Next stop, the Duchy of Altain. Everyone, grab your luggage. The Duchy of Altain is one of the states belonging to the Imperial Federation of Raynak, and it's the only neutral state in the entire empire. If any violence breaks out within Altain, the continent's ruling empire steps in and judges the crimes. Because of this, Altain hosts massive international magic and fencing tournaments, including the Festival of Magic and the Grand Sword Prix. The Academy students are absolutely stunned by the place, buzzing with comments. Jason remarks that it truly feels like another world, vastly different from the state of Damon. Lewin is still reeling from the sight of Altain. As expected from a kingdom's capital, the place has a distinctly ancient vibe, and everyone seems incredibly relaxed. Seeing all this makes our protagonist truly feel like he came from a small town. The students are now being taken to their accommodations, so they climb into the carriages. As they head to their lodging, Heidel and Lewin chat. The professor warns the boys not to go to another school's accommodations, not even by mistake, because nothing good will come of it if they end up starting a fight. Our protagonist feels personally attacked when the professor says this, looking directly at him. Something catches Strang's attention, and he looks up. The little bear is so excited that even Lewin is surprised. He says he caught a really interesting scent. Then the little guy leaps from the boy's shoulder. Paying close attention, he seems almost certain that Draca's relic is somewhere nearby. The next day, at Ignite Academy's accommodations, Jason is still half asleep, while Lewin is already ready and rushing. He practically flies out the door, like someone running late. Looking at Strang, the young man confirms if he's sure, and the little bear says it'll appear on the minimap soon. A sign marks the entrance to All Teens Memory Touching Workshop, and this is the place. Our protagonist slowly enters the shop. Since it was something a black dragon used, the little bear thought it would be in a unique location, despite the place being quite ordinary. Lewin had imagined it would be in a black market or a rich noble's vault. Then he activates his Gamer's Eye ability and spots an unusual glow coming from within. The artifact emanates a fabulous energy that illuminates the entire place. This ring was Draca's first artifact, but also his first failure, as it's not very useful. Disappointed, the hero crosses his arms while Strang laughs, saying, "It's unique." The ring doesn't just make the user resist attacks, but also the touch of friends, or even a girlfriend's hug. It might be truly useless and have some trivial function, but it's worth collecting. Despite everything, the ring grants an extra 200 strength points, so that alone makes it worthwhile. It fits him perfectly, as if the ring was made just for Lewin, so the boy asks the shop owner about the price. The old man says he won't charge anything, as the ring has been sitting there for ages. Not wanting to take advantage of the old man's kindness, Lewin decides to buy something else. In moments like these, his Gamer's Eye skill is incredibly convenient, allowing him to analyze the rarity of every item. But as he scanned the shelves, something caught his eye, a high-rarity book on the quantum mechanics of magic and swordsmanship. Just as he reached for it, a white-haired girl also approached. Looking at her, Lewin could see her name and status. It was Irene Prius from Siki Women's University, a 5th-class mage with incredibly high potential. The King of Mages, also known as the frontier mage Terran Artemis, had chosen Irene as one of the 11 young mages of the next generation. Lewin had heard she was a genius close to 5th class, but it seemed the rumors had actually underestimated her. With a serious voice, Irene demanded he drop the book, but Lewin stood his ground, stating he touched it first. She introduced herself, pointing out that he already got what he wanted and was just looking for something else to buy while she was there only for this book. And if it wasn't too much trouble, she'd really appreciate taking the item. So he asked if Irene could explain why she wanted the book, since normally no one would bother with it. Nervous, she started to sweat, unable to answer. Blushing, she replied it was for personal reasons and she couldn't give any details. Lewin didn't believe it was just some academy task. He suspected it might be a request from the king or something similar. Then the hero gave up on the book, telling her to take it since it was clearly important to her. He turned his back and started searching the shelves for something else to buy. Irene watched him, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Back at the dorms, Lewin recounted meeting the girl and everyone got excited. Jason and Henkes immediately asked if she was as beautiful as the rumors claimed and how they met. The blonde guy cried, saying he was jealous because he'd always dreamed of touching her hands just once in his life. Henkes boasted that he'd actually seen her at the festival and even sat near her. A pointless argument between the two boys immediately erupted, but then Lewin mentioned that the girl was actually incredibly strong, always ranking in the top 2, only losing to Doom Prime every year. This participant was the top 1 at Raynak's School of Magic and Soldier Training, the most recognized mage of his age on the entire continent. He was also the wielder of the Sword of Radiance. This information finally makes Lewin understand why Irene desperately needs that book, to defeat her opponent. But being a magic swordsman isn't all it's cracked up to be. Swords don't channel as much magic as other weapons, and mastering knightly skills is no easy feat. However, Doom Prime is different. His sword is an incredibly rare artifact, and his swordsmanship far surpasses that of an ordinary knight. Jason starts grumbling about the guy's insane luck. Skilled, artifact-wielding, handsome, and rich. All this talk leaves our hero deep in thought. Irene mastered the 5th class of magic at 16, yet Doom Prime always beats her. He wonders if he stands a chance against these renowned geniuses, especially since he's definitely someone nobody cares about. But Ignite's words echo in his mind. He is a candidate for victory. Closing his eyes, the young man vows to test that claim with everything he's got. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and a spiky-haired kid rushes in, shouting that the first schedule for the festival's opening ceremony has been released. That news shatters Lewin's concentration. He stands up and heads for the exit, his mind fixed on one thing, the grand festival, which has just begun. Students from various academies eagerly await the event's start. Our protagonist is even more anxious, desperate to find out who his opponent will be. As symbols flash across the big screen, a voice announces their adversaries, the Mongols. Lewin glances back as the person continues to boast it'll be an easy victory. Seda remarks that facing Ignite first is great luck. They'll get to have some fun. Lewin, however, thinks the Oyota Academy is the worst possible opponent. They're notorious for playing dirty, and many students have been scarred by their tactics. Seda keeps mocking them, claiming their opponents are so weak they're not even good enough for a warm-up. The insults keep coming, sparking laughter among the Oyota students present. Smiling, Lewin decides to use this situation as a chance to prove that Ignite Academy isn't the same anymore. He walks up to Seda and tells him he's been waiting for him. He noticed many Oyota students would be participating in the grand festival, so he decided to introduce himself. With a firm voice, the young man introduces himself, saying, "It's a pleasure to meet you all." He adds that he won't say much, but he has one request. Never call us Mongols again. I find it incredibly rude. This attitude completely stuns Seda, the arrogant bald guy. Lewin has been stuck in last place for too long, and he's sick of it. So now, he's going to fight for the top spot. The Oyota students, in turn, rallied their spirits, declaring they wouldn't stop calling them that. Seda scoffed at Lewin's words, demanding, "Who do you think you are?" As he recalled his dean's words, a single powerful thought ignited in Lewin's mind. He declared himself the ultimate trump card, vowing never to retreat again. Back in the Oyota Academy dorms, a furious debate erupted. The boys argued over Lewin Ardell's identity, and after some quick digging, they unearthed his past, a failed student. Then, suddenly, at the semester's end, he'd scored a staggering 180 points, transforming into a prodigy with stellar grades. His sudden surge of confidence, they concluded, must have sprung from this unexpected success. Seda remembered his professor's cryptic warning. Lewin possessed something they hadn't yet grasped, but he quickly brushed off the concern, dismissing them as mere Mongols. Stretching leisurely, he vowed, "I'll deal with them soon enough," the traditional Oyota way. Back at Ignite Academy's accommodation, tomorrow loomed the Mana grenade launch event. It was a fierce team competition where every member participated, save for the representative. This challenge pitted participants against mithril golems, hurling mana grenades to destroy them. The team that shattered them fastest would claim victory. A worried student approached Lewin, his voice laced with doubt. "Will we really be okay without our protagonist?" Lewin, ever honest, admitted, compared to Oyota Academy, Ignite truly lacks individual talents. Yet, he knew deep down that victory was still within their grasp. As a group competition, if they truly worked as one, they could absolutely win. Therefore, they needed to split into specialized groups immediately. One group would forge the mana grenade, the second would transport it, the third would launch the assault on the golems, and the fourth would actively sabotage the opposing team by healing their golem. The students exchanged uneasy glances, protesting, "That method will take forever to defeat the golems." Lewin, eyes narrowed in concentration, began to formulate a precise plan. He then turned to the group, asking for their thoughts on his earlier declaration. "We won't finish last, we'll finish first." He had been utterly sincere. He was ready to pour everything into helping them, even for games he wouldn't personally compete in. For teams boasting superior individual skills, the traditional method worked, but for Ignite, it would be a fatal waste of precious time. Jason nodded, declaring, "I trust Lewin." Henkes echoed his sentiment. With that, team morale surged, and everyone quickly rallied behind the plan. Henkes would lead the team responsible for crafting the grenades. Taimunsi would take charge of moving the ignited grenades. The protagonist organized the groups based on their strengths, and his gamer's eye ability proved incredibly useful, allowing him to analyze each target's nature, minimize weaknesses, and pinpoint strengths. Over time, the students grew more confident in their abilities. Once each student was placed in their perfect group, even the most doubtful began to feel a surge of hope. Relieved, Lewin was grateful for his exceptional team-forming skill. Confidence, after all, is the first step to victory. But just as hope began to bloom, Fulham stumbled into the meeting, battered and bruised. Concerned, Lewin rushed to Fulham, demanding to know what happened. It was the Oyota representative, who, along with his cronies, had ambushed the boy. At the Oyota facility, a sudden crash echoed through the halls. Lewin appeared at the doorway, where Seda greeted him, seemingly expecting his visit. Seda, with a sneer, declared he knew Lewin would come and challenged him. "What are you going to do?" With a firm voice, the protagonist raised his hand and commanded, "Seda Malkiri, come here, we need to talk." With a sly grin, Seda taunted Lewin, calling him crazy and questioning his confidence. Lewin, in response, placed a hand on Seda's shoulder and repeated his demand, applying intense pressure. The force was so immense that Seda was brought to his knees, forced to bow. Startled and enraged by this display of power, Seda lunged with a punch, but Lewin effortlessly dodged it. He seized his rival's arm, squeezing it tight, and warned him, "Touch another student outside the arena again, and things won't end well for you." Seda collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain, and glared up at his aggressor. Lewin met his gaze and proposed a wager. Back at the Ignite facility, the students buzzed about the wager. If they defeated the Oyota, Seda would receive a flick as powerful as the one that shattered Mikkel, and be forced to apologize to everyone. This ignited the students' resolve, making them even more determined to win. However, one student cut through the excitement, announcing they needed to rush to Altane Stadium. It was the Grand Festival, an event for mages across the entire continent. Historically, mages who excelled here became pivotal figures, capable of altering history itself. The transformation was evident in the Ignite students, now brimming with confidence and hope. For Lewin, it was exhilarating to be in a place where historical legends were forged. A mustached elder announced the end of the opening ceremony. Lewin began to head back to his quarters, but something caught his eye. Seda glared at him and warned him, "Stay sharp. I won't drop my guard this time." Then the bald man turned his back and walked away. However, the opponent Lewin truly wanted to analyze wasn't Seda Malkiri. He shifted his gaze elsewhere, focusing on the infamous Doom Prime. Champion of the festival and leader of the Raynak School of Magic and Soldier Training, Doom Prime was the adversary they would have to face if they secured multiple victories in the competition. As Lewin pondered, a voice cut through his thoughts, suggesting he was the kind of person who just attracted trouble. Irene stood behind him, approaching with a smile. She remarked that she'd seen him just yesterday, causing chaos and even stirring up trouble at the Oyota dorms. Altane was a small place, and Irene figured everyone must already know what happened. Embarrassed, Lewin explained he hadn't meant to cause trouble, just talk. But since he'd been kind enough to give up the book for her, Irene offered him a piece of advice. It was better not to stand out. Lewin shot back, asking if he should act like her, hiding his true power. Then, he declared he had to rush off, as the competitors for the first event were gathering. That jab left Irene feeling a little uneasy. In just a few minutes, the grenade event was about to kick off. The Ignite students gathered, readying themselves. An excited James declared that today, they would prove they were no longer the Acadamongols. The boys headed to the event grounds, and soon, the festival's first challenge began. People were a bit confused. Until now, competitors won based on individual talent, and group separation was unusual. The crowd buzzed about the team formations, but most believed the Oyota would win for sure. Lewin couldn't ignore the spectators' negative comments about his school. Irene, right behind him, watched the protagonist's reaction, but somehow she couldn't quite believe what was happening. The Ignite Academy's golem had already lost an arm, but the students were determined and pushed themselves. Lewin, though not actively participating, shouted out numerous pieces of advice from the audience, and with his guidance, the Academy managed to shatter the golem's right arm too. Someone was absolutely furious with what he saw. It was Seda, who began to scream, questioning how his teammates could be losing to the Acadamongols. The Ignite team wasn't messing around. They kept pummeling the Oyota golem, giving the monster no chance to recover. Seda's veins bulged with pure hatred. Irene's hand flew to her mouth, utterly impressed by what she was witnessing. The reason Ignite was winning was purely strategic. This strategy, however, would only be possible if each participant's individual strength could be assessed with extreme precision. Lewin had instantly found the book Irene was looking for, and he had also sorted his team members based on their strengths and weaknesses. Irene wondered what kind of person Lewin was, and how he'd never been seen at any other festival before. Jason charged a magic grenade and hurled it with all his might towards the golem, swiftly shattering a part of its body. That sight left Seda completely speechless. He swallowed hard, utterly at a loss for words. The golem they were fighting crashed to the ground, utterly destroyed. The students embraced, happily celebrating their victory. The mana grenade throwing competition, which everyone thought Oyota would win, was deservedly claimed by the Acadamongols. The Acadamongols were no longer in last place. That title now belonged to Oyota, or rather, the Oyota Scraps, as they were now known. The Capture the Flag game between the team representatives was about to begin, and everyone from Ignite cheered for Lewin. Once again, the competing academies would be Ignite and Oyota. Strang remarked that Lewin seemed a little nervous. Lewin replied that they were in 20th place out of 32 schools, which was perfect. People were paying attention because of their last victory, but it still wasn't enough to break their loser label. All he needed was an overwhelming victory. A win like that would completely change people's perception of the team. Strang smiled, understanding exactly what Lewin meant. Lewin looked up and added that, beyond that, they needed to prove their worth to the King of Magic. Meanwhile, inside the dome, an important meeting was underway. The Flame King, Tehran, watched the clash between Lewin and Seda through a crystal ball. He recalled that Ardell had been a candidate among the 11 human children. This child was born with immense talent and could instinctively use mana at a young age, which made the fact that the youth had a magic evocation disorder even more disappointing. An Ignite representative retorted, asking if it wasn't Tehran himself who had treated the child as useless. That question made Tehran, the man with long white hair, let out a small chuckle. He believed Ignite's choice for a representative was terrible, and there seemed to be no special plan behind it. The Ignite representative simply closed his eyes, confident, and asked Tehran to just watch with his own eyes. Strang pressed Lewin about his strategy, knowing he needed to close the distance against Seta. Lewin simply stated he'd fight his own way, head held high, and give everything he had. The referee was moments away from signaling the match's start. The instant it began, Lewin lunged at his opponent. Seta, mana surging in his hands, snarled that Lewin would pay for his dorm antics, then summoned a battle guardian. This armored behemoth blocked Lewin's path, but Lewin unleashed his time refraction ability, effortlessly sidestepping the knight's charge. In a flash, he was behind Seta, his speed leaving Seta utterly bewildered. Seta threw up an arm to defend, but Lewin effortlessly caught his punch. Grinning, Lewin tightened his grip, saying, "I figured as much." Shaking with fury, Seta snarled, "Aren't you going to let go?" Lewin simply replied, "You might not want to say that right now. Your summoned guardian is charging straight at you, spear aimed." Sweat beaded on Seta's brow as he frantically commanded, "Stop! Immediately!" The spear tip was inches from his face, and to his horror, Lewin's iron grip kept him utterly paralyzed. Flashbacks of his earlier humiliation in the dorms flooded Seta's mind. The sheer power radiating from Lewin was undeniable. Resigned, Seta simply closed his eyes, knowing he had lost. He braced for the inevitable, but nothing came. Cautiously, he peeked open an eye. Lewin had just unleashed a blazing punch, shattering the guardian. Seta stared, utterly dumbfounded. Lewin had punched an Iron Guardian with his bare hands. Severely damaged, the summoned creature began to crumble. Seda collapsed to the ground, still reeling in disbelief. With the knight dispatched, Lewin advanced on his opponent. Seda, still on the ground, stared up at his rival. Did you save me?" he stammered. Lewin scoffed, a rhetorical question hanging in the air. Why would I save someone who hurt my classmates? In reality, Lewin simply wanted to finish this personally. "Did you forget our bet?" he asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Just a little flick. The instant Lewin's fingers brushed Seda's forehead, Seda was sent soaring, like a leaf caught in a hurricane. As he flew, he had a fleeting thought. The sky was surprisingly blue. The entire stadium erupted. Spectators gaped at the unbelievable move, while Ignite Academy roared in triumph as if they'd just won the championship. The crowd buzzed with excitement, everyone talking about Lewin, but Lewin's display caught the eye of someone far more powerful. The frontier mage watched, utterly incredulous. He, the sole 8-star mage, a being revered as a demigod, had never witnessed such a feat. His eyes, wide with shock, betrayed his profound astonishment. Peering through his crystal ball, he pondered the identity of this young man. Barely containing his surging curiosity, the frontier mage burned to know, who exactly was Lewin Ardell? A potent mix of curiosity and fury gripped the king. He demanded Ignite reveal everything he knew about Lewin. The lord bowed his head, remaining silent for a moment. Then Ignite spoke, describing the boy as the most ordinary student imaginable, someone everyone expected to quit. Yet he had somehow forged his weaknesses into an unstoppable strength. That, Ignite concluded, was all he knew about Lewin, for now. As he rises, the king says he knows Tyrion is trying to protect the boy from his curiosity. Perhaps I should summon the boy and speak with him personally. Ignite stands too, warning that if the king tries to force an answer, he'll have to be stopped, no matter the cost. This draws another sarcastic smirk from the king. He asks if Ignite will talk about mages' right to keep their secrets, the so-called Millie's Oath. The king then concludes he'll have no problem exchanging a few words with the boy. Ignite thinks he'll find a way to discover more about the magic he first witnessed in that mysterious boy, Lewin Ardell. Far away, at the Drink and Die pub, a weary Lewin clutches his head. "We just won a competition," he groans. "We should be preparing for the next one. Instead, these guys are celebrating like there's no tomorrow." Jason approaches his friend, telling him to celebrate their first victory. It's a festival after all. Altaine's vanilla coconut juice and the dragon kiss are right here. Lewin eyes the bottle, asking, "What's that drink?" Showing him the label, Jason explains, "It's the region's special drink. One sip and you'll feel like you're kissing a dragon." Pushing further, he adds, "Just one gulp and you'll experience amazing sensations." But the friend's conversation is shattered by something that catches Lewin's eye. Seda appears, looking like a lost puppy. All the Ignite Academy students are stunned by his presence. Jason steps forward, saying he understands Seda's pride is hurt, but asks him to leave, as they were just having fun. Concerned, Lewin wonders why Seda is here. Is the bald guy looking for a fight? But with a calm voice, Seda declares he's here to apologize, which completely stuns the two friends. Seda asks for forgiveness for underestimating them all this time. After losing to Lewin, he realized he shouldn't underestimate anyone. There are many stronger people in the world, and he's made many mistakes. Jason grows utterly confused by this drastic change. To cap off his speech, Seda bows respectfully and apologizes once more. Lewin can only remain silent for a few moments. The other students at the table feel a knot in their stomachs at this bizarre situation. Then the Oyota student says he's sorry for ruining the celebratory atmosphere, but as he turns to leave, Lewin calls his name, asking if his apology was just about the bet, or if it truly came from his heart. With a sincere gaze, Seda affirms it was genuine, drawing a smile from our protagonist. Lewin extends his hand to the bald guy, thanking him for apologizing like a true man. Though still looking quite sad, Seda accepts the gesture, and the two shake hands. The Ignite Academy students accepted Seda's apology and started having fun. And just like that, everyone laughed, hugged, and got drunk in the festive mood. But then that one word echoes in Lewin's head. Atmosphere. His friends approach, asking if he's okay. It's the next day, and our protagonist wakes up to his first ever hangover. Now his classmates start laughing, asking if he got amnesia from enjoying the dragon kiss that much. At one point last night, Lewin was crying and thanking his classmates for believing in him. To think that the ever-perfect Lewin had a dark side too. Mortified, he retreats from the room. This drink causes emotional breakdowns, so Lewin decides he'll avoid it at all costs. As he walks, our hero hears his name called. Seda appears, all smiles, asking if he slept well last night. Flashes of yesterday flood Lewin's memory, and he's surprised to see that unlike him, the bald guy isn't embarrassed at all. Quickening his pace through the corridors, Lewin just wants the whole ordeal to end. Suddenly, our protagonist runs into Professor Heidel. The master comments that trouble and incidents always follow him, so Lewin asks if the professor knows something, but the professor denies it, saying someone wants to have a word with him. Because of this, the dean is quite worried, calling the person dangerous and cunningly masked. This person is the Blazing King Terran, who wishes to speak with our protagonist. Professor Heidel urges Lewin to be careful, for Terran is a very mysterious man. People who hide many secrets tend to be dangerous. Apologizing, Heidel says that's all he can reveal. After today's competition, the master will talk to the boy about this meeting. Lewin's teammates are hyped about the king's sudden interest in him. The young man declares they have another reason to win and unveils his plan. The plan? Operation Defend What You Can, with Lewin himself tasked with sprinting straight for the goal. In the arrow ball match, arrows move on their own, soaring across the arena. 9 academy members are split into attackers, defenders, and a goalie. The team that lands the most arrows in the opponent's goal wins. But despite simple rules, this match demands high-level strategy and tactics, like knowing when to unleash defensive spells or crowd control magic, or the best way to grip the arrow ball and hurl it into the enemy net. There's a lot to consider. Usually it's a wild, high-energy game with tons of shouting. Lewin charges towards the goal at full speed. 2 enemy defenders unleash ice magic to stop him. But on the offense, the young man conjures his firewall spell. Ice and containment magic aren't enough to hold Lewin back. From the stands, Seda cheers wildly for his friend. His schoolmates judge him for being so chummy with the Ignites now, but the bald guy explains that real men become friends after a fight. A friend points out there wasn't any fight, but Malkiri cuts him off with a stern glare before he can mention the kid got thrashed. Malkiri figures it's best to let it go and not mess with Lewin. After facing Lewin Ardell, the young man is convinced. This guy is part of the new generation of mages. Just like Irene, Dalian, and Droom Prime are also examples of this generation. But young Lewin manages to be even better than all of them. And Lewin isn't just incredibly strong. He possesses a strong sense of leadership and immense tolerance, which makes the bald guy grateful to be his friend. As the Oyota are up next, they need to start strategizing. The opposing team's captain starts yelling to stop Ardell. All the defensive players are doing everything they can. But so far, Lewin has been weaving and slipping past every single block. Until sprinting at top speed, he gets right up to the enemy students and asks if they're done, because now it's my turn. Suddenly, a giant wall of ice erupts between him and the other players. Gritting his teeth, Lewin winds up a powerful punch to shatter the barrier, tearing a hole right through the ice. This sends shards of ice flying towards the defensive players, who dive to the ground to dodge the projectiles. James asks if the other guys don't matter, as long as they get Lewin, and manages to grab the arrow. The enemy team's students worry about this move. With a powerful thrust, the blonde player sends the arrow soaring towards the goal. And the scoreboard, which was 1 Neo, now shows another point for the Ignite. Even 2 points down, the opposing team relentlessly marked Lewin. Jason and the other players exploited these openings, as the enemy team failed to block the other members. Their defensive barrier was instantly shattered. In the stands, the audience could barely believe their eyes. The opposing team was cornered and throwing in the towel, because in these games, 3 to 4 goals per match are usually expected. But Ignite Academy had already scored 11 goals to 0 when the surrender happened. Lewin's school won with an overwhelming victory. The losing students left disappointed, convinced that Lewin wasn't bluffing about being the champion. Ignite Academy's morale soared even higher after another win. Interrupting the celebration, a voice calls out for Lewin. It's Professor Heidel, entering the room. He announces that the meeting date has been set. It will be at 7 in the evening, during dinner. As he sips a glass of wine, the mysterious man observes the landscape, hoping Lewin won't eat before coming to meet him. The protagonist walks to the meeting place. Ignite calls him over, pointing to the right room. Lewin greets the king, and they enter together. Passing through a purple portal, they find themselves in a different place. As he steps into the room, someone welcomes him. He feels a powerful mana radiating from the man and asks if he's a dragon. In truth, this man is a mage who walks the line between human and demigod. The famous and mysterious Flaming King Terran. A lavish table overflowing with food awaits them, a true feast. As he carves a steak, Terran reveals that while Lewin might not know it, he already knows a few things about the young man. He saw him once from afar, 5 years ago, when he was searching for the 11th child. Lewin was one of the candidates, but he was completely different back then. Anyway, Terran wants to get straight to the point and know what happened to the young man over all these years. Lewin now understands. His very existence proves the Boundary Mage's judgment was wrong. Terran wants to hear from the protagonist that he wasn't wrong back then. Politely, the young man says he can only tell the King of Mages one thing. Terran smiles and asks what it is. Lewin replies that even if his talents are inadequate, his effort isn't. With a dismissive air, the mage repeats the word effort. He comments that student and teacher are quite similar, as Ignite also used that very word. Then Terran asks what kind of effort he made. Sarcastically, the mage questions if it's believable that the young man trained enough to become stronger than an ogre and cast magic without incantation time, or if it's something more tangible, like an artifact, though he's never heard of one that does that. But Ignat interrupts the conversation, suggesting it's better to stop there. Taron agrees, saying there will still be many competitions in the future. He'll be watching the young man's every move to see if his efforts work against his own children. Smiling, Lewin asks him to keep watching. As he stands, the young man says he's also curious about one thing: how different the children chosen by the King of Mages are from him. Taron's gaze instantly shifts, as if that sounded like a challenge. Meanwhile, the stadium is already packed. People gather and start cheering. Ignite comments that the King of Mages was very polite and thanks him for it. Taron jokes, asking if Ignite thought he was going to devour the student or something. He says there was no need to worry, as he always likes to treat talented mages well. He was just curious. Ignat asks if the king's curiosity was satisfied. Taron replies that the boy didn't reveal his secrets, so there was no way to satisfy anything. However, another kind of curiosity had bloomed. That audacious rascal subtly warned him of something. Ignite asks Taron to go easy on the young man, as he's still just a youth. The young man didn't even seem scared in front of the King of Mages, while other men would beg and grovel. That makes him a truly fascinating person, and it makes Taron wish the child he's raising would become a little more interesting too. The stands erupt, and many shouts can be heard. Most people are cheering for Doom, but the young man looks grim, thinking this kind of cheering is insignificant to him. Suddenly, a young man appears, running to say something. He whispers something into Doom's ear, making him ask if he's sure about what he just said. The boy confirms. He saw Ardell go to the magic tower with his own eyes. Doom looks troubled by that information and clenches his fists. Because the Flaming King had a private meeting with someone who wasn't him, Doom watched some of Lewin's matches and heard he's a tough opponent due to his unique form of magic. But he didn't pay much attention, as he never considered him a worthy opponent. However, Taron shouldn't just be curious because the boy is unique. The image of the King of Mages chatting amicably with Lewin flashes in Doom's mind. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes in the corridor. Doom punches the wall, consumed by rage. He decides he won't forgive Ardell, as he's the only one who should have Taron's approval. The doors to Taron's room burst open, and our protagonist steps out, a look of shock on his face. He'd just stumbled upon a legendary figure, Doom Prime, who glared back with an unfriendly expression. Without hesitation, Lewin demanded to know what kind of conversation Doom had just had with the king. Stunned, Lewin asked if that was why Doom was waiting for him, but Doom ignored him, insisting Lewin answer his question first. Seriously, Lewin questioned if there was any reason he should tell him anything. As Doom slowly drew his sword from its sheath, he declared there was no reason, but he insisted on knowing. Disbelief etched on his face. Lewin wondered if Doom was really looking for a fight right here, right now. He then asked Doom if he expected them to brawl right there, far from the stadium. Doom, utterly unfazed, replied that if that's what it came to, he was more than ready. The two young men locked eyes. The heavy tension was palpable, the very air in the corridor growing thick with it. Prime was undeniably powerful. Lewin couldn't spot a single weakness, but it was almost unbelievable that Doom dared to draw his sword so far from the stadium. The blade was barely out of its sheath when, suddenly, a voice commanded them to stop. It was Irene Prouse, standing in the corridor, breaking up the impending fight. The young woman remarked that it looked like some kind of meeting had been arranged, seeing as everyone was present. Lewin mused that there wouldn't be any meeting, though he had been planning to create a welcoming space for a reception. The scowling young man simply ignored them both, turned his back, and walked away. Lewin then asked if Doom was always so sensitive. Irene explained that normally Doom was so quiet you barely heard his voice, but today was definitely an exception. Doom Prime's sensitive side flared up whenever King Taron was involved, as he'd do anything to earn his recognition. Doom might have gotten angry, thinking Lewin was getting some special attention from the king. The girl looked at Lewin with a friendly smile and asked if he was really ready to fight right then. Lewin replied no, believing Doom himself was just trying to scare him, because if they fought, both of them could be disqualified. Cheekily, Irene asked if it worked, and if Lewin got scared. Prime truly was like a thick wall, not easily breached by any attack. But Lewin believed that no matter how thick the wall, if you hit it repeatedly, it would eventually crumble. This made Irene burst out laughing, declaring Lewin was truly a strange one. Either way, it was good to be careful, because Doom Prime wasn't known for showing compassion, and from now on, his eyes would surely be glued to Lewin. Later, in the Ignat Academy dorms, Jason was utterly disappointed and complaining nonstop. Lewin tried to console him, saying everyone gave it their all. Hanks added that tying for 4th place in the team competition, even without their main representative, was nothing short of miraculous. It was a shame their winning streak ended. but even so, it showed their defiance against the global academy. The individual competition was about to begin, and Henkes asked what Lewin planned to do. Smiling, the team leader declared he would definitely win. Taking a sip of his hot chocolate, Lewin confirmed he needed to secure first place by the end. For now, Lewin's individual ranking was tied for first place. Irene, Cherky, Dillian, and Doom were all incredibly strong competitors. The next competition was called the Battle of Survival, and all 32 representatives were headed to an artificial island. First place earned 32 points, while last place got a mere 1 point. Since points determined the ranking, this competition could cause massive shifts. Henkes believed his friend could do very well, but asked if Lewin shouldn't be preparing like the others. The other representatives were already forming alliances. In this competition, forming alliances for survival was not only possible, but considered a valid strategy. With others potentially acting as teams, it would be virtually impossible for Lewin to handle everything alone. Henkes suggested Lewin try to join the column. One person had come to Lewin's mind from the start, but there was no guarantee she'd want to team up with him. Even if it were possible, Lewin remained deep in thought. Suddenly, Seda appeared, asking to form an alliance with Lewin. Lewin had forgotten, but Seda was a powerful ally. The two rushed off, agreeing not to betray each other mid-competition. Seda was honest, making him a good choice for a teammate, but they needed to hurry. They had one more person to recruit. Upon arriving, they noticed a crowd of people commenting on how demanding the girl was, refusing to join anyone. The academy's shield, adorned with flowers, swayed gently in the wind. Seda was shocked to realize this was Lewin's idea. Still stunned, Seda knew Irene was incredibly strong and asked if the two were friends. He then started getting excited about the idea of teaming up with Irene, but Lewin urged him to calm down, as he hadn't even asked yet. Apparently, everyone who'd come to ask her had been rejected. It almost felt like a love confession. But as the door opened, Irene told them to cut the chatter. She was already there, watching them, and with a smile asked if they should arrange a meeting to discuss strategies. The three new teammates began planning their strategies. Lewin confirmed the largest group would consist of 14 people. This group would be led by Dalian Malkin, considered a genius who always ranked among the top 5. This guy primarily used light magic and divine magic. Seda commented that Dalian would likely be the toughest person to deal with in the entire group, but our protagonist revealed there was someone else equally difficult to handle, Doom Prime, who now harbored a personal vendetta against him. The tournament's content, after all, varied based on each person's performance. Far away, a flying boat soared through the skies. A man asked if everyone was wearing their armor. Once an armor's durability ran out, competitors would be automatically teleported out and eliminated. The transport was already approaching the island where the tournament would take place. All competitors disembarked in a line. Seda trembled, visibly nervous, even before the start. All they had to do was survive on that island for 72 hours. Tension mounted around Doom Prime. All participants feared being near him. As expected, he preferred to work alone, but he was not to be underestimated. From there, the students just need to take a boat to the main island. Inside the small vessel, the guys pass through a blue portal and are transported to another environment. A barrier begins to shrink over time, defining the safe zone. The team needs to hurry to find a safe place before it's too late. The island boasts dense vegetation with countless trees. After exploring for a bit, one of the boys already feels hungry. Without intending to rebel against the leader, the bald guy comments that they should have grabbed food at the entrance, as it looked delicious. Irene teases him, saying he was the one who warned them to ambush their opponents first, but the argument is cut short by an abrupt noise. A massive explosion erupts near the boys. This makes Seda wonder if the fight has already begun. The bald guy's awaited moment has arrived. No more need to worry about food because the prey is already right below them. A group of unsuspecting students walks through the forest. One of the boys comments that they should have left the food for later, as it's much harder to walk now. A blue beam of light streaks towards the guys, directly hitting one of them who was carrying a heavy backpack. This alerts them, and everyone starts screaming about the surprise attack. As he charges his magic, Seda declares he was waiting for these rascals and finally unleashes his iron spear spell towards the unsuspecting targets. Meanwhile, Irene is also preparing an attack. A giant mana ball she holds above her head. That's the famous 5th level ice magic. A freezing, powerful blizzard flies towards their adversaries. As expected from Irene Prouse, she conjures such a powerful spell without even changing her facial expression. But while attacking, Seda notices a blow heading his way. The students realize the surprise attack is coming from 3 people, Irene among them. They decide to push forward, blocking as much as they can. The opponents they've encountered are powerful mages. After all, let's not forget they're also representatives. Faced with this, the the protagonist decides to jump into action as well. The sound of the protagonist dropping from the tree catches the attention of some of the boys. One of them glances at a bush and hurls a spell in that direction, shouting, "The enemy is there!" However, our hero narrowly dodges the blow and activates his time refraction ability, allowing him to swiftly weave through all the adversaries and even prepare a counterattack, landing a kick to one of the boys' stomachs. Another guy casts a binding spell. Lewin responds by hurling a gigantic fireball their way. The boys realize it's a mana explosion and decide to run for cover. One of them flees desperately, but the path begins to crumble. Seda signals for the protagonist to catch up. Our hero appears behind one of the fleeing boys with his energy ball. The impact is so powerful it can be seen from afar. Because of this, the poor boy who suffered the attack collapses unconscious to the ground. Soon, the area around him begins to change strangely, and his body starts to vanish, being transported to another location. His partners approach, witnessing the chaos. Now it's just 4 against 3. Fear gripping him, the remaining boy gives up and accepts defeat. This means our trio of mages now has plenty of food. Besides plenty of fruits, there was also meat for the feast. With the amount of food the students gathered, the heroes would have enough for 3 days. Another explosion was heard nearby, startling Seda. That was the location Dalian's group was heading towards. Starting a battle against a group of over 10 people was something to behold. This was what they called a bottleneck, as it was rare to find a mage with that level of magical power. The bald guy was surprised, saying Lewin had evolved greatly during the year they hadn't met. But Lewin's mind could only focus on how Doom Prime was an incredibly powerful individual. It was late afternoon, and a room door slowly creaked open. Sunset light streamed in, illuminating the space. There was no sign another group had been there, so the boys seized the moment of respite to relax and get some exercise. Seda thought about cooking, but spreading the scent would be too dangerous, so they decided against it for now. Irene asked how Lewin already knew. She meant everything was unfolding exactly as he expected. When they planned, they concluded the central village was the only place large enough to accommodate a massive number of people. Thus, Dalian's team would likely move there, and Doom Prime would head in that direction too. Irene questioned if Lewin was being reckless, heading towards a large group even when alone. Lewin was certain it would happen. It was the best way to win solo. Simply rack up as many kill points as possible. These points were added whenever someone eliminated an opponent, and it seemed like a highly plausible victory plan. Lewin, a bit sheepishly, explained he just thought about what he'd do in the same situation. Besides, Prime wanted to attract the Blazing King's attention, so he'd definitely act recklessly. Scratching her chin, Irene looked at Lewin and found the whole thing quite strange. Regardless, the trio decided to take turns and observe the situation carefully. Night fell, and a full moon illuminated the sky. Lewin was asleep, but someone called his name a few times. Irene said someone had come looking for them. Lewin peered out the window at the outside of the house. A hooded figure was lurking. Irene checked. It was just one person. At first, she thought the individual had no idea anyone was inside, but Lewin found the situation very strange and asked Irene to wake Seda, warning that he would stand guard at the door. The nocturnal visitor began to walk slowly across the grass, approaching the house door. Our hero crouched behind the door, ready for any move. Since it was a lone person, there was a high chance it was exactly who Lewin suspected. The door opened, and the visitor decided to invade the house. Lewin was hidden behind the door, unnoticed by the intruder. He firmly grabbed the hood of the man who had just entered and flung him forward, making him lose balance and fall. Then, he rushed over and clamped a hand over his mouth to prevent any noise. Irene seized the opportunity and illuminated the area with her light spell. Seda managed to identify the intruder. It was another representative named Calm Callis. The young man apologized for invading, claiming he had no idea the place was already occupied. To be sure, Lewin asked if the boy was alone, and he confirmed. Then Lewin asked what had happened to the other 6 members of his team. Only one word escaped the boy's lips, but it was enough to understand everything. Doom Prime. The boys had walked right into a trap. Their large group moved with calculated precision, planning to ambush Malkin's squad for easy kill points. But then Doom Prime burst onto the scene, instantly turning them into the hunted. Hearing the blast, Dalian led his entire team in a brutal assault. Calm Callis fought back fiercely, but only he and one other managed to slip away. But the nightmare wasn't over. The 2 wounded survivors limped onward. Suddenly, Doom Prime reappeared. He hadn't been part of the initial fight. Instead, he'd been lurking, waiting for the battle to end, then tracking the injured escapees. He'd masterfully exploited the chaos to gain a decisive advantage. Despite the audacity, Calm Callis brazenly asked if he could join their team. Seda stroked his chin, admitting, that guy had a pretty good strategy. But Lewin shot him down instantly, no questions asked. "How did you escape that battle, Callus?" he demanded. "If you faced Doom Prime, especially wounded, there's no way you'd have gotten out alive." Irene and Seda exchanged glances, sensing Lewin was hinting at something far deeper. 3 possibilities flashed through their minds. Callus was lying, Doom Prime deliberately let him go, or someone else was secretly watching them right now. Lewin, ever sharp, had already activated his player's eye ability. To his shock, he found absolutely no information on Callus. This chilling discovery confirmed his suspicion. This person was not who he claimed to be. The commotion startled a nearby owl, sending it soaring into the night. The moment Lewin's punch connected, the man vanished as if by magic. Lewin barked at his friends, "Hurry! We need to get out of here now! We're being watched!" A new dawn broke over the mysterious island. The heroes debated the chilling possibility. Had the real Callus been eliminated, replaced by a copy? Irene had a strong hunch about the culprit. She suspected Cherky. He was one of Delphaniac Magic School's top students, infamous for his potent potions and perfect copies, and he was part of Malkin's crew. This revelation meant they were surrounded, enemies lurking on all sides. With their location compromised, ambushes could strike at any moment. To make matters worse, the shrinking barrier would soon block their escape to the west. Embracing the old adage, "Set a thief to catch a thief," the heroes devised a daring plan: turn their enemies against each other. Meanwhile, in a hidden location, a voice cut through the air, asking Cherky if he'd pinpointed their adversaries. Cherky chuckled darkly. "They're scurrying like rats in the west," he reported. "I almost had them fooled, but they sniffed me out in the end." Dalian pressed him. "How was your copy discovered?" Cherky shrugged, unable to explain. "Lewin just acted with too much confidence. He landed a sudden punch, and that was it." "So, what's the next move?" Cherky asked. "Those 3 powerful mages are no joke." Dalian's eyes gleamed. "The plan is simple. Capture them. We'll unleash our full firepower." In the dense forest, the adventurer mages begin their trek. Walking in a line, they're ready for battle. Dalian glances back, saying they'll soon reach the western base, but a gigantic beam of light blindsides them just ahead. A noisy battle seems to have erupted, and Ardell must be involved. This is their chance to push forward. As they draw closer, they spot 3 silhouettes. One of them screams, "Watch your backs! It's an ambush!" The blonde mage draws his bow and fires a divine arrow, but he quickly realizes that silhouette isn't Lewin Ardell. A golden explosion erupts, bathing the entire forest in light. In reality, our 3 heroes wait high in a tree, everything going according to plan. Their adversaries came rushing as soon as they heard the fireworks. Seda starts laughing and Irene asks, "What do we do now?" The protagonist replies, "Time to go collect our kill points." Dalian and his partners are caught off guard by the ambush. Lewin dives from the trees wreathed in fire magic. The blonde mage is frozen, unable to react to the assault. One of his teammates is down, engulfed in flames. Irene watches Dalian's group, noticing their numbers have dwindled. They must have truly battled Doom Prime. Looking back, the guys spot some terrified mages. Perhaps a temporary alliance would be worth it in this situation. One of the adversaries charges forward, yelling, "Even if there are 6 enemies, we won't back down." The boy shoots forward like an arrow, tearing through them with fierce intensity. But he seems to lose control, his expression twisting as he bursts into flames. A fiery blast erupts among the mages on the battlefield. Dalian is terrified by what he just witnessed. Such immense power isn't something you see every day. His eyes wide, the protagonist knows this can only be Doom Prime's doing. And like thunder, Doom Prime appears, leaving a trail of blue energy in his wake. His sword carves through the adversaries' bodies like a wave. Seda realizes that, in a way, Doom Prime is helping them, another potential member for their temporary alliance. Lewin muses that Prime seems intent on eliminating Dalian's group first. All the survivors are gathered there. Dalian's group starts to panic, demanding to know why Doom Prime is only attacking them. Our hero knows he must move too, so he conjures his temporal refraction ability. He streaks through the adversaries like the wind, unleashing a flurry of blows. Finally, he charges a special punch and slams it into the ground, creating a true earthquake. As the attack ends, Lewin looks forward, seeing a massive number of adversaries wiped out, and there, before him, stands the dreaded Doom Prime. Doom Prime strides past him without striking a blow, but calls his name and vows to eliminate him personally later. After that, he continues attacking the other opponents still standing. Lewin sighs, looking back thoughtfully. Sometime later, far from the battle in the host's room, now officially only 10 competitors remain. Teron is eager to see the outcome, as Ardell claimed he'd prove himself better than the 11 kids. With a sly grin, Teron watches. He wonders if the protagonist will be able to defeat that punk. Sometime after the tense battle, our hero trains outside a small, cozy house. The group has settled into Base B, located near the island's center. As a result of that battle, only Dalian and Cherky remained. The group of survivors they fought vanished along with Doom Prime. A notification window flashes, and after ages, he finally completes his repeat mission. The house door creaks open, and out steps Irene, an early riser herself. She asks if Lewin was exercising, and he explains, "My body started to itch from all the inactivity." Seda had already prepared their meal so they could finally eat. Irene takes a small bite of the meat, and her eyes widen. The steak is absolutely delicious. Seda is truly a culinary genius, always outdoing himself. Irene apologizes for crashing without a word the previous day, explaining she was just too exhausted. Lewin pours some tea into his cup. Irene wants to bring up a topic with him, something she's always wondered. What are you planning to do after graduation, Lewin? She's curious about these things, especially with how close they've become. Once mages from this competition enter society, they automatically begin a symbiotic life. They can join a knight order to protect territory, or become members of a magic tower. There's also the option to join a special group for profit. These are the usual paths, but he finds himself wondering what he truly wants. To be honest, Lewin admits, I haven't really thought about it. Until last year, I was just a broke student, barely surviving, let alone planning my future. He believes he'll have a clearer idea once the competition ends and he returns to the academy. Lewin turns the question back on her, asking what she thinks, but Irene draws a blank too. She confesses, I never really had time to think about what kind of mage I wanted to be. I just followed others' advice. As she sips her tea, Lewin watches her. After their talk, Irene comes to a realization. She declares, I want to face Doom Prime first. She believes this fight will give her the conviction she needs to truly understand what kind of mage she wants to become. Lewin's expression turns serious as he considers this battle against Prime. For years, Prime had always been second best, an unscalable mountain in her path. Lewin considers it a respectable ambition and accepts her challenge. Everyone has their own battles to fight. Night descends, and the moon casts a gentle glow over the area. As time ticks by, the barrier closes in relentlessly. It's time for the group to make their move. The only safe havens tonight are the central village and their base, but they can't ignore the threat of Doom Prime setting an ambush. Waiting for others to fight first, however, would put them at risk due to the shrinking barrier. Seda argues they should just charge in, but Irene counters, it's better not to draw any attention right now. Then, Lewin reveals, I have an idea. Few competitors remain, and even a single rank up means a massive point boost. Everyone is treading carefully. Since the trio already used the tactic of luring opponents, making noise now won't attract anyone else. This is their chance to finally take down Doom Prime. Dalian and Cherky lost most of their allies and are hiding out today. Since Prime is overconfident in his abilities, he's bound to show up soon. Plus, if they delay facing him, they could run into serious trouble. Irene asks, where would we even find him? With a confident smirk, Lewin declares, leave that to me. Prime will come. Swift as the wind, our protagonist moves through the forest. Strang asks how Lewin plans to find his opponent using only the minimap. Lewin explains that while the minimap doesn't show exact locations, it reveals how many people are inside each base. If there are 2 dots, it's either Dalian and Cherky or other survivors. But if there's only 1 dot alone, it's obviously Doom Prime. Our hero arrives at a cabin deep in the forest. He slowly approaches the cabin door. Then he shouts for Doom Prime to come out. A red explosion shatters the door into splinters. A silhouette emerges from the house. With eyes blazing red with hatred, the man glares at Lewin. Lewin asks, did you sleep well, Doom Prime? We need to go somewhere now. Seda waits, barely containing his nervousness. Seeing his friend arrive with the target, Seda asks if Lewin was captured by Doom Prime, but our hero says he merely brought him here. The bald man asks if Lewin wasn't going to ambush him, but Lewin explains, I never intended to. Turning to Prime, Lewin begins to speak. He declares that Prime's opponent won't be Lewin, but Irene Prius. Completely bewildered, Seda just watches. Doom sighs before responding to the challenge. With arms crossed, Doom Prime states, the girl is no match for me. Besides, if she's eliminated now, it'll disappoint the Flame King, so she should survive longer and raise her rank. But with a firm voice, the young woman says, that's not my goal in this competition. My main objective right now is to defeat my primary rival. Henke's memories of Irene surface, revealing how nervous she gets about losing to Doom Prime every year. There seems to be something related to her family too, but Irene prefers not to answer many questions. This way, she must have found a way to handle the pressure, gaining confidence in the kind of mage she wants to be. Lewin watches his friend unleash her powers in this decisive battle. As she charges her mana, Irene is sweating and visibly apprehensive. Then she unleashes her Ice Storm magic. Doom Prime takes a defensive stance as the attack hurtles towards him. The spell's impact on the surface creates an intense blue light that engulfs the area. Irene's expression shifts. She realizes something. Like a black hole devouring a star, Prime's counterspell erupts. A defensive dome begins to crack. It crumbles into countless shards that fly through the air, revealing Doom Prime completely unharmed behind it. Despite having no apparent injuries, Prime seems quite agitated. Sweat drips even faster down Irene's face, fueled by the intense tension. Worried, Seda asks Lewin if it's okay to leave their comrade in this situation. Lewin isn't feeling too good about it either. Preparing a potent sword strike, Doom Prime charges full force at his opponent. Along with it, he unleashes a blazing fire spell towards Irene. Irene knows she can't possibly dodge that assault. Then, breaking their agreement, Lewin steps in front of the fire spell. He explains, "I agreed to let her attack first, but I didn't agree to let him finish her off. You can't lose such a valuable comrade, even if it's just for the sake of victory." Now, Lewin steps forward and shouts at Prime, challenging him to have some fun. Prime asks, "Will you face me alone, or will you join the lump of muscle back there?" Seda takes offense at the unusual nickname. Lewin replies, "I'll face you alone. 2 people would be too much against you, Prime." Lewin had learned from Sir Jolter how to counter swordsmen. For a knight, his legs were everything. They didn't just power his sword, they allowed him to predict an enemy's every move. The secret, then, was to watch his opponent's feet. Lewin's gaze locked onto Prime's stance. The instant he spotted an opening, he knew it was time. Lewin ducked under his rival's blade, dodging the strike. A brilliant, perfectly executed maneuver. But then, something completely blindsided him. Prime's sword unleashed a wide, scarlet spell, inevitably striking Lewin. Doom Prime reminded Lewin he wasn't just a knight, he was a mage. People claimed magic swordsmen didn't exist, but that was only because they hadn't met him yet. Without a moment's pause, Prime pressed his relentless assault on Lewin. Lewin dodged blow after blow as the swordsman taunted him, demanding he defend himself. This was uncharted territory for Lewin. He'd never faced an opponent like this. Until now, dealing with mages meant closing the distance and exploiting their usual weakness, casting time. But this foe compensated for that gap by weaponizing his sword. Lewin planted his feet after countless dodges, only then realizing he'd been wounded in the leg without even noticing. Doom Prime called this ability Radiant Impact. This wound would relentlessly drain Lewin's movements until he was utterly immobilized, just like Irene. After his chilling explanation, Prime decided it was time to end this. A colossal beam of violet light erupted from the ground. The surrounding earth pulsed with intricate magical patterns. A pair of black wings burst from Prime's back as he conjured a truly spectacular spell. Irene and Seda gasped in despair, their faces etched with terror for Lewin. Lewin knew this was a 5-star spell, the dreaded, devastating Wings of the Demon. The spell's impact was so immense, it felt like a hurricane had ripped through. Trees thrashed wildly in the gale. Irene had to brace herself to avoid being swept away, and Seda began to be carried off by the furious winds. Still in his casting stance, Prime unleashed cataclysmic destruction all around him. But by sheer luck, Lewin managed to hide behind a massive boulder, realizing Prime truly deserved his title as the winner of previous festivals. With his teeth, Lewin tore a piece of his sleeve, using it as a makeshift tourniquet to protect the wound on his leg. But as he did, something caught his eye. The ring he'd bought from the antique shop was glowing on his finger. A crater of utter destruction now surrounded Prime. Prime had held some expectations for Lewin, but now he was utterly disappointed. As he emerged from his hiding spot, Lewin admitted one thing. His opponent was truly formidable. For a moment, Lewin felt like he was facing an unmovable wall. Prime sneered, "Will you give up?" But that wasn't an option for Lewin. Too many people believed and trusted in him, and that fueled his resolve to shatter this wall. This sheer, unyielding determination made Prime believe Lewin was truly insane, and he vowed to teach Lewin a lesson, to shut his mouth for good. But before Prime could make his first move, Lewin unleashed the Ghoul's Fury spell. With fury blazing in his eyes, Lewin roared, "Doom Prime, watch your words!" and charged his opponent like a lightning bolt striking the earth. Prime knew that if Lewin couldn't dodge this strike, he would die. But nothing would stop Lewin's iron determination. The two forces collided. Both gave their absolute all to win the duel. And Lewin's weapon was none other than his ring, for there was a chance it would activate and resist physical damage. Defying all odds, the ring flared to life, shattering Prime's sword in half. Shards of the sword exploded into the air, and a nasty wound ripped open on Doom's shoulder. His expression was pure pure shock and disbelief as Lewin surged past him. Doom's face, once stunned, now twisted into a scream of pure rage, but the protagonist seized the chance to finish his combo, sweeping the young man's legs and slamming him to the ground. The hero pinned him down, leaning in to deliver an important message. He declared, "Doom, you're no match for me. All you have is arrogance and the belief that you're the best." Then, Lewin charged a devastating punch, leaving Doom no time to react. Like a lightning bolt, the strike slammed into his opponent's face. His body began to shimmer, then vanished, teleported out of the arena. Seda breathes a sigh of relief, admitting he was worried. If his friend had lost, he'd have been next. Lewin glances at Irene, seeing her head bowed, a cloud of sadness and dissatisfaction shadowing her face. He steps closer, apologizing for interfering in her battle. She replies that she should be apologizing. Her own greed nearly doomed their entire team. Regardless, Irene failed her objective in the competition. She tells Lewin not to worry because that objective is gone. Her new target isn't Doom Prime anymore. It's Lewin himself. Smiling, he says, "That won't be easy." Irene smiles back. "I know," she affirms, "but you better prepare. One day, I will surpass you." Including the trio, 5 competitors remained. Dalian and Cherky fought fiercely, but they were no match for the 3 heroes. The intense battle illuminated the entire forest night, unleashing a storm of spells and blows that filled the air with smoke. In the end, both opponents fell. Dalian's body shimmered, then vanished, transported out of the arena. The 3 warriors surveyed their victory. They were the sole survivors of the competition, and Seda never imagined it would come to this. Lewin then asks if they want a final showdown now. Irene, however, says she prefers to forfeit. She's not at her peak and would rather try another time. Lewin understands she must be utterly exhausted and agrees they'll fight another day. Seda declares, "It's my turn. I might be the team leader, but that means nothing now. I'll unleash my true power." Lewin braces himself, ready to strike. And before he could even blink, Seda was already soaring through the air. And so, Lewin, the Ignite Academy's representative, claimed first place. All the students gathered around a lavish feast, celebrating his victory. A familiar voice chimed in, saying they knew he'd be here once they noticed his absence from the dorms. It was Irene and Seda here to visit their friend. She said she desperately wanted to congratulate him, and Seda practically begged to tag along. It seemed her sharp tongue wasn't just for the game. After the brutal survival battle, Lewin stood alone at the top. Doom Prime racked up plenty of kill points, but since he didn't survive to the end, his rank plummeted. Dalian and Irene also landed below Doom. Jason is on cloud 9, realizing he's at the same table as his muse, Irene Prouse. He thinks if things keep going this way, the dream of being close to her might not be so far off. So, he declares, everyone would be drinking with the goddess this time. The girl can't help but burst out laughing. Seeing everyone happy and having fun warms Lewin's heart. The group drinks and celebrates until sunset. Some students start whispering about Lewin being the champion, and someone else shushes them, warning them not to let Doom hear. Doom Prime is shattered by his loss, unable to believe it. The swordsman had dropped his guard, never imagining his opponent would aim for his sword, not him. He realized it in that instant, but still swung his sword, desperately hoping for victory. Losing with the king watching is simply unacceptable. He asks his colleague if the king hasn't sought him out yet today, but his friend tries to calm him, suggesting he should rest a bit first. However, since Doom wants to be alone, his colleague decides to respect his wishes. As he stares into his locker, Prime remains silent. A strange aura emanates from him. A celebration party was in full swing. Everyone was certain a new generation of mages was rising with Lewin's victory over Prime. From above, Dean Ignat observed everything. He had expected his student to do well, but never imagined he'd achieve such a feat. For Teron, Lewin's victory was a blow to his dignity, especially having to face that brat's smug face in the competition hall. The dean was surprised to hear that and asked if the hall was ready yet. The grand festival was drawing to a close. A few days had passed since the survival battle ended. In the end, Ignite Academy tied for 3rd place, a true miracle for the Acadamongols, as they were once called. Only the final individual competition remained. Our protagonist was brimming with confidence, a smile gracing his face. The next trial was an obstacle course demanding athleticism, combat, and swimming. Summoned beasts or teleportation were permitted. Seda approached and asked Lewin how he was feeling. Everyone was chanting his name, as if he were the main character of the entire competition. The boy looked back, admitting he wasn't sure what to make of it. Honestly, Lewin would have loved to savor the moment, but he couldn't. Not yet. There was no celebrating until the victor was confirmed. The sun blazed over the city, warming the day. It was the day of the individual competition. Seda, the bald man, declared he wouldn't go easy on his friend. Pointing his weapon skyward, the judge roared for everyone to prepare. The top competitors were all intensely focused. The starting pistol cracked, and they were off. While some surged forward on foot, others summoned their guardians, and some even used teleportation spells. The crowd in the stands roared with all their might. A mustached man noticed something unusual and pointed. Lewin Ardell wasn't running with the other competitors. He was waiting, leaning back, a highly suspicious smile plastered across his face. Dust kicked up by the leading competitors began to rise. It was a fierce battle, everyone giving their all to get ahead. Malkin commented that Irene must be exhausted by now. He asked if she'd like to form a temporary alliance, something he seemed quite fond of doing. The thundering gallop of an approaching horse echoed from behind. It was Doom Prime, with his new sword, closing in fast. Wielding a spell with his weapon, he incinerated the enemies blocking the path ahead. The blonde man had known Doom for 6 years, but had never managed to befriend him. The swordsman never accepted alliances. Reflected in his horse's eyes, the warrior's fierce combat was visible. Goblins and monsters were effortlessly decimated, but the young man's mind was elsewhere, wondering why a certain person still hadn't appeared. Or perhaps he was already ahead, though Prime couldn't believe that was possible. Prime had been leading from the start, and he'd only seen 2 other competitors near him, so it was almost certain this person was still behind. The boy couldn't contain his curiosity, and asked Irene, "Where's Lewin?" The girl couldn't say, but now that she thought about it, everything felt very strange. The mages had been at the front lines for a good while, and no one had appeared. Even if he'd started late, the guy should have caught up by now, but there was still nothing. Then, a loud noise caught the boy's attention. Smoke billowed, obscuring their view and making it hard to tell what was happening. Suddenly, a figure emerged from it. It was Lewin, who declared, "I've finally caught up." Prime's gaze locked onto the young man the moment he appeared. Concerned, Irene asked, "What happened to the other participants?" With a sarcastic smile, the protagonist replied, "They're not around anymore." For a while, the crowd in the stands had been utterly confused by the hero's lack of movement. But ever since he decided to join the festival, Lewin had been waiting for this day. The competition he was most confident he could win. As a short-range mage, exposing his back to a distant opponent would be far too risky. So the young man devised a strategy. After much thought and deliberation, he put his plan into action. Eliminate them one by one from behind, and so it began. Lewin slowly approached his adversaries. As he moved past the competitors, the boy kept count of how many he'd taken down, but he eventually lost track. All his opponents were caught off guard by his skill, until the hero neared his friend. Sita noticed the boy approaching and asked when he'd arrived. With a slight smile, the young man asked if his friend understood that games are games. The bald man wondered if their endless battles would begin anew, and while apologizing, Lewin lunged at his friend. Kicking Seta's iron guardian with force, Lewin sent it flying upwards. With that, Seta was also swept out of the competition. Shocked, Irene asked if the boy had eliminated everyone. Lewin replied that some might be trying to get back into the race, but for now, there were no more signs of intruders, and the hero's gaze met Prime's. The swordsman declared with a firm voice that this time, their clash would be different. Our protagonist approached the group of competitors. Prime declared he'd love to point his sword at the protagonist right now, but reminded him that others were still pursuing them. A flaming horse aura erupted around Prime, and as it materialized, he mounted his battle guardian. Wishing to meet the protagonist further in the competition, Prime quickly departed, leaving the other competitors behind. Dalian asked Prime if he planned to force his way through, as that area was full of traps. Lewin merely watched his rival distance himself with a neutral expression. By now, the castle was riddled with traps guarding its treasure, making it a dangerous place where anyone could be severely injured if they acted recklessly. The safest way to proceed would be to disarm the traps, a perfect opportunity to test a mage's wisdom and crisis management skills. However, disarming traps takes a lot of time. Lewin then considered using Draca's method and just destroying them all. Still, it was impossible to destroy a wall as thick as the castle's, so he planned to target the oldest areas. With this goal, Lewin began examining all the walls with his player's vision ability, until after much searching, he managed to spot a weak point. One of the bricks apparently was old and corroded. It was the perfect chance to put his plan into action. With a firm punch, Lewin intended to clear a path. Dalian considered that move unthinkable, but Irene said it was just what she expected from her friend. This made the blonde man say he understood they were close, but this was too much. While Dalian judged the protagonist's strategic choices, Irene yelled for him to look in that direction. The spot Lewin punched was indeed cracked and compromised, opening a passage through the wall. Incredulous, Dalian shouted in surprise, but Irene had already guessed her friend would have a plan. Embarrassed, he asked if he could use that path too. But with a smile, Lewin denied his request, making gestures to restore the wall he had just broken. Dalian was left desperate and unable to pass. Strang is shocked the protagonist shattered the wall with only 2400 strength. Now, only Lewin and Doom Prime lead the pack. Lewin quickly catches up to his rival. Prime also managed to pass, but clearly rushed and got hit by an arrow. Lewin realizes Prime is desperate to win this competition. Just then, his horse's summoning time starts to run out. If it comes down to just a race, Prime will never be a match for Lewin. Enraged, Prime draws his sword, aiming a strike at Lewin, who deftly dodges. But Lewin seizes the chance, closing in to grab Prime's clothes, declaring they'll finish the last leg of the trial together. Both tumble over a cliff, plunging straight into the water below. Lewin resurfaces, gasping for air. It all went according to plan. Lewin would have been at a disadvantage if his opponent used magic to scale the cliff. Lewin starts swimming furiously to escape, but chunks of ice begin to appear in the water. The ice is forming from Prime's magic. Lewin yells at Prime to stop freezing the water, warning that people will be swimming there. Soon, the protagonist's body is completely encased in ice. Prime approaches, asking if he should really worry about that in a competition. With a sarcastic smirk, he declares, "Time to get going." Unable to move, Lewin is trapped in the ice. To break free, he begins to conjure fire magic. The magic is effective. The ice slowly cracks, shattering the frozen layer of water. Meanwhile, Prime gallops towards victory on his horse. He's shocked to see the protagonist has already caught up. The finish line is just ahead, Altane Stadium. No more obstacles now. All Lewin needs to do is run incredibly fast. Accelerating his movements, Lewin leaps. As he descends towards Prime, he asks if they should have a rematch. Prime, however, knows that in his current state, it would be a terrible idea. With a thunderous landing, Lewin's movements kick up a cloud of dust. From the stadium, people watch, but can't quite make out what's happening or who's winning. One man spots something and shouts for everyone to look. At the arena entrance, the silhouette of a horse appears. It's Doom Prime's battle guardian charging forward. Everyone tenses, seeing neither mage has appeared yet. But on the big screen, Prime is seen collapsed while Lewin stands before him. It seems Prime pushed himself too hard navigating the trap-filled section. He himself said that shouldn't be a concern during a competition. Prime lies fallen, helpless, and unable to move. The protagonist turns to continue, and with the same words his rival used, he declares, "Time to get going." It's time for the awards ceremony, and everyone gathers in the stadium. Our hero claimed 2 awards, the survival battle and the triathlon, securing victory in the individual competitions and first place in the overall score. The grand festival concluded. Crowds chanted his name. The young man, once seen as a failed student, was now hailed as the mage of the new generation. Those voices touched his heart, bringing the overwhelming feeling that all the suffering of the past 6 years, the loneliness of being trapped in a dark cave, his relentless hard work, it had all been worth it. Seeing that cheering crowd was the reward for years of effort. From atop the podium, the protagonist raised his arms, thanking them from the bottom of his heart, wishing he would never lose the support of that crowd again. Carriages appeared as night fell, all carrying selected nobles, for only the wealthiest families had been invited. They were there solely to see Lewin, the hero, but it was also boring for him. He just wanted to get back to the academy. A voice broke his thoughts, remarking on how strange the situation was. It was Irene, elegantly dressed in a beautiful white gown. She found it odd that no one was striking up a conversation with him. He believed it was his arrogant demeanor, especially since he'd shown up to the banquet in such uninspired attire. She agreed that might be part of it, but from what she'd heard, it wasn't the only reason. Most nobles were there to make connections with him, so it was incredibly strange that no one had approached. She'd heard someone had claimed him, a man powerful enough to keep any noble away from the hero. Intrigued, Lewin asked who it could be, but before Irene could answer, an elder shouted that the banquet was about to begin, and the 32 representatives should follow him. The table was laden with delicious food. This dinner with the blazing king was a lavish feast, prepared fit for an emperor, but the banquet was merely a disguise for a general student evaluation, a true guillotine for those with poor performance. Speaking of which, Lewin noticed some empty seats at the dinner. He thought only the king would attend, but there were 2 seats of honor. Soon, the organizer appeared and announced they were arriving. As a sign of respect, everyone rose. When Taron arrived, people bowed and called him Lord King of Flames, a title that disgusted Lewin. However, he was surprised to see a mysterious figure ignoring the honorifics. This mysterious person simply said he worried about interrupting dinner for no reason. The man was impeccably dressed, wearing a fine hat and formal attire. Lewin wondered who this man could be. But before he could finish his thoughts, everyone around him bowed deeply to the crown prince. Lewin looked utterly shocked by the revelation. After that, the atmosphere at the table grew even more tense. The students were uncomfortable, unsure how to act. Lewin also remained silent. Tehran broke the silence, stating that none of the 11 had managed to defeat Lewin even once, and questioned if the power gap was truly that vast. It was deeply disappointing, even shameful, to call them his children. Lowering his head, his voice trembling, Doom Prime declared he would never show his weak side again. "Second place is an illusion created by incompetence," he spat. "And the only thing proven at that festival is that a dragon can emerge even from a small stream." This was incredibly uncomfortable. It felt like the banquet had been orchestrated solely to humiliate the 11 young students. And the Blazing King wasn't the only one making Lewin uneasy. The newcomer had been staring at him intensely since he arrived. Shomertan Raynak sipped his wine, his gaze fixed on Lewin with fierce intensity. Despite the disadvantage of being the third son, the man had used his brilliant mind and exceptional political cunning as weapons, surpassing his brothers. He was a person of supreme literary and martial arts skill, practically a perfectionist. Irene's words echoed in Lewin's mind, and he realized this prince might be the powerful person she'd mentioned. Tehran asked how Lewin felt about being the festival's victor. Lewin knew it was a loaded question and swallowed hard before answering. He then stated he felt uncomfortable, which clearly surprised the king. Lewin explained that while he was happy with his performance, he was upset about being used to diminish the other students and their efforts. Lewin's words sent a ripple through the room. The atmosphere at the table shifted dramatically. Tehran's gaze transformed as well. The king responded that this sense of inferiority was, in a way, fuel for growth. But to Lewin, it seemed the king was merely trying to incite hostility among the other participants, a stark contrast to what he'd just said. Furthermore, Lewin hadn't come from some small stream. His hometown was Ardell, a beautiful place, and the academy he represented shouldn't be diminished and called a stream either. The hero's defiant stance seemed to ignite something within the king. An uncomfortable silence hung heavy over the dinner table. The prince let out a mischievous smirk, but quickly couldn't hold back and burst into loud laughter, causing tension for Lewin. Then Lewin remarked that the prince seemed like a real handful, and Tehran confirmed he'd warned him just how interesting that boy was. The situation was so amusing that the prince's stomach ached from laughter, and he wondered aloud where someone like Lewin had come from. Tehran replied that he'd thought Lewin came from a small, unassuming place, but apparently it was a beautiful territory he now wished to explore. Ingrid breathed a sigh of relief, seeing that despite the provocation, everything had gone smoothly. She asked if Lewin intended to surprise them again, but he simply replied. The prince acknowledged it was a fine victory speech, but since he'd been hearing this idealistic tale from Tyrion for a while, his thoughts likely wouldn't change. However, Lewin's words were more refreshing than anything the dean had to say, and the king was clearly looking forward to the future. With that, the king declared the banquet would now conclude. Before anyone could move, the prince asked them to wait a moment. He rose and strode directly to Lewin, extending an invitation for tea. With an unsettling grin, he declared he wouldn't take no for an answer. A while later, Lewin and the enigmatic prince found themselves together in a lavish room. Lewin knew the prince hadn't brought him here just to congratulate him on his festival victory. The noble called Lewin's name, cutting through his thoughts. He demanded Lewin work for him from this day forward, adding that he wouldn't take no for an answer this time either. Lewin would be given a month to prepare, then his school transfer would be arranged, along with a place for him to stay. And of course, Lewin would also have to consider naturalization, as there was no reason for the crown prince's closest associate to remain a foreigner. Lewin questioned the prince's reasoning, asking if the empire didn't already boast excellent mages, like Doom Prime. But the prince sharply reminded him that Lewin had lost in the end, then scoffed, "How dare you ask me to choose a loser?" Furthermore, when speaking with him, Lewin needs to keep two things in mind. First, the prince prefers a simple yes over questions. That statement sent a shiver down Lewin's spine. But regardless, the prince will answer his question. The first reason for calling him was that his godfather personally recommended him. The prince also admired the young man's sheer guts, the bravery to act so cocky in front of him, while everyone else desperately tried to impress those in power. Beyond that, the grit to confront his godfather and voice his opinions. And finally, the audacity to keep questioning the prince even after being warned. When you're involved in politics, there are times you need someone interesting by your side. The prince wants Lewin to protect him from his damned brothers, who can't stomach the fact that their youngest sibling became the crown prince. Lewin swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat at the request. Then the prince asked if Lewin wouldn't be willing to accept, and he replied, and that's precisely why the prince had warned warned him beforehand that he wouldn't take no for an answer. The Empire's highest authority was offering Lewin the chance to become his closest associate, the opportunity of a lifetime. In truth, most mages eventually align themselves with powerful figures, and if Lewin let this opportunity slip, he might regret it. Regardless, Lewin wasn't willing to become anyone's mage. He still had too many things he wanted to do. Raynak thought Lewin was a realist, but he was proving to be a true idealist. It was an incredibly rare opportunity, yet Lewin had the nerve to refuse. He replied, "Perhaps." Then, as the protagonist stood up, the prince told him to pretend this conversation never happened. He remarked that people were calling him the brightest jewel at this festival. The prince's hobby was collecting jewels, and so far, there wasn't a single one he didn't possess, because the prince simply shattered any he couldn't acquire. Paying little mind to what he'd heard, Lewin began to withdraw, turning his back on one of the Empire's most important figures. Sometime later, Lewin leaned against a pillar, lost in thought. The prince's last words were definitely a threat, and Lewin wondered if he'd made the right decision. Just then, two of his friends appeared and greeted him. Jason asked why Lewin had vanished, wondering if he was on some secret date. In a luxurious room, the prince mused that he was curious about Lewin, the young man his godfather had recommended. Ultimately, their conversation hadn't been productive. Even a threat proved useless. Tehran asked if the prince would give up, but he declared he absolutely would not. His godfather should know he possessed a great desire to collect. And in the end, Lewin Ardell would still be his, for the prince had already made his decision. The sun was already setting, and our hero continued his training routine. With sheer determination, he managed to complete today's mission as well. Lying on the grass, exhausted but happy, Strang commented that the young man's body was getting better every day. But Lewin retorted that he didn't want to hear that coming from a man. The little bear shot back, claiming she was a woman. Surprised, the boy sat up and asked how an incarnation could even have a gender. The little creature simply stated she was born that way, and there was no reason they shouldn't have one. Besides, the young man had never even asked. The two of them showered together, despite Strang claiming there wasn't much to see anyway. This, of course, meant Strang had been looking where he shouldn't have. But Lewin's anger quickly morphed into a small smirk. He began to stand, declaring he'd go on ahead, and that the little bear was banished from now on for making such a joke. The scene shifted to the train station, where students boarded the locomotive. Jason warmly bid farewell to his friend, who retorted there was no need for such dramatics, as no one was dying. The iron train began to puff smoke, announcing its departure, and our protagonist watched his friends leave. A boy in a trench coat approached, stating they should depart now too. As the festival's victor, our hero needed to travel to Raverdine to fulfill his obligations, accompanied by a bowl-cut mage who introduced himself as Street Cat, his bodyguard. The man's level was so high that Lewin couldn't glean any information using his player's gaze. This meant he had to be at the same level as the magic school's professors, or even higher. The bowl-cut mage explained that first, the protagonist would need to go to the Imperial Palace to be congratulated. But the man was speaking in such an odd manner that Lewin asked him to try and speak more comfortably, given Lewin was only 16. But Street Cat shot back that he was perfectly comfortable. The boy realized this man was truly meticulous and professional. After the palace, the young man will be taken to the magic tower and selected by an artifact. He might not even be chosen, as the selection depends entirely on the artifact. This makes Lewin wonder if the artifact possesses consciousness, just like Kingram. Finally, he'll be assigned a mission. Normally, students aren't assigned missions, but this is an exception for champions. The boy realizes it's like a coming-of-age ceremony. He then gets to choose his preferred mission from a list of distinct tasks, but Strang approaches and whispers something into his ear. After hearing her words, he glances at the mission list and picks one from the many options. Sometime later, a magnificent castle appears atop a mountain. This is the Crown Prince's palace, and everyone awaits the hero's arrival. Street Cat bids farewell, saying he's leaving, but Lewin asks if he won't accompany him. But it's too late. The palace's colossal doors begin to swing open. The ambitious prince is already there, waiting for the protagonist. Hands on his hips, the man welcomes him to his empire. Speechless, the young man simply watches. First, our hero receives 10,000 gold from the monarch. Raynak seems not to have given up on his offer to the boy, stating the palace doors will always be open. After this, the young man moves on to his next task. Walking through the palace's gigantic corridors is already exhausting, but Street Cat pays little attention to the boy's chatter, saying, "Lord Topju is waiting for you." This makes our young hero realize the palace staff truly have no sense of humor. The bowl-cut mage asks if the hero has truly decided on that mission. Fearless, Lewin replies, I'm decided. The man realizes the boy chose the most difficult mission. The doors to the protagonist's next room swing open. A figure awaits him at the back of the room. It's Tehran, who welcomes him. After serving him some tea, Tehran asks if the young man chose the search mission, when the easiest would have been subjugation. All he'd have to do is join the Imperial Guards, annihilate some bandits, and be hailed as a hero. But Tehran can't grasp why the boy would want to go to that empty, lost place. Lewin remembers Strang's words. This mission would be the best choice because the location is Kingram's homeland. Plus, there's another crucial point. It's where Draca lived for 100 years. The Sky Mountain, a territory north of the Radian Kingdom, was once home to the ancient ogres. Today, however, with the exception of Kingram, all perished in the Great War, and no ogre lives there anymore. The exploration mission in this location is considered the most difficult of all, due to an insurmountable barrier. To this day, no mage or scholar has managed to discover how to cross it. Tehran, the Blazing King, was curious why Lewin was interested in this task. Perhaps Lewin was intrigued by the theory that the ogre god's fury had transformed the place into a sanctuary. He knew others wouldn't have a reason to visit the area, but for him, the fact that Dracagonia had lived there for 100 years was more than enough. However, there was no need to reveal this to the Flaming King, so the young man simply explained his interest stemmed from it being the most challenging mission. Tehran suggested Lewin pick another mission, explaining its difficulty lay solely in the complexity of breaching the barrier. With a challenging glint in his eye, Lewin asked if it wouldn't be incredibly impressive for a 16-year-old student to figure out how to get inside. The king then warned him that he could be the first to fail the mission meant for the festival's great victors. Still unconvinced, Tehran looked at Lewin and asked if he had any idea why he'd recommended him to the crown prince. The king wanted the boy to stay in Ravardine so he could keep a close eye on him. Lewin felt a cold sweat break out at the monarch's words. Tehran finished, adding that he believed the young man's unique ability was tied to his choice of this mission, and regardless, he'd be watching closely. Back in his own chambers, Lewin asked Strang if he'd truly be able to accomplish his goal. The place he was heading had been damaged for years, and it was uncertain if he'd find anything after all that had happened. The little bear replied that while no one had found anything using human methods, he would succeed, for he possessed powers far beyond a normal human's. A knock came at the door, a voice identifying itself as Javeloso. Lewin told them to enter, and then two guards appeared, Street Cat and Delicious Boar. Strang found the names weird, but they explained these were the Flaming King's preferences, and all mages had similar monikers. The boar approached with a friendly grin and asked if they could head to the artifact chamber, Lewin's final reward. The magic tower's room was split into 4 areas, C, B, A, and X. Area C held the most common artifacts, while X guarded the rarest. Lewin would be allowed to search up to Area A, as Area X wasn't open to anyone, not even the Emperor, unless a special event occurred. He wondered what kind of event that could possibly be. Following his guides, Lewin began searching Area C. Only high-quality items were kept there, and he quickly found a magic sword. As expected from a magic tower, even the items in Area C were astonishing. He also discovered a famous book that had been in the room for over 100 years, another titled Beyond the Walls of Class 7 by Deckham Cruz, and a third, Exploring Unknown Lands in Search of Ancient Creatures. Lewin asked if, being in a magic tower, they could read any books they wanted, and the cat replied that it depended on what the master permitted. Area B was a veritable treasure trove of knowledge filled with books of all kinds. However, upon reaching Area A, not a single artifact reacted to the young man. Curious, Lewin asked if it was common for someone not to be selected by any artifact, and the boar confirmed, stating it was incredibly rare. If a wizard was allowed into Area A, it meant he possessed the ability to attract an artifact's attention. Being rejected by all of them was, therefore, quite disheartening for Lewin. Strang, arms crossed, declared there was no reason to be upset, as everything there was just trash. While these might be precious treasures to humans, the most valuable item wasn't there. Instead, it was guarded behind that massive door the little bear pointed to, the famous, mysterious Area X, a place few could ever enter. Strang believed there had to be at least one dragon-made artifact, judging by the scent he detected. But even with such precious items, Lewin wasn't allowed inside, so he had to focus on what he could take from the current room. Suddenly, an intense green light erupted from Area X's door, engulfing the entire space. The two guards accompanying him visibly flinched, fear etched on their faces. The boar guard began to shout, "The special event is finally happening, for the first time in 56 years!" In Tehran's chamber, the king questioned if Kunkan's tooth had truly reacted to Lewin. Street Cat lowered his head and confirmed it. This meant the young man possessed enough talent to succeed to the throne. 3 items of unparalleled power were guarded within Area X: a staff, a suit of armor, and a tooth. All 3 shared a common trait. They allowed their owner to remain at the absolute pinnacle. The staff infinitely amplified its user's magical power and was the symbol of the King of Mages. 56 years ago, Tehran himself was chosen by the staff of Algol, and before him, every individual chosen by this artifact ascended to the highest position in the tower. Morshi's armor was impervious to any attack or magic, choosing its owner every century. All who were chosen became legendary knights. Kunkan's molar tooth, belonging to the first ogre chieftain, however, had never selected a master in several hundred years. This meant Lewin truly would achieve the power to reach the throne. Lewin lifted the tooth with astonishing ease. The item was so heavy that 6 adult men could barely carry it without immense struggle. It was as if the young man possessed the strength of an ogre himself. Thoughts raced through the king's mind. Lewin's apparent ogre-like strength, his choice for the Sky Mountain mission, and the undeniable fact that Kunkan's tooth had chosen him as its master. Tehran urgently requested someone be summoned. With a firm voice and a grave expression, the king commanded, "Summon the Scream Mage!" The protagonist decided to head west, towards Sky Mountain. He had 1 month to complete his mission. The young man received all the necessary supplies for his journey. As he packed his belongings, Street Cat watched him intently. Noticing the gaze, Lewin asked if the man had anything else to say. Street Cat replied, yes and no, at the same time. As a mage of the Magic Tower, I'm not permitted to express personal opinions, so, in that sense, there's nothing more to add. However, as a veteran, I do have crucial advice. The Magic Tower is incredibly kind to the mages under its wing, but utterly ruthless to those not under its control. Therefore, you must be extremely cautious and doubt everything. Lewin listened carefully, taking the advice to heart. The scene then shifts to the ancient Tesharan Castle, located in the city closest to Sky Mountain. It was built to protect against ogre invasions. That's why its walls were taller than the capital's, and its military might was formidable, boasting soldiers in iron armor. That's what Lewin had read in books, but reality proved to be starkly different. The city is truly desolate, having lost its original purpose. Built to fend off ogre attacks, that threat had now vanished. The former soldiers are now nothing more than drunks getting wasted in broad daylight. A massive man approaches Lewin and demands he hand over everything he owns. Lewin simply places a hand on the man's shoulder. He disables him with a single touch and continues on his way, musing on how different this place is from what the books described. Further on, a man sleeps soundly, snoring loudly. Lewin approaches, looking at the individual with disdain. Then, he asks for permission and wakes the sleeping man. The man apologizes for falling asleep. Lewin says it's fine and asks where he can get a horse. Scratching his neck, the man ponders how to answer Lewin. Being honest, he says there aren't any horses here right now, and this is the only stable in all of Tesharan. Strang can't help but laugh, finding this place utterly pathetic. For a while, there were only flies around, but today, customers just haven't stopped showing up in droves. Lewin asks the man to wait a moment. The man just said the place was empty until today, when all the horses were rented out. So, other people besides the hero have come and needed horses in Tesharan, a place where normally no one ever shows up. That doesn't sound like a coincidence. Soon, Lewin remembers what the street cat had said. Strang comments that he's felt something strange ever since they were on the mana train. Looking back suspiciously, Lewin realizes he needs to be careful. He's being followed by someone. As soon as he realized he was being followed, the young man reacted immediately. With the help of a gold coin, he asked the facility's attendant to warn him if anyone inquired about him. Then, he decided to walk through the city, acting as a living decoy. It's obvious the individuals following him are from the Rainak Empire. It's unknown if it's the Crown Prince or the Blazing King, as both have different reasons to keep an eye on him, but meeting either of them wouldn't be good. Lewin needs to resolve this problem before heading to Sky Mountain. He can't let them keep following him, especially now that he's already spotted the trap. Upon returning to the facility, however, the attendant says no one came looking for him. He claims he's been on alert since Lewin left, but no one showed up. It really doesn't seem like the attendant is lying. However, the man reports that something strange happened, a gap in his memory, approximately 3 minutes long, no matter how hard he tries to remember. High-level mind control abilities can dominate and control a person's mind, making them lose all memory of the time they were under its influence. If they manage to scour the attendant's memories, they already know Lewin realized he's being followed. Lewin slowly enters his room and notices a note on his bed. The note says the person has no intention of harming him, so Lewin shouldn't waste time searching and should just finish his mission. This enrages Lewin, because not only did they enter his room, but they had the audacity to tell him not to worry. Infuriated, Lewin declares that his pursuers can come at him with everything they've got. He bursts from the room, leaping through the window and across rooftops. Skillfully, he vaults from building to building until he reaches a specific spot and lands on the ground. Strang asks what Lewin plans to do, and he replies that he needs to find them. Opening his minimap, he spots several red dots. He uses this to see if they'll follow follow him. After all, the hero had won first place in the triathlon. A small, flaming skeletal head asks if they should follow him. Several hooded figures are there, and one remarks that the junior is eager to play, making it hard to refuse. He then orders the others to follow him, without killing him. As he races through the city, Lewin is pursued by the figures. 3 hooded mages descend to the ground, informing the screaming mage that they've lost Lewin Ardell's trail. However, one of the men reveals that the boy is actually waiting for them. A noise echoes from behind some crates. Suddenly, Lewin leaps out, charging the hooded figures, and without a flicker of hesitation, lands a punch squarely on one's face. As the protagonist turns to his next victim, the struck mage screams and conjures a magic barrier between them. The barrier, however, is useless. The second man also takes a solid punch, collapsing unconscious to the ground instantly. Only one of the 3 pursuers remains. He begins to laugh maniacally, stating he was curious about what kind of person Lewin was, never imagining he'd be a complete monster. The hero, deep in thought, wonders who these people truly are. The mustached mage explains that the Tower Master sent them to protect him, though Lewin sees it more as surveillance. Regardless, the man enjoyed witnessing the young man's skills. Tearing a piece of paper, the hooded figure vanishes. The skeleton tattoo on his neck reveals him to be an evil mage, part of a mysterious group known for doing dirty work. All that's known about this secret organization is their tattoo and their name. What they do, how strong they are, and who their leader is, all remain unknown. Strang asks Lewin how he feels after dealing with the mages. The young man replies that it was easy, and they seemed weaker than the festival's student representatives. However, one of their abilities remains a mystery. The man used a 6th class magic, so it's definitely not something to take lightly. He'd better stay alert. The bear asks what his partner plans to do. Lewin plans to make it appear before him. The next day, the protagonist immediately sets off for the Sky Mountain. The path is an arid land, devoid of all life, but Lewin can feel he's nearing his destination. He stops and realizes his power circle is trembling. Exhausted after such a long trek, the young man finally realizes he's arrived. The Sky Mountain is apparently encased in a strange barrier. This is where Draca used to reside, but the barrier doesn't even budge, and Lewin wonders how he'll get in. Strang had said before that the only way to pass through the barrier was to use non-human abilities, but the young man still hasn't understood what that means. If Strang were human, she would definitely try to break the barrier. But that's impossible, as it's a barrier that cannot be shattered by human means. The bear then asks if it would be possible to break it by ogre means. Lewin wonders if he should call the ogres inside to open it, like calling a friend. This way, the two are finally reaching a conclusion. But another question arises. It was said that all the ogres on the mountain were killed. However, that's also a very human opinion. A little suspicious, Lewin turns to the barrier with a worried look. Strang reminds his friend that his ability isn't to conform to prejudices, but to find a way to shatter them. The hero places his hand on the strange barrier and starts talking to it, asking it to listen and telling it he brought Chief Kunkan's tooth. If the barrier can hear him, Lewin asks it to open a path. The two wait, while the wall doesn't even budge. Suddenly, a strange glow begins to appear beneath the young man's hand, and a powerful violet light is emitted through the barrier. So strong, it starts to push the hero back slightly. Someone watching closely notices something terrifying. Lewin actually managed to breach the barrier. That little guy pulled it off, even though no one had ever completed this mission until now. But when the man approaches the barrier to try and pass through too, he realizes it has already closed. Suddenly, a fist shot out, slamming into his chin with an unexpected blow. Lewin had him now. The mustachioed man wouldn't escape like last time. Lewin slammed his fist into the ground, creating an earthquake that sent his pursuer tumbling, defenseless. Then, the hero conjured a binding spell, trapping the evil mage. The man was thoroughly bound, unable to move. The mustachioed man probably thought he could get close to Lewin, but he'd fallen right into a trap. This game of cat and mouse was finally over. But suddenly a silhouette soared over the protagonist's head. A powerful ogre appeared, flying straight for the trapped mage and mercilessly crushing him with its massive club. The scene shocked Lewin. The ogre looked back at the young man, demanding to know who he was. Strang warned Lewin not to forget that these creatures had the minds of beasts. The hero managed to enter Sky Mountain, but the moment he stepped foot there, he realized he'd arrived in a completely different world. Several ogres watched him, sniffing and commenting that the young man didn't smell like a human. Strang urged his master to stay on guard, as human morality meant nothing to these creatures. For now, the ogres hadn't done anything against the protagonist, likely because of Kunkan's Kunkan's tooth, but it was impossible to know what would happen next. Cautiously, the young man continued to approach. Lewin and Strang were now at the sky summit. The young man asked if there was still another mountain to climb. Suddenly, the gigantic mass in front of the boy began to move. It wasn't a mountain at all, but a colossal ogre. It was Chief Harkon, who had heard that the human possessed Kunkan's relic. The chief was many times larger than the other ogres present. Politely, Harkon said they would receive him as a guest, not throw him to the eagles. Our hero replied that he was chosen by Kunkan's tooth. The ogre couldn't believe it, as that wasn't an item humans could wield. Lewin, however, said he could show the chief so he could see with his own eyes. Harkon explained that the boy was a very interesting human. He had sensed his scent from afar, and also a great aura of strength. And that was correct, for the protagonist was indeed very strong. So, the ogre chief wanted to know exactly who this young man was. Before answering, Lewin looked at his bear companion. He started by asking if the chief knew Dracagonia, a dragon that lived on that mountain. This impressed Harkon, who asked how the young man knew that name. Lewin replied that he had heard it from Kingram. Jaw dropped, the great ogre asked if Kingram was still alive. Lewin explained that Kingram was alive in the form of an artifact at Ignite Academy and could be considered one of his teachers. The protagonist asked if the ogre was curious about who he was. He said he could be considered a friend of Kingram, who used to be the chief of Sky Mountain. Furthermore, he was chosen by Kunkan's tooth and the human who inherited the powers of Draka, the world destroyer. His name was Lewin Ardell. The protagonist stared down the great ogre. Then, the audacious boy asked if, even with all that information, Harkon still intended to throw him to the eagles. With a friendly smile, the ogre replied, no, assuring him they'd do their best to welcome the young man. This gentle response utterly stunned the hero. Harkon had promised a welcome, but ogres had a rite of passage even for visitors. If the protagonist wanted a proper welcome, he'd have to prove his worth. The little bear explained the challenge this time, an arm wrestling match. The ogre competing against Lewin was Omarush, son of Omerukan. Believing there must be some mistake, the young man stared, utterly perplexed, at his challenger. The competition was about to begin, and the excited crowd roared, demanding Omarush crush the tiny human. Worried, the protagonist asked if losing meant he risked being thrown to the eagles. His partner wasn't certain. Then, the two opponents stared each other down, intensely focused. The ogre's colossal build was undeniably intimidating, true, but that didn't mean the hero was diving into this challenge blindly. The hero wielded extraordinary strength thanks to his artifact. Ever since he acquired Kunkan's tooth, his strength had skyrocketed by 1,000 points. This meant his strength now stood at 3,520 points. Omarush noticed the boy's hand was far from ordinary, but he was dead set on not holding back. Lewin, with a defiant smirk, challenged his opponent. Try and kill me once and for all. The judge began the countdown. Then, with a thunderous roar, he declared the match had begun. Lewin strained with such force that the sleeve of his shirt began to rip. This stunned his opponent, whose eyes went wide. Their arms remained locked at the center of the table, a brutal deadlock. Our hero was drenched in sweat, pushing himself to the absolute limit. He then unleashed his final desperate surge of power, but it wasn't enough. Omarush overpowered him in a swift, utterly anticlimactic defeat. The victorious ogre raised his arms, celebrating. Lewin collapsed to the ground, defeated, whispering, I gave it my all. His hand aching, he braced himself, wondering if he'd now be tossed to the eagles. But then, an ogre's booming voice commanded him to rise. The massive ogre then began to praise him, declaring he had endured incredibly, a truly astonishing human. By facing the challenge and battling the ogre, our hero had earned the profound respect of the Sky Mountain ogres. Strang personally congratulated him on this incredible feat. He discovered that Draka had taken 17 years to finally beat Omarush, and he immediately vowed to achieve it in just 1 month. The arm wrestling match concluded, and a grand feast immediately followed. Lewin discovered the ogres were surprisingly talented chefs. Watching them live so peacefully, he pondered why the ogres chose to remain confined within their sanctuary. But deep down, the young man had a strange premonition. He sensed he was about to embark on an experience far more crucial than his original mission here. Omarush slowly approached him. He asked what the young man intended to do with the tooth he'd acquired. If he wished, the ogre could forge a weapon perfectly suited for a human. The hero's mind reeled with possibilities, utterly astonished by the offer. Lewin's mind flashed back to standing before the door of Room X. Curiosity burning, he clutched Kunkan's tooth. pondering its true nature. Strang had revealed it was the primordial source of power, a symbol of immense raw strength. But Lewin wasn't concerned with its origins. He wanted to know how to wield it, unlike Algal's staff or Morshi's armor, which had clear functions. The tooth, for example, could be mounted on the tip of a mace. For now, simply carrying it was ideal, as the sheer boost to his strength was already a massive advantage. Back in the present, Omarush had just made an incredible offer, a weapon forged from the artifact itself. The young man had been carrying the item, but had no clue how to utilize its power. The tooth was incredibly hard and heavy, impossible for most to wield. But for Omarush, the iron handler, it was well within his capabilities. In human terms, he was essentially a master blacksmith. The ogre then asked if the young man had a specific weapon design in mind. Lewin grinned. "Can it be made exactly to my specifications?" he asked. Almost half a month had passed since the protagonist entered Sky Mountain. An ogre shouted, claiming the target had gone that way. During this time, he spent his days helping the ogres hunt or completing training he once couldn't manage. After sprinting up a mountain, the young man opened his status window. But one thing had consumed a significant part of his days: the outcome of his arm wrestling competition with Omarush. 15 matches, 15 crushing defeats, yet he relentlessly demanded rematches. His little bear companion urged her master not to give up, noting his slow but steady improvement. The ogre smiled, saying, "You're refining your strength, boy, no longer wasting it." Thanks to Omarush's guidance, the young man was learning to wield his power more effectively each day. Lewin made his goal clear. He would defeat the ogre in arm wrestling before he left. The two began to taunt each other, with the massive ogre declaring, "You don't stand a chance." However, just a few days later, the ogre's eyes were wide with shock. Finally, after 17 grueling matches, Lewin secured his first victory. Celebrating as if he'd won a world championship, he threw his arms to the sky and roared, earning the respect of every single ogre. A genial Omarush admitted defeat, saying, "You've surprised me countless times, boy," and for the first time called the protagonist by his name. The ogre then stated, "You're ready, young one." Incredulous, Lewin asked, "Is what I asked for finally ready?" In truth, it had been ready for some time, but the massive ogre had decided to wait. Omarush wanted to hold out until the day the young man defeated him, refusing to hand it over before then. Lewin then realized he could have been robbed blind in broad daylight like that. Extending his hand, the ogre presented the young man with his newest weapon, Kunkan's molar gauntlet. It was indestructible by any physical force and boosted strength by 2,000 upon equipping. Crafted from a powerful artifact, its form was perfect for a close-range mage like him. Omarush asked, "So what do you think of my work? I forged it in the perfect shape just for you." Seriously, Lewin thought the weapon was simply incredible, and he asked the ogre to summon all the warriors of Sky Mountain. With all the ogres gathered, it became clear the audacious protagonist wanted to arm wrestle every single one of them. Clustered together, the ogres murmured, convinced this event was sheer madness, disbelieving the young man's strength. But regardless, such an event was undeniably fascinating. Ogres loved competition and revered strength, so they watched with keen interest. Even a baby ogre raised its arms, cheering for its father. Strang crossed her arms, remarking, "This reminds me of Draca." He was just like that, but Draca had only defeated 17 ogres at once after 30 years on the mountain. If it were the old Lewin, he would surely have deemed such a feat impossible. But after donning Kunkan's molar gauntlet, the hero felt he could never lose. The countdown for the opponent's preparation began, and finally, the competition commenced. Swiftly, the ogre's gigantic arm slammed onto the table. After the match, the ogres asked if Lewin was leaving already. All of them were smiling, saying he had gifted them with incredible memories. The protagonist returned their smiles, feeling a surge of gratitude. He extended his hand to them, making them wonder if he wanted yet another arm wrestling match, even after defeating 100 ogres. But that wasn't what the young man wanted. The gesture was called a handshake, a simple human custom used to greet friends, express joy at seeing someone, or bid farewell. It was a silent promise. Until next time. Meanwhile, back at the castle, a voice demanded, "Any news?" A cloaked figure replied, "Nothing significant." Tehran, the king, was growing anxious. The Scream Mage had vanished without a trace, and the 2 survivors from the last mission had returned with fatal wounds. Even the subsequent search party reported no human presence on Sky Mountain. The Blazing King slammed his fist, declaring to his aide, "We've been played!" But before they could continue, a new voice cut in. "I have a report." It announced that Lewin Ardell had just arrived in Ravardine moments ago. The news stunned the king, leaving him speechless and lost in thought. Then, with a sudden surge of command, he barked, "Summon the boy, now!" With a steady voice, the young man confessed, "I failed my mission." He explained that, just as the Blazing King had warned, success was impossible. He'd realized it the moment he reached the mountain. The barrier was simply too powerful. There was no way through. Tehran, the king, narrowed his eyes. "You're a terrible liar, boy," he stated. "Be honest. You are Kung Khan's chosen after all." He pointed out the suspicious coincidence. Lewin had chosen a mission to find the ogre fortress. Sweat beaded on Lewin's brow. "Were you watching me?" he stammered. The king sighed. He wasn't watching him out of suspicion, but out of concern that Lewin might become a mage opposing the tower. Lewin pressed, "So, any mage who opposes the blazing king becomes an enemy of the tower?" The king nodded. "Most do." He then cut him off. "Enough small talk. Get to the point. Be honest, Lewin. Tell me what you truly saw on Sky Mountain." A maniacal glint entered the king's eyes. "Are the first ogres still alive?" Lewin remained silent, his gaze fixed on the monarch's unsettling expression. Later, Lewin emerged from the castle, a wave of relief washing over him. "That was a close call," he muttered. He recalled the king's chilling warning. Any lie could be exposed by accessing his memories. But Lewin gambled that the great boundary mage wouldn't stoop to such tactics for a mere student. The blazing king had scoffed. "Calling yourself a simple student is far too modest." Yet, the king had eventually lowered his head, conceding, "Very well. Your first official mission has failed. Return to the academy now." Lewin had gambled on the king's pride, and it had paid off spectacularly. If the king had been more irrational, Lewin would have been caught in his deception. But this wasn't the end. The X-Zone artifact had chosen him, a clear sign that he was destined to master the throne. Though unspoken, it was obvious the king would continue to watch him closely. For now, Lewin just wanted to escape the castle's oppressive aura. The mana train began its journey, hurtling towards Ignite Academy. Upon arriving at school, Lewin is met with congratulations and even banners featuring his photo. His friends hoist him onto their shoulders, even though the competition happened 2 months ago. Back in his room, Jason brings in a heavy box and places it on the table. Inside, it's overflowing with letters for the young man, as expected for a grand festival winner. There are so many, and Jason only brought the most recent ones. The others that arrived earlier are stored in the closet, but when he opens the closet doors, the room is flooded with letters. Lewin is stunned, unable to believe the sight before him. Even letters from princesses arrived, calling him a genius and a true patriot of the kingdom. Refusing the crown prince's invitation made him a true patriot, but Lewin notices many letters address him as dear, even though they've never met him. Jason sighs and says, "That word isn't just for those close to you, but also for those who want to get close." Jason flops onto the bed and asks what his friend is planning for the holidays. Lewin just gives a small smile and says he's thinking of doing something different this year. Sometime later, Lewin is riding a horse. It's been 5 years since he last visited his hometown. He never left the dorms, not even during holidays. The young man lacked the courage to face the people of his town, mainly because he didn't have the confidence to answer questions about his school life. But now, Lewin can meet everyone with his head held high, so he'll finally see his family again. Upon arriving in town, however, everyone stares at him with expressions of shock. Scratching the back of his neck, Lewin smiles and asks, "How's everyone doing?" The people can barely believe it's truly the young master. Lewin apologizes for being away for so long. His sister, Luina, comes running and gives him a fierce hug. Angrily, Luina scolds him. "You didn't send a single letter all this time, but now you just show up out of nowhere." The young man approaches his sister and says, "You've grown so much I almost didn't recognize you, but you're still as cute as ever." He asks his father to gather all the family members, as it's been ages since he had a chance to speak with them. Night falls, a beautiful full moon shining overhead. Then, the young man recounted everything that had happened over the past 6 years to his family. Luina and a maid remark that he went through many hardships, but overcame everything with immense effort. A huge source of pride. Not to mention winning such a grand competition and being summoned for a private conversation with the crown prince. Even though 2 months had passed, news travels slowly in a rural town. This must be why the royalty sent some letters, and countless others arrived from noble families. But there's a problem, beyond all this, that the young master needs to know. Lewin grows worried by their tone as they approach the subject and asks his father to tell him, "It'll be worse if I hear it from someone else later." Disappointed, his father tenses but says there's no avoiding it. As mentioned before, they received countless letters all about Lewin, many offering donations using him as a pretext or proposing meetings. Of course, all were refused, but there's a problem. The problem is named Bilkos Monzo. This man is using Lewin as leverage to threaten the Ardell family. Monzo is the only commercial city near Ardell territory. Since then, they've been offering absurdly low prices for products, aiming to hold Ardell territory hostage and appoint their own mage as Monzo's guardian. At this rate, the Ardell family's finances are on the brink of collapse, and for now, there's no clear solution. Lewin remembers the excited staff who said this year's abundant harvest should be a gift gift for the young master. Thoughtfully, he closes his eyes to make a decision. The phrase, "a bad man deserves a beating," echoes in his mind. If the man is so eager to meet him, then the young man should go to him. Mr. Beggins packs supplies for Lewin's journey. He apologizes for the trouble that erupted the moment Lewin arrived, but Beggins watches Lewin prepare, a somber expression on his face, and implores the young master not to resent the Lord. He explains that the Lord is doing everything to conceal the problems, and many in the territory remain oblivious to the true situation. The current peace endures solely due to the Lord's sacrifices. Shame washed over him. He realized he was being incredibly arrogant. Honestly, frustration gnawed at him, wondering if his father was simply enduring everything. He'd gotten carried away, believing he could solve a problem his father couldn't, despite knowing since childhood that his father cherished and loved this land above all else. Mr. Beggins gazes at Lewin, his eyes filled with sorrow. Lewin then hands a small box to Beggins, asking him to deliver it to Mr. Ardell. Inside the box were 10,000 gold coins, a prize he'd won at the Grand Festival, but one that would serve a far greater purpose here. Personally, Lewin stated, it would be best to use this money to acquire land, so the Ardell family can become independent of Monzo in the future. That may be true, Beggins conceded, but I doubt anyone would sell land at this point. Lewin then posed a question, what if we take the land instead? Then we could initiate a thorough cleansing. They would reclaim the ancient Wolf Hill territories and the Chinhong Plains, currently overrun by mudmen. With these funds, it might be possible to hire mercenaries, purify the land, and cultivate it to lease to outsiders. If we can secure mercenaries at a fair price, it could prove to be a sound investment. With their plan set, Lewin departed for his mission, stating he'd leave the finer details to the administrator and his father. Our hero then embarks on his adventure towards Monzo. The trade city of Monzo, the largest territory, supplies all surrounding areas. Its lord is Bilkos Monzo, and whispers claim he bought his title through usury, or by leading the notorious Walpa gang. In other words, he needed to steel his resolve. The protagonist arrives at a lavish mansion, bristling with guards. He introduces himself as the second son of the Ardell family and inquires if the Lord is within. The guard knights barely acknowledge him, scoffing, "Another Ardell, are we?" The three begin to murmur amongst themselves, commenting on how the Ardells act like children, stirring up trouble they can't possibly resolve, then burst into laughter, openly mocking the situation. His father had endured this very treatment every time he visited, yet he always insisted on coming to the city. The guards sneer, "Go on in and ask yourself, boy. If you're an Ardell, you'll probably just get tossed out anyway." But the soldiers suddenly notice Lewin's unwavering posture, and their tone shifts. "Things are a little different this time," one mutters. The protagonist isn't here as a mere student. He won't tolerate such insolence. He advances on the soldiers, his presence radiating power, declaring, "It seems these men are in dire need of some discipline." With barely a flick of his wrist, the mage blasts one of the soldiers sprawling. At that precise moment, a bearded lord approaches the gate. He recognizes Lewin as the hero who triumphed at the Grand Festival and a mage of the new generation. That lord is Bilkos Monzo, who says, with a hint of mockery, "The boy is so important, he shouldn't even be able to lift his head." But the protagonist retorts, "Then perhaps you shouldn't lift yours at all. If you're so ashamed after forcing me to come all this way, you should keep your head bowed." The man looked at the boy with a serious expression, but soon a sly smirk spread across his face. Just as he'd heard, the young man's personality was straightforward. Even if embarrassed, he'd hold his head high. The young man said it was fine, but he'd have to retrain his guards. They'd treated the Ardell family like a goblin tribe, so Lewin had given them a small warning. Looking back, both men saw a pile of unconscious guards. Monzo was furious at the sight. Meanwhile, the young man was smiling, asking if the Lord was all right. Masking his anger, the man told Lewin to feel free to treat them as his subordinates, but inside he seethed, seeing his men knocked out. "Since that's the case," the young man said, slipping on his gauntlet and punching another guard, sending him flying. The soldier crashed to the ground, his armor scraping against the floor. "That's enough," he declared. "These guys need some etiquette lessons too." Then, the protagonist asked if the man planned to leave him outside much longer, and with a firm voice, demanded the Lord show him the inside of his mansion. Gazing at a stuffed werewolf, Monzo asked Lewin, "Isn't it beautiful?" He explained they were art pieces he collected as a hobby. Lewin, however, confessed that just looking at them made him uncomfortable. Monzo claimed to understand that everyone had different tastes, but the young man found it a rather peculiar hobby. It was clear the Lord aimed to create an atmosphere of fear, with the obvious intention of intimidating him. As he served some tea, Monzo said it was a rare type called Peri-me. Lewin, however, rejected the offer. Monzo asked if he didn't like tea, and if he should bring a cold drink instead. It was clear the old man was playing dumb. The protagonist then questioned if Manzo truly didn't understand why he refused the tea, and without waiting for a reply, he poured the entire liquid onto the table. Manzo remained silent as the tea spilled from the table, dripping onto the floor, escalating the tension in the room. With a smirk playing on his lips, the lord lowered his head. He realized Lewin suspected poison, but assured him he wouldn't do such a thing, as he wasn't his enemy. On the contrary, Manzo claimed he wanted to be his friend. Lewin then challenged, "Friends threaten each other?" Manzo, however, didn't see it as a threat, but rather a proposal made with the best intentions. Lewin retorted indignant, "How can the lord call that nasty trick of trying to decimate Ardel's territory a proposal?" With a firm voice, the young man declared he refused the offer. Placing the teacup back on the table, Manzo said it was a shame Lewin was denying his friendship. He warned that, because of this, the price of Ardel's products would remain the same, dirt cheap. Lewin countered that the best choice would be to revert to the original price. The two men glared at each other, and the atmosphere only grew heavier. Adopting a more aggressive stance, Manzo called Lewin a country bumpkin who knew nothing. He asked if the young man truly thought he could refuse a deal, and that he should be begging at his feet. At that moment, soldiers began to pour into the room. Lewin remembered that students from magic schools couldn't use their spells during holidays. With the room packed with soldiers, Manzo declared he'd teach Lewin some manners. Lewin, rising and donning his gauntlet, instantly realized the lord never planned on letting him leave. Manzo then commanded his soldiers to kill the young man, stating he'd turn his corpse into a piece of art for his gallery. Fear gripped Lewin as he understood this madman wanted him as a trophy. He wasn't here for a reasonable conversation. He was here to deal with an arrogant pig trapped in a pit of southern wealth. To tackle the first soldier, Lewin prepared his famous flick. Getting right up to the man's forehead, he unleashed his strike, sending the soldier flying with absurd speed like a bowling ball hitting pins. In that instant, Lewin's gauntlet ability activated, and the first boss, Kunken, manifested, staying by his side until his strength was depleted. Manzo was stunned. This ability extended the attack range with Kunken's massive arm. A blazing aura erupted around Lewin, the flames molding into the colossal body of an ogre. After all, even on vacation, if his life was on the line, he could still tap into his magic for defense. Kunken's sheer presence terrified some enemies, who, instead of attacking, began to flee in a panic. But Lewin warned them that running wouldn't save them now, and he charged forward, his ogre partner right beside him. Lewin unleashed a mana explosion, tearing through Manzo's palace with immense destruction. The townspeople scattered in a panic as the lord's entire collection of bizarre artifacts went up in flames. Lewin was surprised Manzo still had time to think about his collection. This was the moment to worry about his own life. A piercing scream ripped through the air, followed by yet another explosion. With his hands on his hips, Lewin declared, "Now, Manzo, you'll normalize Ardel's product prices and repay 10 times all the money you stole." Kneeling, Manzo whined about the compensation, asking, "How much will that even be?" Grabbing the lord by his collar, Lewin's expression darkened and he commanded, "Immediately." Sometime later, already mounted on his horse, Lewin knew his mission was almost complete, imagining his father's reaction upon hearing the problem was solved. Thus, the young man settled the score with Manzo and began his journey back to Ardel. On the way, however, something left him speechless. An unexpected visitor awaited him in Ardel, Miss Irene, who greeted him with a friendly smile. Our hero then recalled the banquet from 2 months prior. He had been utterly exhausted by it all. It was fun at first, but now the young man just wanted to go home. At that moment, Irene had approached him and asked if he was speaking of the small yet beautiful state of Ardel. She was glad the banquet had ended without a hitch, as it would have been a disaster if anything had gone wrong. But Lewin couldn't resist. They'd not only belittled other students, but also trashed his hometown. With a smile, the girl asked if Ardel was truly as beautiful as he claimed. He agreed, describing it as a beautiful, peaceful place that she absolutely had to visit someday. Irene asked if he was serious, warning him he couldn't complain later if she actually showed up. But the hero never imagined she'd actually take him up on it. His sister was practically seething with jealousy, while his father was deeply moved. Luina demanded if her brother wasn't going to explain the situation. She practically screamed, demanding to know their relationship, if they were dating, and how they'd met. A short while later, the hero's sister volunteered to guide Irene herself, especially after learning Lewin was supposed to. His father chuckled, asking if it wasn't cute, his little sister not wanting to lose him. even after 6 years apart. But now that they were alone, his father pressed him, asking honestly if the girl truly wasn't his girlfriend. When he confirmed she wasn't, his father's face clearly fell, but they quickly decided to set that topic aside and discuss something else. Beggins was then called in to join them. He brought a box and placed it before Lewin. His father declared he couldn't accept the money. Surprised, the hero stared at the box. It was Lewin's personal fortune, not Ardel's, but he argued that he was still a member of the Ardel family. No one could deny the young man was the very heart of Ardel, but he still had many duties beyond their borders. Lewin fell silent, unable to argue. He knew his father was a man of unwavering integrity and morality, and he deeply respected it. But it pained him to know his father would discuss the state's problems without involving him. So, with a firm voice, he declared his wish to use his money for Ardel, just as his father had done in the past. Beggins looked a bit uncomfortable, and explained that he thought the young master should know how the Lord was managing Ardel with his own funds. Slightly disappointed, his father stated that, in the future, he'd prefer Beggins discuss such decisions with him first. Even with the best intentions, accepting the money was impossible. It wasn't time to transfer the state's responsibilities to the young man. After all, 3,600 gold coins remained, money that was rightfully theirs. Lewin found the amount odd, and whispered that he'd given far more, but Beggins whispered back that his father hadn't accepted a single extra coin. They continued to whisper, agreeing that the Lord was incredibly stubborn and rigid. Then, speaking clearly, Beggins added, "However, that was simply the Lord's way of life, unchangeable." Beggins offered a gentle smile. The hero realized Beggins was right, and smiled too, acknowledging that was just his father's unwavering personality and moral code. A while later, Lewin stepped outside and saw Luina and Irene walking together. They were holding hands, seemingly getting along famously. He approached and asked Irene if she'd enjoyed the tour of Ardel. With a wink, the little girl said she was going for a walk and wished him good luck. As she walked away, Luina called out, telling her brother to get along with Irene because she was really cool. Blushing, Irene asked why Luina had started saying such strange things. Just as flushed, Lewin asked if she'd like to take a walk. As they walked, she confessed she found Luina adorable and wished she had a little sister just like her. But she sensed he had something on his mind, as he seemed lost in thought. As the family heir, the young man yearned to do something for his territory, but ideas eluded him. The prize money, combined with the sum from Monzo, amounted to over 40,000, a fortune his father told him to use as he pleased. Irene noted that even after her long journey to Ardel, the young man couldn't stop thinking about his domain. Then, the young man realized he hadn't asked anything about her, and quickly moved to rectify that. Irene replied that the journey wasn't complicated at all. She'd arrived in 2 days from Leverdane. It was just past the mountain, surprisingly close actually, and that simple answer sparked the very solution the young man had been searching for. The southern mountain, despite dominating much of Ardel's territory, was impossible to cultivate due to its rugged terrain. The land was desolate, plagued by monster appearances. Yet, with Lake 8 nearby, its geographical value was immense. They could seize this chance to carve a route through the mountain, transforming Ardel into a powerful territory with a single southern path leading directly to the Rhynic Empire. Cupping his chin, the hero wondered how he hadn't thought of it sooner. It would be a tremendous boon for his territory. Taking Irene's hands, the young man thanked her for helping him find the answers to his problems. The girl blushed fiercely, her hands clasped in his. With an excited grin, Lewin bid his friend farewell, sprinting off to put his plan into action. And with a warm feeling in her heart, Irene thought the young man was truly a very interesting person. The Ardel family patriarch declared it impossible. Disheartened, Lewin tried to understand the situation better. Beggins explained he'd already tried, but all 8 merchant guilds at Lake 8 had rejected the proposal. To them, Ardel simply wasn't profitable. Beggins insisted that while the Lord understood the immense opportunity, it just wasn't feasible. Lewin, however, refused to accept their rejection. He argued that much had changed in Ardel, and they couldn't give up just because the guilds had said no once. Perhaps a proposal from a great champion would make them reconsider. The two men silently observed the young man's unwavering confidence. Since Lewin had proven capable of resolving the Monzo incident, it wouldn't be fair to stop him. So, Lewin's father granted him permission to try, and the young man gratefully accepted the chance. A voice asked if Lewin was heading to Lake 8. It was Irene, who then declared he was now in the same boat as her, an illegal immigrant. Lewin was stunned to learn Irene had crossed Ardel's borders without permission. Concerned, he asked if she had any idea how dangerous that was. Crossing her arms, Irene retorted that it still didn't compare to what he had done. Lewin had invaded someone else's dorm and used an extraordinary method in the competition. competition, completely disregarding the risks. And yet, he'd succeeded in everything. To keep up with someone like him, this was just a minor prank. Sighing, Lewin offered a friendly smile. Irene decides to follow him. She's already an illegal immigrant, so one more transgression won't make much difference. The two then headed straight for Lake 8, deciding to cross the southern mountain range to scout the path ahead. The terrain was so rugged that even with a compass, finding their way was a nightmare. So they resorted to a tracking spell. But of course, there was a strict rule against using magic outside of school during holidays. Irene had been using magic since she arrived in Ardell, so they both had to keep it a secret. However, the spell led them straight to humanoid monsters, a den of werewolves. Lewin had to unleash his skills to dispatch the enemies. He obliterated the monsters with his mana explosion spells. Exploiting the werewolves' weakness, their total reliance on a leader, they managed to escape, and they also received an unknown quest. Lewin was stunned to see a new quest pop up. Using the tracking spell once more, the two continued their journey toward their destination. Luckily, there were no more monster encounters, and they finally found the place. They arrived at a massive gate at Lake 8, a colossal city-state where 8 immense lakes converge and connect to the sea. Like Altain, it's also a neutral country under the Empire's control. Here, instead of a king, 8 merchants rule the land, holding titles as joint representatives. As a merchant state, it dominates continental trade, a place where money reigns supreme. Now that they'd reached their destination, the young duo needed to head to the Golden Hall. It was a grand mansion built amidst the 8 lakes, the meeting place for the representatives and the perfect spot to sway them. The young pair explained they didn't have an appointment, but Lewin asked the guard to send a message. He simply requested that the representatives be informed of the arrival of Lewin Ardell, accompanied by his friend, Irina Prouse. Instantly, the guard's eyes widened in disbelief, asking if the young man was truly the winner of the grand festival. He admitted he hadn't recognized him at first, but would report their arrival immediately. Luckily, the two were granted immediate entry. It was an incredibly luxurious mansion, adorned with countless golden items truly living up to its name, the Golden Hall, a stark contrast to Ardell. The guard gestured for the young duo to enter. Lewin focused, determined not to be intimidated. He was here for a fair transaction, not a handout. Then he pushed open the doors with a confident voice, declaring, "It's a pleasure to meet you all." Several men watched him with serious expressions. A woman and a hooded man were also present. All the influential figures sat around a large round table, observing the two young people with smiles on their faces. Someone spoke up. "I thought it was just a rumor, but now I'm starting to believe it. Are you truly the winner?" The bearded man questioned. "What brings such a highly esteemed next-generation mage to this remote place?" This made Lewin realize the weight of his title as the festival winner, making the conversation easier. One of the men remarked, "It would be excellent if your proposal benefits the guild." Getting straight to the point, Lewin stated, "I've come to negotiate a trade agreement between Ardell and Lake 8. The men seemed a little concerned by his proposal. No one showed much enthusiasm for what Lewin had said. Strang commented, "It seems the young man just threw a bucket of cold water on the situation." One of the influential figures mentioned, "I've heard of Ardell, located in the south of a small country called Radian." The woman added, "It's a rural state trying to sell a few things. They've been here to negotiate before, but were unanimously rejected because it wasn't profitable. They only wanted a one-sided deal." Sweat beaded on Lewin's brow, the tension in the room palpable. The bearded man, sensing the stalemate, declared there was little left to discuss. These were merchants, after all. Their interest vanished the moment a deal didn't serve them. Despite being the next-generation mage and young master of Ardell, Lewin was being treated as nothing more than a poor, rural lordling trying to swindle them. With a chillingly clear, dualistic gaze, Lewin challenged them. "Will you stick to that decision this time?" He added, "It's a shame to see such a reaction when I haven't even begun to present my proposal." Then, Lewin slammed a pouch onto the table. 30,000 gold coins spilled out. Every eye in the room snapped to the glittering pile. With a sarcastic smirk, he asked, "Does this motivate you more for the deal?" 8 Lake was a sprawling city-state where 8 vast lakes converged and connected directly to the sea. It was governed not by a single king, but by a council of 8 powerful merchants. Our protagonist, Lewin, had journeyed here to forge a crucial trade agreement between 8 Lake and Ardell. He'd faced countless dangers on his journey, but he knew that success in this negotiation would make every risk worthwhile. After a brief, intense exchange, and having wielded his considerable influence, Lewin asked if the merchants were now ready to close the deal. He proposed buying 30,000 units of weapons. In return, they would open their markets to Ardell's goods. As expected, his bold stance stunned everyone present. Such a sum was typically 3 years' worth of savings for a rural territory like Ardell. But Lewin had learned a crucial lesson since the incident with Manzo. Power naturally attracts wealth, and that wealth in turn creates peace. If acquiring weapons was the path to that power, then he would lay his foundation right here, right now. Each of the 8 representatives specialized in a different type of product. Lewin asked who handled weapons. It was representative number 1, whose expertise spanned weapons, minerals, flora, and fauna. To his surprise, Lewin noticed she looked even younger than his own sister. Yet her extraordinary presence commanded respect. No one would mistake her for a child. As a supplier, she was curious. What do you plan to do with so many weapons? Lewin explained it was for a massive monster hunt near Ardal. He then detailed his plan to establish a trade route connecting 8 Lake and Ardal, passing directly through South Mountain. Suddenly, the bearded man interrupted, his voice sharp. You shouldn't speak the name of that mountain range. Irene didn't understand why the atmosphere had suddenly grown so heavy. Lewin, though confused, instantly recognized the source of the sudden shift. Representative number 1 had gone utterly pale. With a firm voice and a grave expression, the young woman declared, "Crossing South Mountain is impossible. A demon lives there." Hearing this, Lewin's mind raced. Hadn't he encountered that very demon before? He had crossed that mountain range just last night, but the representative scoffed, calling him a liar. Unzipping his jacket, Lewin announced, "I can prove it. I found something there." From within his clothes, he pulled out a tuft of fur, a piece of the silver werewolf's mane. The young woman's face twisted into a mix of shock and disbelief. Lewin had completed a mission, earning the Valtreys family's respect as a reward. Now, with tears in her eyes, the young woman declared it had finally happened. Other representatives gathered to console her. She wept with relief, proclaiming that the demon was finally dead. 3 days passed. The representative now walked with the protagonist, apologizing for the delay. She never imagined returning to the mountain, but now the calamity that claimed her father's life was gone. The hero said it was just a coincidence he'd passed by and found that monster. The young woman spoke of building a road connecting Ardal to Oyota, and the Valtreys family would support the protagonist in its construction. This stunned the young man. He'd expected them to establish a relationship through arms trade, with the trade route coming much later. Shocked, he asked for confirmation if she'd agree to his proposal, and she confirmed. They would even pay above market price for any product from Ardal. This was incredibly generous. Looking him straight in the eyes, Cecilia Valtreys promised to offer appropriate gratitude and trust to her benefactor, Lewin. Not even knowing how to respond to such generosity, the young man simply smiled. The two shook hands, sealing a contract. Thus, the agreement with Lake 8 was successfully concluded. Irene and Lewin began their journey back, and the hero was eager to share the good news with his father. He was moved by how kind Cecilia was, even growing up without a father. The young man believed he empathized with her because he had experienced something similar. But, changing the subject, the protagonist said he was thrilled to see how bustling Ardal would be the next time his friend visited. She said she admired his love for his hometown and wished she could feel the same. Our home is where we feel the most longing and affection, but that wasn't true for Irene. Lewin asked if she would ever invite him to her hometown. A bit disheartened, the girl said, "Maybe." She seemed a bit reluctant to talk about it, but the young man was certain he would visit Fraus one day. The young people finally arrived in Ardal after their journey. Lewin's father was utterly astonished to learn they intended to buy Ardal's products at an above-market price. Beggins was dumbfounded to hear they were even taking responsibility for building the trade route. But for Irene, the most shocking thing was that she and Lewin had stayed in separate rooms at the hotel. The instant the young woman said this, the protagonist's hand clamped over her mouth, and the young man confirmed that Cecilia Valtreys had indeed said all of it. It was truly impressive that the cold Valtreys representative had declared she would pay her debt, though it would take 3 months to prepare the weapons. However, road construction would begin that very month, and Ardal would finally prosper. Proudly, the young man's father said he had grown so much and achieved truly difficult things. Then, from the bottom of his heart, he thanked his son for growing into such a worthy man. Seizing the moment, the hero asked if his father would trust him to grant one more wish. He spoke of Ardal's lifeline, his people's deepest desire. And as he touched on this subject, the young man's expression shifted. It was vengeance for his beloved mother's soul. It would be the hunt in the Crimson Plains, a place teeming with dangerous monsters. The year Lewin turned 6 on his birthday, a day meant for happy memories, it twisted into his worst nightmare. Mud creatures from the Crimson Plains swarmed the village, slaughtering countless people. The most tragic blow for Lewin was that his mother was among the fallen. Today, if not for a single photograph, his mother's image would would be nothing but a hazy memory. Even those who survived that day suffered grievous wounds. It was then that the young boy made his first vow to become stronger. As the young lord of Ardell, he would never allow such a nightmare to repeat itself in his town. Warriors are already training with their spears. After the attack, the villagers began daily training, determined to avenge their loved ones or prevent future disasters. Irene notices the changed atmosphere in the village, and it makes Lewin happy to see everyone working so hard, but she observes that the spear techniques seem quite unusual. That's because the master teaching them is none other than the territory's commander. He once earned the title of Flash and fought on the kingdom's front lines, renowned as Ardell's greatest knight, Sir Bolvar Peyton. This man was a hero during that year's attack, helping save countless lives, though these days he's more likely to wield a fishing rod than a spear. But someone interrupts the young duo's conversation, recognizing Lewin. It's Sir Bolvar himself, approaching them. The old knight congratulates Lewin for stirring things up, winning the grand festival and leading the hunt. Irene politely introduces herself, saying it's a pleasure to meet the spear saint, Sir Bolvar Peyton, right here. Hearing his title, the man looks surprised. Lewin seems pretty shocked too, realizing his friend already knew him. The girl remembers learning about Bolvar in her childhood knight lessons, and seeing the warrior's techniques, she was certain the instructor had to be the warrior who retired early at just 30 years old, a legend among legends. Smiling, Bolvar says, "I didn't think anyone would remember those obscure stories." But the young lady replies that she found them so impressive, she read every last detail, like the tale of the man who cut down over 10 high-ranking mages in the Pernan Confederation, a truly legendary feat. Bolvar says he's honored she thinks so, but claims he's nothing but a crumbling old man now. Lewin asks why he hid all this from him, but the knight replies, "I never hid anything, you just never asked." Still, Lewin can't help but feel disappointed hearing all these stories from someone else. However, Bolvar argues that Lewin knows more about him than anyone else. He's someone who loves fishing and lives in a house on the hill. "I used to go on walks and play with you when you were younger, and now I'm proud to see how much you've grown." He finishes by asking if that isn't enough information about Bolvar for the young man. Smiling, Lewin realizes he actually has the upper hand in that regard. Changing the subject, Bolvar mentions he's helping the young lady with swordsmanship and asks if Lewin would like to join. But it wouldn't just be to watch. The knight wants him to participate in a duel with her. Ingrid is training with Master Bolvar, giving her absolute all. Lewin finds it impressive that Ingrid possesses such skill at only 12 years old. The little girl proves she has a solid foundation, but Sir Bolvar is only using his left hand against her. After finishing the training, the knight comments to Lewin that his sister is improving rapidly and will soon surpass her brother in swordsmanship. Smiling, Lewin agrees with the master, and now Bolvar declares it's the young master's turn. Lewin remembers training with swords alongside Sir Bolvar when he was younger. Having also honed his martial arts considerably, Lewin is eager for this. But a short while later, all that eagerness twists into frustration, and he's left lying on the ground, defeated. Bolvar, however, is pleased. The young man's movements have vastly improved compared to 7 years ago. Curious, Lewin asks how powerful Bolvar was as a knight back then compared to now, but the elder replies it's been too long and he's unsure. This makes Lewin realize there's still no proper comparison. Then he remembers Sir Gulter Perante, the only 6-star knight in Eastern Lydian, but Bolvar reveals that when he retired, he was a 7-star knight. Shocked, the young man wonders why someone so incredibly powerful is in Ardell. Then, a sudden mission appears. He must face Bolvar. The time limit to complete it is 3 days. However, Lewin knows his current swordsmanship isn't enough. Irene admires the incredible opportunity his friend is getting. Swordsmanship lessons from a 7-star knight. What's more, Sir Bolvar is the only one in the kingdom who has ever participated in a knight's tournament. Lewin agrees it's an amazing experience, but his fear of failure made him hesitate to embrace it. Looking at the young man's face, Bolvar says, "I like that expression you're making." Raising his sword, the young man declares, "I'm feeling a bit angry now." Eager to duel the elder again, Lewin believes he can complete the mission in 3 days. To succeed in the sudden mission he'd acquired, the boy dueled Sir Bolvar every single night. At first he was pessimistic, wondering if these duels truly meant anything, but believing the mission had a deeper purpose, he persisted. Then, with just under a day left for the mission to end, his face bruised and sweaty, the young man finally broke through. All that relentless training began to bear fruit, forcing Sir Bolvar to grip his sword with both hands. The final day of the duel arrived. Sunset was approaching, but the young man was determined to try one more time. It was clear the protagonist was utterly exhausted. Despite all the training, he still hadn't reached the level needed to land a critical attack. With only half an hour left, the boy wondered if striking a critical hit on a 7-star knight was, from the very beginning, an impossible task. Luina approaches, asking if her brother had truly spent the entire night training. She begs him to stop. While begging, Beggins questions the reason for such relentless effort. Shouting, Luina insists, "Everyone has their limits. You need to rest a little." Seriously, the young man replies, "I just need another half hour." Everyone is apprehensive, but Lewin assures them half an hour will be enough. He knows it's highly improbable he'll achieve miraculous results in just 30 minutes. But considering this his absolute last attempt, the boy decides to try something completely different. Irene and Luina are stunned by what they see. Beggins and the protagonist's father are also tense, their eyes wide. Sir Bolvar leans in, trying to understand what was unfolding. The hero dropped his sword and now stood in an attack pose, using only his fists. After days of training with wooden swords, the young man could already predict the knight's every move. He needed to win using his true specialty. Bolvar now understood. The young man had trained so relentlessly because he desired something specific from him. Smiling, Lewin nodded. "Sir Bolvar," he said, "you finally figured it out." So the knight decided to add another rule for his young master. For the next 30 minutes, the boy could use magic, but in return, the knight would also fight more seriously, and with a swift movement of his feet, Sir Bolvar kicked off their final duel. The protagonist knew he had to get incredibly close to his opponent, but without a sword, his body felt lighter. As he closed in, the sword's blind spot became useless. But just as he got close, the boy noticed his opponent's sword dangerously near his face. Bolvar wasn't leaving any openings beyond the reach of his wooden sword, and using the same technique he'd used against Doom Prime, shattering the sword, wouldn't work. Knights like Bolvar didn't directly confront differences in strength, they redirected them. So the protagonist needed to adapt to the rhythm to land his blows. The swordsman said the plan was good, but once his opponent understood it, he'd keep trying to widen the distance between them. Every strategy was being premeditated by the knight. However, there was one Sir Bolvar couldn't predict. With one hand, the boy conjured a ball of light and leaped. The light ball's explosion could be seen from afar, creating a powerful gust of wind around them. The protagonist's plan worked, and now he stood over Bolvar, who lay fallen on the ground. Laughing, Sir Bolvar said he'd been worried about some terrifying magic, but it was just light that blinded him, and then he admitted defeat. That was all Lewin could think of at the moment, and he apologized for knocking him down. Finally, the incredibly complicated mission was complete. The hero succeeded, and even received the Steelbreaker ability as a reward. But before he could savor his victory, a slap on the shoulder interrupted his thoughts. Luina was indignant at the boy's nerve for taking down Sir Bolvar like that. Our boy offered to help the knight up and apologized, but thanked him for all the lessons. Sir Bolvar was also happy, and said it had been an incredible experience. The young man's vacation was already over, and he'd have to leave soon. His long yet short vacation was coming to an end, and soon the protagonist would have to leave his hometown. He and his father watched the workers building the trade route. They were all sent by the Valtreys family, and there were many men. This route would transport weapons and also serve for trade, bringing great benefits to Ardell. And there was one more thing the boy wanted to tell his father. Handing him a box, the young man said it contained 12,000 gold to use in Ardell. His father didn't seem very comfortable accepting it, but the young man said he'd kept 400 for himself and asked him not to refuse. His father said he felt ashamed, as if he were creating a debt with his son. The two embraced, and father and son strengthened their bond even further. It had certainly been a very productive vacation. Irene and the protagonist walked the same path for a while, but as they were about to say goodbye, Lewin seemed shocked by something Irene said, but the girl confirmed he'd understood correctly. She wanted to help him exterminate monsters after graduation, and repeated that she would follow him until she could defeat him. The girl hadn't forgotten that promise, and so the two parted ways, promising to meet again. After traveling for almost a week from Ardell, the young man entered the eastern region, but upon arrival, a commotion was unfolding. A man was holding a kid by the collar, scolding him. Seeing this, the protagonist felt a surge of irritation, wondering what was going on. The beaten kid pleaded for his sister's release. He claimed to be a knight and swore he wouldn't stand by if his sister wasn't freed. The aggressor scoffed, asking what the kid thought he'd do. He explained this was all happening because the family hadn't paid their debt, and he'd collect, even if it meant selling the boy's sister. Disbelief widened the injured boy's eyes. He shot to his feet, drawing his sword and charging the aggressor. The man, utterly unfazed, found the act laughable. He landed a precise punch to the boy's face, asking, "Is this some kind of joke?" As he stomped on the poor kid, he sneered, "Is this the standard for Foldren's squire knights?" Grabbing the boy by his hair, he demanded he repeat what he'd just said. But fearless, the boy retorted, "If you try to sell my sister, you'll die." Strang appeared, looking utterly stunned by the daylight scene. The boy seemed to be a squire knight, but he was terribly weak. His gaze was anything but ordinary. It was the look of someone with something precious to protect. A hand touched the protagonist's shoulder, breaking his thoughts. It was a man advising him not to get involved in others' business, warning that these aggressors were incredibly cruel. Lewin knew this, but he questioned what everyone else was doing, standing by without trying to stop them or save the boy. That made them no better than the aggressors, and they should be ashamed. Suddenly, the hero grew curious about the boy's true worth and how someone with such a determined gaze could become stronger. The man who tried to warn the protagonist bristled with fury, realizing he'd been ignored. Meanwhile, the aggressor noticed Lewin's presence. He demanded, "Who are you? Do you want a beating too?" But before he could utter another word, the protagonist flicked his forehead. The blow sent the man flying a great distance, leaving him wondering why he was seeing stars. Everyone around was utterly shocked by the scene. One of the thugs stepped forward, asking what had happened. But before he could get an answer, he too received a powerful flick, sending him soaring away just like the other aggressor. All the other thugs began to back away. The beaten boy asked, "Who are you?" Our protagonist introduced himself, still with his back to the young man. Turning around, he offered a friendly smile, making it clear he was there to help. The boy's name was Hans. He had siblings burdened by a drunken father's debt and had taken up a sword to defend his sister. Lewin also learned about the infamous Ongi woodcutters gang. They were notorious for tying up and killing their victims at the base of an ongi tree whenever they got angry. The gang's territory wasn't part of Foldren, and the local guards had no power to stop them. The aggressors were worse than the protagonist had imagined, but there wasn't much time to deal with them. Thanking him again for the help, Hans admitted he'd already heard about the young man. He was known as the champion of the grand tournament. The protagonist confirmed it, then asked if Hans had heard it from Sir Gulter Pirante. Hans was surprised Lewin knew him. The boy explained he knew Gulter was part of the Foldren Knights. Apparently, the captain often spoke highly of the protagonist, calling him a powerful mage, though not as powerful as the captain himself. The boy wished to grow strong quickly, to be as splendid as the captain. In Lewin's opinion, having someone like Gulter as a goal was excellent, but Hans was still very weak, and it wasn't clear if the boy had even graduated from the academy. Then, Hans let slip that he was the weakest in the academy, and that everyone constantly told him he shouldn't even be there with his rotten skills. Everyone criticized him, but the captain was different. He said the boy possessed a talent others lacked. This kept him motivated to train hard every single day. This story sounded familiar, striking Lewin just as Professor Heidel and the Dean had once struck him. Sir Gulter believed in Hans, keeping him spirited and driven. The hero said hard work never disappoints. Even if Hans progressed slower, he could persist, and one day a miracle would find him. The moment the protagonist took a spoonful of food, he realized Hans's sister's cooking was truly unique, and not in a good way. But a loud crash and a scream shattered their dinner. The gang seemed to have arrived, seeking revenge for Lewin's earlier attacks. With a single kick, one of the men smashed open Hans's door, but he was surprised not to find the two young men there, only the protagonist, who was calmly donning his gauntlets. The aggressor demanded, "Who the hell are you?" He added that he'd been wondering what to do, but thanked him for showing up. Immediately, the man was sent flying out of the house like a comet. The other thugs stared, utterly shocked by the scene. As he stepped out, the hero told Hans to protect his sister, warning that the area was dangerous. The boy asked what Lewin would do, and the protagonist simply smiled. He said, "I need to earn the meal I just had." The invaders screamed that no matter how strong the kid was, there were over 20 of them. They decided then to attack the young man all at once. But for Lewin, it was even better if they did, because after his duels with Bolvar, he'd gained a new steel-shattering ability. When he used this skill, the moment a sword touched his fist, it was instantly shattered. Lewin then disarmed the invaders, who watched in horror as their blades were utterly destroyed. Normally, the hero would have let them off with a minor punishment, but these men were clearly malicious. So he showed no mercy. One of the thugs lay on the ground, begging for forgiveness, admitting they'd made a mistake, but they were likely only seeking mercy because they realized they couldn't fight back anymore. However, nearby, one of the men grabbed a hostage. Holding a young woman, the coward snarled, "Move 1 inch and I'll slit her throat!" He then began ordering all his cronies to get up and tie up the protagonist. Regaining their nerve, the villains started to obey. Lewin asked if that man was the gang leader, and he confirmed it. And now, he began ordering the young man to kneel before him. Concerned, Lewin wondered what had happened to Hans. He spotted Hans, struck down and wounded on the ground. Lewin knew there was no other choice. He had to handle this. Seeing the boy stir, the bandit snarled, warning him not to come closer. He tightened his grip on the girl's neck, threatening, "I'll kill her!" Pressing the knife closer to her throat, the bandit declared, "Move 1 finger, Lewin, and she dies." Tension gripping him, Lewin cursed the academy for never preparing him for a situation like this. There wasn't enough time for illusion magic, but as he stood, unsure what to do, a flash of light caught his eye. It was Hans's blade. The boy bravely rose and slashed the bandit's back. Despite the blow, the villain remained standing, turning to glare back. Hans's eyes glowed with an unfamiliar aura surging through his body. Then, in an instant, the kidnapper collapsed to the ground. Now the brave young man approached the remaining bandits, warning them, "If you don't want to end up like your boss, get out of here." Fear gripped them, and the bandits scattered, fleeing in terror. Hans's sister rushed to his side, checking if he was all right. His voice trembling, Hans was distraught, unable to believe he had taken a life, but Lewin placed a hand on Hans's shoulder, reassuring him it was necessary. He even offered a gentle word of praise, that blue aura radiating from him. That's sword mastery. The boy had just reached rank 4. Reaching this level meant a warrior was considered high class among knights. Though he couldn't fully control the aura yet, it was a clear sign of his growth. Overjoyed, Hans thanked Lewin, crediting him for everything. He admitted that without Lewin's help, he never would have found that courage. And now, no one would dare bother his sister again. With Hans's incident resolved, Lewin finally set off for the academy. And at last, after a long journey, he was back. Before leaving Ardell, Lewin had wished his vacation would never end, but now he realized how much he'd missed this place. Inside the school, Lewin walked alongside his friend. Jason asked what Lewin had been up to during the break. Lewin wasn't sure how to answer. So much had happened. The Monzo incident, Ingrid's unexpected visit home, and even a dangerous battle against a werewolf. Things best left unsaid here. So Lewin decided it was best to simply say he'd been training. Jason scoffed. Someone as strong as you needs to train? Lewin replied he'd practiced swordsmanship, prompting his friend to tease, vacations are for resting, you know. Besides, swordsmanship is part of the second semester's night classes. But as they chatted, the boys ran into a familiar face. It was Professor Heidel looking unusually serious. Lewin asked what brought the master here. The man then gestured for Lewin to look outside. Apparently, a very important guest had arrived. Lewin noticed the golden sunbird emblem on the banners and numerous knights standing guard. He quickly guessed it might be someone he'd heard about. They had exchanged letters, but Lewin never expected to meet him so soon. A voice announces the grand tournament champion has arrived, demanding the carriage door be opened. Then someone steps out, his feet hitting the ground with purpose. 2 impeccably dressed blonde men appear. The princes have arrived. The first is Prince Kroster Ledian, who, clearly annoyed, warns the other not to meddle in his affairs with Lewin. The second is Prince Foster Ledian, who retorts that no matter how hard his older brother tries, the champion will choose him. Lewin politely introduces himself to the royal highnesses. The two immediately begin to flatter and shower Lewin with gifts and praise. But their intentions are crystal clear. The champion's support would be a massive leap toward securing the heir apparent nomination. Observing the scene, Lewin declares he has a solution and decides all three will discuss it together. The kingdom of Ledian, home to our protagonist and the academy, is currently known as the continent's weakest nation. Despite this, the kingdom remains utterly fractured internally. It's split between the monarchist and reformist factions, fueling their constant internal strife. Most mages are nothing more than pawns in their relentless power struggles. With this context, it's easy to see why they sought out Lewin. The meeting barely begins before arguments erupt over who gets to sit opposite the young man. This childish behavior is precisely why the country is sinking deeper into chaos. Like two spoiled brats, both princes insist on sharing the same chair. Lewin states he's surprised by their visit but glad they came, as he has a request. It is not my intention to choose a lord between the two of you. The two brothers react identically, tension gripping them, but they had anticipated his words, revealing that even the legendary strategist Jagus had refused their offer 3 times. Foster then begins comparing himself to the first emperor, claiming Jagus initially refused but eventually joined him. Changing the subject, the protagonist reveals he has something he needs to do. He intends to return to his homeland, Ardell. This means Lewin doesn't plan to leave the kingdom even after graduation and could become a powerful local force. This news electrifies both princes. However, Ardell's situation is dire, and Lewin believes their highnesses will understand his desire not to abandon his home. Their eyes widen as they grasp the gravity of the matter. Kroster stands, declaring that the kingdom's future forces cannot be burdened with unnecessary worries, promising his full support. Foster, not to be outdone, slams the table, vowing to help him first, with money, food, or whatever he needs. Once again, the two spoiled brothers erupt into an unbearable sibling squabble. However, Lewin will certainly never choose between them. It's far more advantageous to keep them competing. The two continue to bicker, each promising to send the young man a generous gift after his graduation, vying to see who can send the best. Lewin simply reminds them not to forget the matter he mentioned earlier. Fortunately, the princes accept that Lewin won't pick a side and leave. Lewin seizes the opportunity to make a few demands. First, approval for the plans Ardell is currently implementing. He also requests military support, timed for when the subjugation begins. Lewin can already sense the progress and feel the weight of his new authority. Before leaving, Kroster demands everyone's attention. The two princes declare Duke Lewin Ardell as the new protector of the royal family, urging all to show him the respect he deserves. The kingdom's protector is the one who shields the royal family, and no one in the realm would dare disrespect him. Even with this unexpected new title, Lewin is relieved everything resolved without major issues. Lewin's classmates swarm him, showering him with praise and flattery. Jason appears to rescue him from the crowd, warning them they're making him late for class. One student whispers that things are about to get loud, as the protector's position was previously monopolized by the Garyhill family. The other boy quickly shushes his friend, sensing someone approaching. It's Mikkel Garyhill, looking anything but friendly, who demands to know what they were talking about. Lewin notices a shift in the atmosphere nearby. Mikkel is already leveraging his Garyhill family status to belittle others, declaring everyone will fall beneath him. That name triggers a memory for Lewin. The blonde-haired student had faced suspension for using banned substances during exams, but narrowly escaped expulsion, only receiving a 30-day suspension. All thanks to his family's name, Garyhill, which wields immense power in the magical world. Lewin steps closer to Mikkel, stating, "That doesn't sound like what the princes want." He greets him, adding, "Long time no see." Gritting his teeth, Mikkel clearly isn't pleased to see Lewin. He sneers, "Do you think you've won? Just wait and see who gets the last laugh." Jason urges his friend, "Don't pay him any mind. He's probably just reeling from all your achievements." Lewin knows it's pure envy, and such trivial matters aren't worth his consideration. Mikkel's tarnished reputation in this situation directly impacts his family's honor. But Lewin suspects the blonde-haired student is already plotting something, and after all, his opponent is the infamous Garyhill family. For this class, Academy graduates are returning to teach. Lewin is eager to discover who will be coming, and in a way, the protagonist's ominous premonition never fails. His eyes widen, tense with what he sees. The other students in the class also grasp the gravity of the situation. Everyone tenses up, and a heavy atmosphere descends upon the classroom. Jason, too, seems somewhat incredulous at the sight. The professor at the front of the room questions why the atmosphere suddenly shifted. With a smirk, he asks, "Wouldn't that be Lewin Ardell?" He greets him, but Lewin instantly recognizes the man. It's Jekyll Garyhill, a man with an intensely suspicious gaze. The Academy's second semester focuses more on practical application than theory, with classes dedicated to knights. Additionally, graduated students are invited to lecture, sharing tales of current mages. These lectures are well-intentioned, but somehow our hero's sixth sense never fails him, especially since one of the invited alumni for the lecture is Mikkel's older brother, Jekyll Garyhill. Jekyll kicks off, discussing the 14 court mages chosen last year, highlighting that a staggering 11 of them hail from the Garyhill family. As a seasoned veteran, he lays down an undeniable truth for success. Nothing in this world can be conquered alone. He urges the weak to unite, telling students to ditch their ideals and face reality. Jekyll then twists the knife, sneering that sympathizing with Lewin Ardell won't magically make their lives turn out the same. With a sarcastic smirk, he asks our hero what he thinks about that. Jason starts to fire back, but Lewin beats him to it, rising to his feet. "Even if 10 pieces of trash unite with determination," Lewin retorts, "you won't get a masterpiece. You'll just get a colossal pile of garbage." Jekyll's face contorts in fury. "Are you talking about me?" he snarls. Lewin, however, plays innocent, feigning ignorance. The veteran then comments that he heard about Lewin from his brother, calling him an unlucky fellow. But Lewin shoots back, "You must not have heard the part where that unlucky guy crushed Mikkel in the exams." A vein pulsed violently on Jekyll's temple, his rage barely contained. In that instant, it was crystal clear. The bitter rivalry between Lewin Ardell and the Garyhill family was far from over. Jekyll's arrival had instantly shifted the Academy's entire vibe. Low-ranking students, blinded by the Garyhill family's power, clamored to join them, claiming Jekyll had promised them success. Others vehemently declared they'd never work with someone who resorted to fraudulent tactics to win. This split the student body into two warring factions. With the Garyhills constantly trying to humiliate Lewin, and his own rage simmering in response, the Academy's air grew thick with tension and unrest. But then, a golden opportunity to finally put that cheating family in their place presented itself. Our hero was enjoying tea with the illustrious Dean Ignite. Lewin politely inquired about the dean's well-being. As the student representative, he was privy to official discussions. The dean then asked about Lewin's life at the Academy. "Same as always," Lewin replied casually, "except for a certain troublemaker spouting nonsense." Dean Ignat had a strong hunch he knew exactly who Lewin was talking about. The dean, too, held no love for the Garyhills, but their deep connections within the Academy made it difficult to act. This year, They hadn't even been assigned courses that directly affected grades, yet the Gary Hills were still stirring up trouble. Lewin then asked, what kind of student was Jekyll? Jekyll was popular, with stellar grades, and at just 23 he'd become the kingdom's youngest chief mage. But beneath that facade lay a ravenous hunger for power, a desire to conquer at any cost. He'd stop at nothing to get what he wanted. With them together, the dean wanted to discuss the upcoming special classes. Lewin, however, found his mind elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of how to undermine Jekyll. As he pondered, an idea sparked, though he wasn't sure if it would even work. Then, a bolder thought struck him. What if he just asked Jekyll directly? When the classroom door swung open, the students gasped in surprise. The teacher standing before them was none other than Jekyll Garyhill, who looked equally stunned. Lewin, sounding like an adorably earnest junior, announced, I'm here to make a request of you, Jekyll. Jason tried desperately to stifle his laughter, but he couldn't hold it in, bursting out as he stood and pointed at Lewin. It was only a matter of time until he pulled something like this, he declared. Lewin quickly interjected, Please don't misunderstand, it's not what it looks like. Lewin explained that he'd heard Jekyll had rejected the dean's proposal for the night classes. He continued, I came personally to make this request. He pleaded, Please allow the graduates and students to have a joint class. Joint classes were unique. Lecturers participated alongside students, creating an equal playing field for competition. The students buzzed with excitement at the prospect of finally witnessing Jekyll's skills firsthand, and more importantly, it meant he and Lewin would finally face off on the same stage. Lewin had cast his dice. Now the decision rested with his newest adversary. Jekyll, however, saw no reason for such a class. Lewin, who had anticipated this response, asked if the speaker's purpose wasn't to teach. Jekyll was taken aback by the boy's sharp retort. Lewin argued that this very type of class was the best way to impart such knowledge to the freshmen. He reminded Jekyll that he himself had emphasized the Garyhill as a team, so there shouldn't be such a sudden change in his stance. Or perhaps there was another reason, and the man was afraid. With a sinister smile, Jekyll stated that despite winning the tournament, Lewin was still a student with limited experience. But the students began to clamor, saying they also wanted to witness the speaker's skills, practically dying to see his abilities in real combat. Jason slammed his hand on the table, demanding what Jekyll was waiting for, as this was the perfect chance to crush Lewin in front of everyone. Meikle chimed in, saying Lewin would regret it because his brother was truly powerful. But precisely because of that, this respected veteran couldn't refuse. Jekyll then claimed he didn't want to outshine the class representative, which was why he refused, but Lewin urged him to do it. As a junior at the academy, the young man was eager to witness his senior's skills. Jekyll gripped Lewin's hand and said that if that was the case, he would give his all, but Lewin decided to give a taste of his power right there, in that handshake, and Jekyll felt an immense force. With a calm voice, Lewin said, I'm counting on you, senior. Prepare to be impressed. 3 days earlier, the Foldrin Knights had arrived at the academy. In the dean's office, Lewin and Ignat, the dean, discussed the special class. Ignite had considered pairing a graduate with a student, but most had refused. However, the dean stated that if Lewin himself, as a senior, made the request, no one could refuse. Lewin acknowledged the dean's cleverness in devising such a plan. Far from there, students watched the knights arrive. The warriors approached the academy students. Captain Gulter Parante recognized Lewin and asked how he was, revealing he'd heard about the young man's victory at the grand festival. The captain informed them he would speak with the dean and asked the representative to guide the students. Lewin formally introduced himself and asked to speak with the knight's representative, but apparently he was busy. Then the young man noticed a commotion coming from behind the knights. One of the trainee knights, Hans, was being mistreated by his peers. As he approached, the aggressors also recognized him, and Lewin demanded to know what they were doing. Maltiv Gegan introduced himself as the representative of the Foldrin Knights. He was the son of Vengros Gegan, commander of the Gold Knights and the only 7-star knight. Lewin paid little heed to this and demanded Maltiv answer his question first. The hero asked what the boys were doing, and Maltiv replied that Hans wasn't listening, so he was personally training him. Maltiv then noted Lewin's rudeness in showing interest in a nobody, even as he introduced himself. Lewin retorted that Hans was his friend, which made Maltiv laugh. He sneered that the Ardell family wasn't much different from commoners, which was why the two got along so well. Growing irritated, Lewin asked what Maltiv wanted. A voice calling for his brother interrupted their conversation. Lewin finally understood why Maltiv was so hostile towards him. Jekyll, Maltiv's brother, approached, asking why a knight in training was there. He remarked that people of the same kind always stick together. Lewin realized that even if he didn't know Hans, he and Maltiv were destined to clash one day. Captain Gulter Parante began ordering everyone to line up. The joint class was about to start. Before the main lesson, they needed to form teams. Each group would consist of 2 academy students and 1 knight. The two obnoxious Gary Hill family members complained they didn't want to participate and started planning to form a group with each other and call Mikkel. Meanwhile, poor Hans thought no one would want to team up with him until Lewin approached and asked the boy to join his team. Despite Hans's insistence that he was too weak, Lewin said they were friends after all, which brought a genuine smile to Hans's face. Jason stepped forward, saying if they were forming a group among friends, then he should be included too. The three introduced themselves and decided to drop formalities from now on. Lewin explained that their goal shouldn't just be to get good scores. Glancing at his newest problem, he knew they'd have to deal with that annoying guy. After the teams were formed, there was a brief break. Concerned, Lewin asked if Hans was okay after the assault and if he didn't prefer to go to the infirmary. Hans refused, saying it wouldn't be good for Lewin to act like he knew him, as many people disliked him. But with a firm voice, Lewin reiterated that he'd already said they were friends, so there was no need to be cautious. The hero asked if Maltiv was the student Hans had mentioned that day. Lewin used his player's vision to learn more about Maltiv, a 4-star knight and highly skilled. However, Lewin knew something others didn't: the blue aura that surrounded Hans's body when he killed the gang leader, indicating immense potential. Even if his status window only showed 3 stars, there was still room for massive growth. Lewin said he was thinking of dealing with Maltiv soon, and that Hans couldn't just keep getting beaten up. He believed Hans could defeat his aggressor. But Maltiv overheard their conversation and approached, furious. He ordered Hans to come closer, but trembling, Hans refused. The bully said that being close to Lewin didn't make him special. Drawing his sword, he asked if Hans had gone crazy after so many beatings. Hans also started to draw his sword, but Lewin told him not to fight. He said they weren't equals, so Hans didn't need to act like a true bastard. This wasn't the right day to fight. They should wait for the perfect opportunity to wipe him off the map. But Maltiv didn't care and charged towards them. Lewin then stepped forward. However, before the hero could land a blow on the bully, someone else did, sending Maltiv flying with incredible speed. With wide eyes, Lewin recognized that knight. It was Gulter Pirante, who had delivered a powerful kick to his own student. Disappointed, Gulter asked what Maltiv thought he was doing. The bully started screaming that the others had started everything, but the captain questioned him for drawing his sword. Because of this, his position as representative would be revoked. Stubbornly, the boy said that if his position was revoked, his father wouldn't let it slide. The captain knew this, but also knew that if Maltiv's father found out his son's sword was drawn to hurt someone, he might even faint. Lewin could see in the boy's eyes how much he feared his father. But either way, Gulter couldn't let the situation go unpunished. It seems our protagonist has been noticed. The first joint training session kicks off, focusing on combat and defense. Gulter taught them how to exploit a mage's casting time, using that weakness to neutralize them. Meanwhile, Professor Heidel demonstrated how to predict knight movements and evade their attack range. Each group practiced these techniques, and the class was progressing smoothly. Maltiv tells Jekyll he's furious with Lewin and still has to train in an environment full of people like him. The long-haired guy even tries to suggest they skip training, but he doesn't sound very confident. He feels immense pressure, standing before all those students with high expectations for his skills. Hans asks the group to take a short break, and Jason agrees. But Lewin declares he feels like he's just warming up. Someone approaches, asking if the young man isn't too tired and could spare a moment. It's Sir Gulter, who says he has something he'd like to confirm. He states that Lewin's swordsmanship level couldn't possibly have been self-taught. Our protagonist realizes just how cunning the knight captain is. Gulter then asks for a favor, to personally duel Lewin Ardell. A bit tense, our hero can't quite grasp what's happening. He explains that he's not even a knight, so he wouldn't stand a chance against the captain. But Gulter clarifies he's not asking the young man to win. He's simply asking Lewin to teach the students there, as from what he's observed, no one in the vicinity possesses greater swordsmanship skills than him. Lewin knows being suddenly thrust into the spotlight can be tricky, but it's a golden opportunity. If our protagonist performs well here, he can use this chance to establish his dominance. Gripping his sword firmly, our hero declares he's eager to learn from Sir Gulter. The captain is pleased by the young man's stance. Then, without further ado, Gulter launches his attack, charging straight at him. The knight students realize their instructor is truly serious, unleashing his full speed. Our protagonist knows that if he's hit by these attacks, not even his bones would be left. But he manages a successful block that stuns everyone around. Gulter then hurls him back with the sheer force of his sword strike. The captain can barely believe the young man's skill and demands to know where Lewin learned such swordsmanship. Curious, he suggests it might be a name the young man can't reveal. But our protagonist is conflicted about whether to tell the truth or not. It's not like his swordsmanship master is in hiding, so he utters the name Bolvar Peyton, leaving everyone everyone's stunned. There isn't a single knight or apprentice who hasn't heard of Bolvar, the legendary lancer. Now, all that skill made perfect sense to Gulter. As per the captain's request, Lewin explains how he met the legendary warrior, but someone doesn't seem to buy the story. Maltiv stomps forward, face twisted in a scowl, and declares it's all a lie. He claims his father already warned him that Bolvar Peyton is dead and that the young man has no proof his story is true. But our protagonist has no interest in proving such a thing. The redhead retorts that even if it were true, it wouldn't matter, because the strongest in the kingdom is still his father. Now everything clicks for our hero. The strongest officially recognized knight is Maltiv's father, but if Bolvar were still recognized as alive, the official hierarchy could be completely upended. It's this status that the bully is worried about, but Lewin tells him he can think whatever he wants because Sir Bolvar doesn't care about those idiotic rankings. The young man's words hit Maltiv like a punch to the gut. He can barely contain his rage and threatens to draw his sword, challenging Lewin to a duel with real blades. The young man's gaze twists with pure fury. Gulter snaps at the boy, ordering him to cut the dramatics. "Do you really want to fight, Lewin?" he demands. When the redhead confirms, the captain announces the first combat training match, Lewin's group versus Maltiv's, set for tomorrow. The next day dawned, bringing the highly anticipated duel. Teams geared up for the first match. Jekyll approached the protagonist's team, asking if he'd prepared well. The hero, however, grew suspicious of the sudden inquiry. Jekyll quickly dismissed it, telling him to ignore the question and just give his all in the upcoming match. But the moment the starting signal blared, Jekyll lunged at the boy with blinding speed. Lewin barely dodged the assault, but his eyes widened in shock at his opponent's speed. No normal person could move like that. It was almost ridiculous, fueled by his opponent's sheer desperation to win. Activating his player's gaze, the protagonist instantly saw it. The long-haired foe had brought 6 hidden artifacts into the match. The night before, Sir Vengras and Commissioner Josh had a hushed conversation. Vengras Gegan mentioned his son, Ignat, had been invited to give a special lecture at the academy. Commissioner Josh Garyhill replied that Ignat had personally invited him, then asked if the boy was doing all right. Vengras sighed, confirming he was, despite all the headaches he usually causes, which is why Mr. Gulter is disciplining him. But the commissioner's true purpose was to discuss Lewin, the representative. Vengras admitted he'd heard the boy won the grand tournament and had caught the Empire's eye. To Josh, a mere bumpkin from Ardell had no business treading such a successful path. He believed the boy needed to be stopped from capturing the prince's attention. Conveniently, Garyhill's and Maltiv's sons were in the very group set to face the representative. Then, the idea of giving Maltiv an artifact was floated, a suggestion that visibly startled Vengra. He was shocked that the commissioner was openly suggesting fraud. Josh argued that if they truly wanted to crush that brat, it was a necessary evil. His own sons would also receive artifacts. Then he dropped Bolvar Peyton's name into the conversation, leaving Vengra even more stunned. Josh explained he'd heard Bolvar Peyton was still alive and had even taught Lewin swordsmanship. With the boy already favored by the princes and now having trained under a legendary knight, both Vengras's and Josh's positions were in grave danger. Convinced, Vengra handed a necklace to the commissioner, hoping it would yield good results. The commissioner flashed a wicked grin, assuring him it would, adding, "All for the good of the kingdom, of course." Back in the battle, the protagonist's opponent exuded smug confidence. As he effortlessly immobilized Lewin's entire team, he sneered, "Why were you so confident with such pathetic skills?" Jason and Hans were completely ensnared, along with the rest of Lewin's squad. The hero knew they'd try something, but never imagined they'd stoop so low as to cheat. Maltiv taunted, "Show me your skills already, hero, or I'll beat you until there's nothing left." Jason screamed desperately for Lewin to dodge the incoming blow. Lewin stomped his foot, straining to break free from his binds. Just as Maltiv's sword reached him, he unleashed a burst of mana, propelling himself into a desperate leap. But Lewin noticed something off, wondering how a wooden sword could feel so incredibly hard. The artifact Maltiv received from Sir Vengras was the Amulet of Fortitude, a simple necklace designed to enhance weapons, making them incredibly durable and sharp. Maltiv warns that this time, he won't miss his strike. Since the sword is as hard as steel, Lewin decides to use his new skill, and with just one punch, he shatters his opponent's sword, leaving Maltiv stunned and about to take a punch to the face. The blow is strong enough to send Maltiv flying right next to Jekyll. Jekyll, his teammate, is just as dumbfounded by the protagonist's display of strength. It makes him wonder if it's even possible, because even with the boys using artifacts, the hero isn't breaking a sweat. As he dons his gauntlet, Lewin declares he was planning to go easy on them, but that won't be possible. Since it's come to this, he'll take this fight very seriously, summoning the ogre Kunkan. Even Professor Heidel and Gulter are shocked by the turn of events. Jekyll can't believe his eyes. An ogre appears beside the protagonist, and all the students start fleeing in terror. Lewin approaches his cheating opponent and tells him to end this now, and it seems 6 artifacts aren't enough for you. Lewin gestures with his arm, and the ogre's spirit moves with him, plucking all the necklaces Maltiv was wearing with a single finger and tossing them to the ground, exposing his dirty tricks for all to see. The students can't understand why Maltiv would use so many artifacts, especially when facing a junior. Not knowing what else to do, Jekyll shouts that the Gary Hills won't stand for this. With a look of disdain, Lewin says, "First it was Michael, and now the older brother. Who's next? Maybe Lord Josh Garyhill himself?" This infuriates his opponent, who gets up and charges at him. But Maltiv doesn't even get close before he's flicked on the forehead. Lewin says, "You're making too much noise, go lie down for a bit." Then, Strang appears and asks if Lewin is sure about this, if it's really okay to reveal the ogre to everyone like this, because even the dean looks shocked. But it's not like Lewin could hide him forever. Anyway, what's done is done. Jekyll Garyhill is completely unconscious, and it seems Meikle fainted from fear after seeing the ogre. This means the winner is already decided. Even Gulter is surprised by what happened, but he starts to announce the results. But before he can, Hans interrupts the announcement, carrying 2 swords. He shouts, "The duel isn't over yet. Maltiv's sword only broke, but he can use another." The fearless Hans tells Maltiv to take a sword. In a mix of shock and rage, Maltiv asks if his classmate has gone crazy, insulting him further by calling him a dirty commoner. But there's no mistaking it. The aura Hans is emanating is true sword mastery.